Welcome to our deep dive into the life of Li Bai, the poetic immortal. You've probably heard the legends, the poems dripping with moonlight and wine. But today we're going beyond the myths, using historical sources to paint a more nuanced picture of this iconic figure. Think of it like separating fact from fiction, getting to know the real Li Bai, his ambitions, motivations, complexities.
Yeah.
And trust me, there's some surprising details that might just change how you see him.
Oh, go.
We're diving into excerpts from a lecture series all about Li Bai.
Cool.
Get ready to uncover the man behind the legend.
What's so fascinating about Li Bai is that his life story has been romanticized and embellished over the centuries.
Right.
It speaks to his enduring popularity, but it also makes it tricky to understand who he really was.
Okay, so let's unpack this first up, the mystery of his origins. Where was Li Bai actually born?
The prevailing view is that he was born in Sui, a place in Central Asia that was under Tang Dynasty control at the time. Now, here's where it gets interesting. His family was supposedly exiled there. Because of an ancestor's crime, we don't know the specifics of the crime, which adds to the intrigue, but it paints a very different picture of his early life than the typical, born in a peaceful village narrative.
Exile, mystery, intrigue already. This is shaping up to be a fascinating deep dive.
Yeah.
And what about his immediate family? Was his father part of this mysterious past?
His father, Li Kai, is a bit of an enigma. Li Bai rarely mentions him, and that silence speaks volumes. Many scholars believe Li Kai was a merchant.
So what's the big deal about being a merchant?
Well, in Tang Dynasty, China's society was structured with a heavy emphasis on agriculture.
Right.
Commerce was seen as a less respectable profession, almost like a social stain. Merchants faced limited opportunities.
Wow.
They couldn't even take the imperial exams, which were the gateway to a successful career in government.
Wow, that puts Li Bai's silence about his father into perspective. It's like trying to hide a family secret that could derail your entire career.
Yeah.
But this social hierarchy also helps us understand Li Bai's ambition.
Yeah.
It's like he was trying to break free from the limitations imposed by his family background.
Precisely. He even claimed to be a descendant of Li Hao, a ruler of the southern Tang Dynasty. Claiming this lineage, whether true or not, would have elevated his social status and allowed him to distance himself from his merchant roots. It was a way to align himself with the political elite.
Right.
And open doors that might otherwise be closed to him.
So we have Li Bai, this ambitious young man trying to escape the shadow of his father's profession.
Yeah.
But what did he actually look like? Were those famous portraits accurate? No. The ones with the flowing robes and the dreamy expression.
Sadly, those portraits, especially the popular one from the Ming Dynasty, are not accurate representations.
Really?
To get a true sense of his appearance, we have to rely on descriptions from people who actually knew him. Imagine, if you will, someone with piercing eyes described by his friend Wei Hao as bright like those of a fierce tiger. He was known for his eloquence and outgoing personality.
That's a pretty vivid image. It's almost like you can hear him reciting his poems, captivating everyone with his words and presence. It's interesting how his personality seems to match his poetic style, that free-flowing, expressive energy. And speaking of personality, we can't ignore Li Bai's deep connection to Taoism. It wasn't just a hobby for him, it was a way of life.
Absolutely. He grew up in an area steeped in Taoist tradition and even received formal ordination. This spiritual foundation permeates his poetry, giving that air of immortality that he's so famous for.
Right.
You can see it in his themes of nature transcendence and the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment.
It's fascinating how his personal beliefs shaped his artistic expression. And speaking of shaping, remember that story about Li Bai's mother dreaming of Venus, the Bai star, before he was born? It's not just a cool anecdote. It directly links to his name and the whole poetic immortal moniker. This connection between his name and a celestial body associated with poetry and immortality reinforces the image of him as someone destined for greatness, chosen by fate itself.
It certainly adds a mythical layer to his persona. It's a beautiful example of how biography and mythology intertwine in Li Bai's life story. But as with all myths, we need to separate them from the historical reality.
Which brings us to a popular childhood story that we need to address, the one about Li Bai encountering an old woman grinding an iron pestle into a needle. It's often used to illustrate the power of perseverance.
Right.
But is there any truth to it?
While inspiring, this story is likely apocryphal. Here's why it's not mentioned in any Tang Dynasty records. It first appears in the Song Dynasty centuries later. Plus, Li Bai himself, who loved to recount his youthful adventures, never mentioned it. And if you dig deeper, the story claims this encounter happened in Mei Prefecture, but there's no evidence Li Bai ever studied there. Historical records place him in completely different locations during that period of his life.
So this feel-good story about perseverance might just be a later invention, a way to add to the legend of Li Bai. But it's interesting how this debunking reveals something important about our approach to history. We shouldn't just accept stories at face value, especially when it comes to legendary figures. Now, let's talk about another aspect of Li Bai's self-proclaimed persona, his chivalrous past.
Okay.
He even claimed to have killed several people in his youth.
Wow.
Was he a secret assassin poet, or was this just youthful bravado?
It's a question that has puzzled scholars for centuries. While Li Bai romanticized the idea of being a valiant swordsman, the evidence suggests this was more fantasy than reality.
So no secret assassin poet. What makes you say that?
Well, take his famous poem, The Ballad of the Gallant Knights, with its lines about killing one man in 10 paces. It's actually an allusion to a passage in Zhuangzi, a philosophical text. It's not a literal recounting of his own exploits.
So he was borrowing someone else's badassery to make himself look good. That's quite a revelation. And I guess killing people in the Tang Dynasty, even in self-defense, would have had serious consequences. He wouldn't have gotten away with it so easily.
Exactly. And let's not forget that incident where he was besieged by hooligans in Chengdu and had to be rescued by a friend, not exactly the actions of a seasoned swordsman. This suggests that his swordsmanship might not have been as exceptional as he portrayed it.
Okay, so maybe his swordsmanship was more poetic license than lived experience. But what about his actual ambitions? We know he wanted to make a name for himself, but what did that look like in the context of the Tang Dynasty?
Li Bai, like many intellectuals of his time, craved a career in government. His poems were a means to an end, a way to gain recognition and ultimately secure a position of power.
So he wasn't just content with being a famous poet, he wanted to be a politician.
You could say that, and in ancient China, a government position was the most respected path to success. It was how you served your country, how you left a legacy. His desire wasn't unusual. Even his friend, the poet Du Fu, shared this ambition.
It's fascinating how societal values shape individual aspirations. It makes you realize that Li Bai's ambition wasn't just personal, it was deeply ingrained in the culture of his time. Now on to a more personal aspect of his life. His 4 marriages, even for someone living in ancient times, 4 marriages is a lot.
Yeah.
What was going on there?
His first marriage to the granddaughter of former Prime Minister Xu Shi is particularly revealing. Why would a talented man like Li Bai choose to become a live-in son-in-law? It was almost social suicide for a man back then.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There must have been something more to this marriage than meets the eye.
It's likely he saw this marriage as a strategic move. The Xu family had powerful political connections. That could have been invaluable to Li Bai's career. It was a calculated risk, a gamble for a chance to climb the social ladder.
So he was using marriage as a stepping stone to power.
It's certainly possible, and while he expressed affection for his Xu wife in his poetry, the societal expectations and the emphasis on male dominance must have created internal conflict for him. In some of his poems, you can sense a tension between his desire for independence and his reliance on his in-laws' influence.
It's like he was caught between his personal feelings and his ambition. That inner struggle must have been difficult to navigate. But it's interesting how his poetry offers us glimpses into these personal dilemmas. What about his other marriages? Did they also serve a strategic purpose?
His second marriage to a woman surnamed Liu ended badly. It seems she wasn't happy with his lack of success in the political arena.
And how did Li Bai react to this criticism?
He wrote a scathing poem about her, comparing her to the short-sighted wife of Zhu Meichen, a historical figure whose wife divorced him because she thought he was a failure. It's quite a brutal takedown, even for a poet.
Ouch. Talk about adding insult to injury. It seems like Li Bai was quite sensitive to criticism, especially when it came to his ambitions. But these failed marriages highlight an important point.
Yeah.
They didn't actually help him achieve his political goals. So what's a frustrated, ambitious poet to do?
He sets his sights on Shangyin, the heart of the Tang Dynasty. He's ready to make his mark on the world, and he believes the capital city is the place to do it.
It's like he's leaving behind the disappointments of his past and venturing into a new chapter full of possibilities and challenges.
Exactly. He's a small-town poet trying to make it in the big city, armed with his talent, his ambition, and a trunk full of poems.
But how does a small-town poet break into the elite circles of the most powerful city in the empire?
Chengdu, during this period, the 18th year of the Yuan era, was a hub of culture and economic prosperity. Think of it as a magnet for scholars, artists, and ambitious individuals from all over the empire,
Right.
all vying for a chance to climb the social ladder for Li Bai. This meant networking, visiting influential figures, showcasing his poetry, hoping someone would recognize his talent and give him a chance.
So he's basically playing the social game, going to all the right parties, reciting his poems, trying to make connections that could lead to a career in government. But did this strategy work?
Well, there's a theory that he was initially snubbed by a high-ranking official named Zhang Ji, who was married to a princess. Imagine trying to break into the political scene and being dismissed by someone connected to the emperor himself.
That's a tough break. But why would Zhongji even bother meeting with Li Bai in the first place? Was Li Bai already that famous?
Li Bai's poetry was starting to gain some recognition, so he wasn't a complete unknown, however it's possible. Zhang Ji, accustomed to being courted by ambitious scholars,
Right.
didn't see Li Bai as someone worth his time or patronage.
So according to this theory, Li Bai's first taste of Chang'an was a bitter one. Did this setback discourage him?
It's said that Zhang Ji sent Li Bai to a remote location, the detached palace of Princess YuZhen. Now, while it was a palace, it was far removed from the bustling center of Chang'an, almost like being exiled to the mountains. And we have some poems from this period that get us a glimpse into Li Bai's state of mind.
That's really interesting. It's like we can use his poetry as a window into his personal experiences and emotional responses to the challenges he faced. So what do these poems reveal about his time at the detached palace?
In his two poems presented to Wei King at the detached palace of YuZhen, Li Bai expresses his frustration and disappointment. He even hints at his future greatness, almost like he's saying, "You might ignore me now, but you'll regret it later."
There's that ambition again peeking through his poetry. But wait, you mentioned Wei Zhangking, who is this? I thought Zhang Ji was the one who supposedly snubbed Li Bai.
That's the intriguing part. Recent research suggests that Zhang Ji might not have been the one who sent Li Bai to the detached palace. The identity of Wei King is actually up for debate.
Okay.
Some scholars believe he might have been the husband of Princess YuZhen herself.
So instead of being intentionally snubbed by Zhang Ji, Li Bai might have been caught in the crossfire of palace politics. It's like he stumbled into a situation he didn't fully understand, a victim of circumstance rather than personal malice.
That's a possibility we can't ignore, but regardless of who was responsible, this first trip to Chang'an didn't go as Li Bai had planned. However, it's important to remember that setbacks and detours are often part of a larger journey.
Absolutely. And for someone like Li Bai, who is deeply connected to nature and the Taoist philosophy of embracing change and finding opportunity in adversity, this period might have been a time for reflection and growth. What did he do after this initial disappointment?
He didn't let this setback define him. Instead, he embarked on a period of extensive travels, expanding his horizons and composing poems inspired by the people he met and the landscapes he encountered. It's during these travels that he forms a crucial friendship with a man named Yuan Dunqi.
A new character enters the story. Tell me more about Yuan Dunqi. What role did he play in Li Bai's life?
Yuan Dunqi was a Taoist like Li Bai and a descendant of the Northern Wei imperial clan. This means he was well connected. But more importantly, he recognized Li Bai's talent and became a staunch supporter. He even introduced Li Bai to Princess YuZhen, the same princess whose detached palace Li Bai had stayed at a few years earlier.
Hold on. The princess, who was potentially involved in his earlier misfortune, becomes his patron. Talk about a plot twist. It seems like fate, or perhaps just coincidence, played a hand in Li Bai's journey.
Indeed, remember how during his first trip to Chang'an, Li Bai was trying to get Princess YuZhen's attention? Well, she had a reputation for recommending talented individuals to the emperor. This connection facilitated by Yuan Dunqi proved to be a turning point in Li Bai's career.
It's almost like a second chance or redemption arc. So Princess YuZhen, impressed by Li Bai's talent and his growing fame, decides to recommend him to the emperor.
Exactly. And this, my friend, is how Li Bai finally lands his dream job, Hanlin academician.
Dream job, from what I've heard, it wasn't exactly all about. It was cracked up to be, what did being a Hanlin academician actually entail?
You're right, it might sound impressive, but the Hanlin Academy during this period was more of a court entertainment institution than a powerful political body. Li Bai's primary role was to compose poems for the emperor's amusement.
The irony, this ambitious poet, desperate for a chance to serve his country, ends up being the emperor's personal bard. It must have been a bittersweet experience.
It certainly wasn't the path to political glory he'd envisioned. However, it did bring him closer to the center of power, closer to the emperor himself. It also provided him with unique insights into the inner workings of the Tang court, a perspective that would later inform his poetry.
Now, this is where things get really interesting. We're talking about Li Bai at the height of his fame, mingling with the elite composing poems for the emperor. I can almost imagine the lavish feasts, the flowing wine, the impromptu verses recited under the moonlight.
Ah. But before we get swept away by the romanticized image, we need to address a couple of popular anecdotes associated with this period of Li Bai's life. First, there's the story about him translating a diplomatic letter written in strange characters, and then composing a scathing letter to the barbarians in the south to warn the vassal state.
Oh, yeah, I've heard the one Li Bai, the multilingual badass, putting those barbarians in their place with his poetic prowess. It's a great story, but is there any truth to it?
Unfortunately, it's highly implausible the Tang government had professional interpreters for diplomatic matters. They wouldn't have relied on a poet, no matter how talented, to decipher a foreign language.
So Li Bai, the diplomat extraordinaire, was just a figment of someone's imagination.
It seems so. While he did write diplomatic letters for the emperor, the infamous letter to the barbarians in the south is likely a later fabrication. It's one of those stories that adds to the legend but doesn't hold up under historical scrutiny.
Another myth busted. What about that other famous anecdote, the one where Li Bai makes the powerful eunuch Gao Lishi and the imperial consort Yang Guifei take off his boots?
Ugh. That one, if you recall our deep dive on Yang Guifei, you'll remember we debunked that story already.
Yeah.
It's another example of later generations embellishing Li Bai's legend, adding a touch of rebelliousness to his character.
So no drunken antics, no humiliating powerful figures, no epic showdowns with barbarians. What was Li Bai actually doing during his time at court? Was he just composing lighthearted verses for the emperor's entertainment?
He was composing poetry, but his work from this period reveals a growing awareness of the problems within the Tang Dynasty. Emperor Xuanzong was becoming increasingly detached from the realities of governing the military. Tang was weakening, and corruption was rampant. Li Bai, with his sharp intellect and keen observation skills, couldn't ignore these issues.
So did he speak truth to power? Did he use his poetry to criticize the emperor and his inner circle?
He did, but in a subtle and allegorical way. Direct criticism would have been too risky. Instead, he disguised his critiques as observations about nature or reflections on history, using metaphors and symbolism to convey his message.
That's incredibly clever. It's like he was playing a dangerous game, using poetry as a weapon against the very people who employed him. Can you give me an example of this?
His poem, The Moon Over the Mountain Pass, is a great example on the surface. It's a poem about homesickness, but if you read between the lines, you can sense a subtle critique of Emperor Xuanzong's costly military campaigns. It's a masterful example of how Li Bai used his art to express his concerns without directly challenging authority.
So he was walking a tightrope, balancing his artistic integrity with his political ambitions. It's a fascinating glimpse into the complexities of his character, how he navigated the treacherous waters of court life. But this delicate balance couldn't last forever, could it?
You're right. Despite his success as a court poet, Li Bai still yearned for something more, a position where he could have a real impact on the direction of the empire. He wanted to be more than just an entertainer. He wanted to be a policymaker, a force for change.
And this desire leads him to set his sights on a new goal, a position that could finally fulfill his political ambitions.
Exactly, and this, my friend, is where we'll pick up in the final chapter of our deep dive.
Okay, so where do we leave off?
Oh, we left Li Bai at a crossroads. Remember, he's achieved fame and recognition as a court poet, but his true ambition to shape the destiny of the Tang Dynasty remains unfulfilled.
So what happens next?
Well, he sets his sights on the prestigious position of Zongshu Shiren.
Remind me what's so special about this position.
The Zongshu Shiren was basically the emperor's confidential secretary, responsible for drafting imperial edicts. It was a direct line to the emperor, a position of immense power and influence.
So Li Bai sees this as his chance to finally break free from the gilded cage of the Hanlin Academy and step into a role where he can actually wield some real power.
Precisely, and given his literary talents and growing reputation, he might have even had a real shot at securing the position.
But I sense a but coming.
But he failed.
He didn't get the job. Why not? Was he sabotaged by jealous rivals? Did someone like Yang Guifei or Gao Lishi intervene?
The historical records are silent on the exact reasons for his failure, which makes it all the more intriguing. We're left to speculate, to examine the circumstances, and Li Bai's own character to understand why he couldn't grasp this opportunity.
Okay, let's play detective then. What are some of the possible explanations for his failure? What worked against him?
Well, his background might have been a factor. Remember, he was the son of a merchant, a class looked down upon by the elite. No matter how talented he was, his social standing might have been an insurmountable obstacle.
It's like a classic underdog story gone wrong. He couldn't escape the shadow of his past, even with all his talent and ambition. Are there other possibilities?
His personality might have also played a role. He was known for being outspoken, impulsive, even a bit of a loose cannon. This might not have sat well with the people in charge of appointing the Zhongshu Sharon, who were probably looking for someone more discreet and predictable.
It's interesting how the same qualities that made him a brilliant poet, his free spirit, his unconventional thinking, might have been liabilities in the world of court politics.
Exactly. It's a reminder that talent and ambition aren't always enough. Sometimes circumstances and personality traits can derail even the most promising individuals.
So what happens to Li Bai after this setback? Does he give up on his political dreams and just focus on poetry?
Well, he remains at court for a few more years, but his disillusionment grows. His poetry takes on a different tone, more melancholic, filled with a sense of longing and unfulfilled potential. It's as if he's realizing that the world of politics, the world he so desperately wanted to be part of, is ultimately incompatible with his true nature.
It's a heart-wrenching realization, isn't it, to realize that the path you've been striving for is not the right one for you. But sometimes these realizations can lead to unexpected and even more fulfilling journeys.
And that's exactly what happens with Li Bai. He eventually leaves Chang'an, not just because of his failed political ambitions, but also because he's increasingly troubled by the direction the Tang Dynasty is heading in.
So he's not just leaving behind a failed career, but also a corrupt and crumbling empire.
Yes, his departure marks a turning point in his life. He embraces a life of wandering, immersing himself in nature, seeking inspiration from the landscapes and the people he encounters.
It's like he's shedding the constraints of court life and embracing his true identity as a poet, a free spirit who finds solace and inspiration in the natural world.
Exactly, and it's during this period that he produces some of his most powerful and enduring poetry works that reflect his profound understanding of human nature, his appreciation for the beauty of the world, and his deep-seated longing for something beyond the material realm.
So Li Bai, the poetic immortal, leaves behind the world of politics and embraces a life of artistic freedom and spiritual exploration. It's a fitting end to his story, a reminder that sometimes the greatest journeys are those that lead us away from our initial ambitions and towards a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
His story reminds us that success doesn't always look the way we expect it to. It's about staying true to yourself, embracing change, and finding meaning in the unexpected twists and turns of life's journey.
And perhaps that's the most valuable lesson we can learn from Li Bai's life. If you found this deep dive as fascinating as we did,
I know I did.
Then be sure to check out the original lectures and let us know what you thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating and complex life of Li Bai, the poetic immortal. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking out the extraordinary in the everyday. Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're going to be looking into the world of Li Bai.
Oh, Li Bai.
One of China's most celebrated poets. And wait, I mean, who doesn't love Li Bai?
Yeah.
So we're working with excerpts from a lecture here and really looking at his life. And what's interesting is that this lecture goes beyond like the usual biographical, like, oh, he was born here and then he did this. And it really digs into the why.
Right.
His motivations, his ambitions, his relationships.
Yeah.
Even those, almost mythical stories about his death. It's going to be quite a journey, I think.
Yeah, what's so fascinating about Li Bai is that he really does embody the Tang Dynasty, this period of like incredible cultural flourishing, but even in a golden age, things aren't always easy. And Li Bai's story is kind of a testament to that.
Let's start with this ambition of his to be a Zhongshu Sharon.
Okay.
So this was a highly influential position in the emperor's court. It seems like that was like the ultimate goal for him, wasn't it?
It was this position that brought not just power, but also a huge amount of prestige. I mean, imagine you're this brilliant poet in a society that really valued scholarship and proximity to power. So this role was like the pinnacle of success,
But he never achieved it, did he? It wasn't just down to this rival Zhang Ji slandering him.
Yeah.
Like some accounts claim there was more to it.
There was a lot more to it. While the rivalry might have played a role, point at Li Bai's own personality as perhaps being the bigger obstacle.
Interesting.
We have to remember this is a time when Confucian ideals of restraint and decorum were like paramount, especially for court officials.
Right.
And Li Bai wasn't exactly known for holding back, was he?
No, No, I mean, we've all heard the stories about his love for alcohol and just his
He's in a peg, so.
unrestrained behavior. Yeah.
Exactly. And it wasn't just like a personal quirk, this behavior. It actually went against the very principles that were expected of someone, in a position of authority.
Right.
I mean, the Tang legal code
Yeah.
specifically forbade those known for excessive drinking from holding sensitive government positions.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
even though Emperor Zhuangzong clearly admired his talent,
Yeah.
I mean, we see that in the New Stele inscription,
Right.
he couldn't overlook those transgressions, especially for a role like that, which demanded discretion.
Exactly. Li Bai is that here to achieve his political ambitions is this really fascinating example of how societal expectations and personal behavior could just clash even for someone with these extraordinary gifts.
It makes me wonder if those personality traits that might have hindered him in the political arena
Uh-huh.
actually fueled his poetry. What do you think?
I think that's totally possible. His unrestrained nature, his, emotional intensity, might have found an outlet in his poetry that wasn't acceptable in that formal world of the court.
Right.
It raises this question, do you think his poetry would have been as powerful if he had conformed to those societal expectations?
That's a tough one to answer.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about another interesting relationship
Okay.
that I think sheds light on Li Bai's personality, his dynamic with Du Fu.
Yes.
Now, these were both giants of Tang Dynasty poetry, but their relationship wasn't exactly straightforward, was it?
No, not at all. And remember when they met, Li Bai was already like this superstar,
Yeah.
while Du Fu was still kind of finding his voice. The lecture really highlights this by pointing out the sheer volume of poems that Du Fu dedicated to Li Bai, filled with admiration for his older contemporary.
And yet Li Bai only wrote a few in return, and often with this like playful, almost teasing tone.
Yeah.
It's almost as if he didn't quite grasp the depth
Right.
of Du Fu's talent.
It's a fascinating observation. I mean, perhaps Li Bai, with his preference for this kind of spontaneous, expressive style, didn't fully appreciate Du Fu's more meticulous and carefully constructed versus, their contrasting approaches to poetry might have just created a barrier between them, despite their shared passion for the art form.
It makes you think about how our own preferences and biases can sometimes prevent us from fully appreciating different styles of art.
Absolutely. It's a reminder to be open to different perspectives and to recognize that brilliance can manifest in many forms. And it's also interesting to consider, how posterity has judged them.
Right.
I mean, both are now considered giants of Chinese poetry, but during their lifetimes, their status and recognition were quite different.
Speaking of dramatic shifts in fortune, let's talk about the Anlushan Rebellion.
Okay.
This major historical event that really deeply impacted Li Bai's life. This is where things take kind of a darker turn, don't they?
They do. The Anlushan Rebellion was this devastating civil war that nearly brought down the Tang Dynasty. It threw the empire into chaos.
Yeah.
And Li Bai, along with his wife, who was a member of the imperial clan, was forced to flee south to escape the fighting.
And that's when he gets that fateful invitation from Leland, father of the Prince of Yang.
Right.
Talk about being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
It wasn't just bad timing. It was a very complex political situation that Li Bai just seemed to misjudge.
Really?
Li Lin was caught in this power struggle with his brother, the newly crowned Emperor Taizong.
So Li Bai's stepping into a hornet's nest, essentially.
Yeah, pretty much.
What made him accept the offer, especially with his wife advising against it?
It seems that his yearning for political influence just ultimately clouded his judgment. He saw an opportunity to finally gain the power that he had always desired, even if it meant aligning himself with someone whose ambitions were clearly at odds with the new emperor.
And that decision would have far-reaching consequences, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. To understand the gravity of Li Bai's choice, we need to delve deeper into what Li Lin was actually trying to achieve.
Okay.
And this is where the story takes a truly dramatic turn.
Li Lin wasn't just, content with being a governor.
Right. He held this crucial position in Jiangling, which was like a hub for, taxes and resources flowing back to the capital. But instead of, remaining loyal to his brother, Emperor Taizong, he decides to kind of leverage this position to build up his own power base in the south.
So he was essentially using the empire's resources to fuel his own rebellion.
That's right. And Li Bai got caught right in the middle of it. He even wrote this poem
Oh, wow.
comparing Li Lin to Emperor Taizong, this legendary Tang ruler known for his military prowess.
Hmm.
So this suggests that Li Bai might have been, swept up in Li Lin's ambitions,
Hmm.
maybe blinded by this prospect of finally achieving the political influence he always craved.
It's a reminder that even the most brilliant minds can be susceptible to manipulation, especially when their own desires,
Yeah.
cloud their judgment. But this rebellion couldn't have ended well, could it?
It didn't. Emperor Suzong saw his brother's actions as a direct threat, so he ordered Li Lin to relinquish his command and travel to Chengdu. But Li Lin refused. He chose to march his troops down the Yangtze River
Whoa.
towards Jinling, hoping to kind of outmaneuver his brother and ultimately seize the throne.
So a full-blown civil war was brewing within the already fractured empire.
Essentially, yes. And what's even more fascinating is that Li Bai's old friend Gao Shi
Right.
played a crucial role in this conflict. Remember how the lecture mentioned their travels together?
Yes, it's incredible to think that their paths would cross again under such, dramatically different circumstances.
Well, by this time, Gao Shi had become the military governor of Huainan,
Right.
a region that was strategically important to both Li Lin and Suzong. He remained loyal to Suzong and was tasked with stopping Li Lin's rebellion.
So these old friends, once united by their love of poetry and adventure,
Yeah,
found themselves on opposing sides of this bitter conflict.
exactly. It's a stark reminder of how, personal relationships can be reshaped by these just tumultuous currents of history.
Right.
No record of any grand poetic showdown between them, sadly. The reality was much more brutal. Gao Shi's forces just swiftly defeated Li Lin's army.
Oh, wow.
Li Lin himself was killed, and Li Bai, having sided with the losing side, was captured and imprisoned.
What a devastating turn of events, it seems. His gamble for political power backfired spectacularly. He must have been filled with regret.
You can imagine the despair, at nearly 60 years old.
Right.
His dreams lay in ruins, his freedom snatched away. But even in this darkest hour, Levi's luck,
Okay.
or perhaps fate, wasn't entirely spent.
There's a glimmer of hope then.
Emperor Suzong declared a general amnesty,
Okay.
pardoning a number of prisoners, and Li Bai was among those fortunate enough to be released.
Wow.
He was sentenced to exile in Yilang,
Okay.
this remote, unforgiving region in what's now Guizhou province.
Exile must still felt like a heavy punishment, especially after experiencing imprisonment.
It was definitely a harsh sentence, but it was a far cry from execution,
Right.
which was a real possibility given the severity of his crime. And as he journeyed towards Yilang, another stroke of fortune came his way. Another amnesty was declared, this time granting him complete freedom.
Wow. Talk about a roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah.
He went from the heights of anticipation, believing he was finally about to grasp the power he'd always desired, to the depths of despair in prison, only to be offered a second chance at life and freedom.
It was a dramatic turn of events that must have profoundly impacted him.
Right.
And this sense of liberation, this overwhelming joy and relief.
Yeah.
It just pours out in one of his most famous poems, Leaving Baidi City in the Morning.
It's incredible to think that such a beautiful and poignant piece of art
Yeah.
was born out of such a turbulent period in his life.
It speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to find beauty and meaning even in the face of adversity.
But while Li Bai's life was spared,
Right.
those years of turmoil, of political upheaval and personal loss undoubtedly left their mark.
That makes sense. He was in his 60s by then, and the Tang Dynasty he returned to was no longer the same. The Andalusian Rebellion had fundamentally changed the political landscape.
His dream of wielding real political power, of being the emperor's trusted advisor, had vanished.
It had, but his desire for purpose, for meaning, didn't disappear entirely. It simply found a new outlet.
Intriguing. Where did he direct this energy now that his political aspirations had been shattered?
His poetry, of course.
Okay.
But there's this noticeable shift in his later works.
Oh, really?
They still possess his trademark romanticism and deep appreciation for nature. But there's also this layer of introspection, this melancholic awareness of life's fleeting nature and the inevitability of change.
It's as though his poetry became a way to process those disappointments, to grapple with the realities of a world that no longer aligned with his youthful ambitions.
That's a very perceptive observation. His later poems become this testament to the power of art to help us navigate difficult emotions,
Right.
to make sense of our experiences and find meaning even amidst loss and disillusionment.
It also makes you reconsider his earlier poems, doesn't it?
Yeah. It does.
Knowing his struggles and the ultimate failure of his political ambitions adds another dimension to those seemingly carefree verses.
Right.
We can almost read between the lines and see hints of foreshadowing, subtle glimpses of the turmoil that lay ahead.
It's one of the most captivating aspects of studying history and literature, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
We're not just passively absorbing facts, we're actively piecing together this puzzle, connecting seemingly disparate events and ideas to form this deeper, more intricate understanding of the past.
Absolutely. And in Li Bai's case, that puzzle is particularly fascinating.
It is.
Because his life and works offer such a rich tapestry of experience, emotion, and contradiction.
He was a man of the world, yet he also possessed this solitary soul. Yeah. He was a dreamer who chased after these lofty goals.
Yeah.
But he was also a keen observer of human nature and the natural world, and all of these facets are reflected in his poetry.
Speaking of contradictions, let's revisit his relationship with Du Fu.
Okay.
It's fascinating how Du Fu practically worshipped Li Bai, yet Li Bai's response was, well, rather lukewarm.
It highlights the inherent subjectivity of artistic taste, wouldn't you say?
I guess so.
What one person finds brilliant, another might find unremarkable. Li Bai, with his penchant for spontaneous, expressive verse, may not have fully appreciated Du Fu's meticulous craftsmanship.
It's like comparing a vibrant improvisational jazz performance to a meticulously orchestrated symphony. Both possess their own unique beauty.
Right.
And appeal to different sensibilities.
Precisely. And it's crucial to remember that when they met, Li Bai was already this celebrated figure.
Right.
He was accustomed to praise, hailed as one of the greatest poets of his generation.
Perhaps he didn't fully grasp Du Fu's talent because it manifested in a style so different from his own?
That's a fascinating possibility. It makes you wonder if their relationship might have developed differently had they met under different circumstances.
Right.
Perhaps before Li Bai achieved such widespread fame, maybe then he would have been more receptive to Du Fu's unique genius.
Or perhaps their contrasting styles would have always kept them at a distance, even if their paths had crossed at a different juncture.
Yeah.
It's one of those tantalizing what-if scenarios that history often leaves us pondering.
And that's part of what makes delving into the past so rewarding, isn't it? We're constantly piecing together this fragmented information.
Right.
Attempting to reconstruct events and relationships based on often limited evidence.
It's almost as if we're historical detectives, searching for clues, trying to understand the motivations and desires of individuals who lived centuries ago.
And sometimes those motivations remain shrouded in mystery. Their true nature, just eluding our grasp. But that's all right.
Right.
Not every question requires a definitive answer. Sometimes the ambiguity. Those unanswered questions add to history's allure, fueling our curiosity and prompting us to delve deeper.
I agree. It's those gaps in our knowledge that ignite our imaginations and allow us to connect with the past on a more personal level.
Speaking of personal connections, let's shift our focus back to Li Bai's personal life.
Okay.
We've discussed his political aspirations and his interactions with fellow poets.
Right.
But what about his family life? The lecture mentions that he was married to a member of the imperial clan.
Yes.
Which is quite significant.
It is being connected to the imperial family would have granted him a certain status.
Right.
And opened doors to influential circles. Could this connection have played a role in his pursuit of political ambitions?
It's definitely a possibility such family ties would have provided him access to corridors of power that might have otherwise remained closed. However, we need to remember that marriage in ancient China often served strategic purposes, solidifying alliances and enhancing social standing.
So it's conceivable that his marriage was to some extent a calculated move to further his career.
That's one interpretation, especially considering his relentless pursuit of political influence.
Right.
However, the lecture doesn't offer much insight into the nature of their relationship, leaving us to speculate on the emotional dynamics between them.
It does make you wonder what his wife thought of his ambitions. His sometimes reckless decisions, his persistent chase after a dream that seemed destined to elude him.
Imagine being married to someone so driven, so consumed by this desire for power that it blinded him to the potential risks. It must have been this mix of frustration and worry for her, particularly during those turbulent years of the Unlushan Rebellion.
We know she advised him against joining Lightlin's cause, but he chose to ignore her warnings.
He did.
Did his decision create a rift between them? Did it irrevocably damage their relationship?
Unfortunately, the lecture doesn't delve into those intimate details,
Oh,
which is a shame because it would have offered this compelling glimpse into the human cost of Li Bai's ambition.
right.
We often focus on these grand historical narratives, the political maneuvers and battles,
Yeah.
but it's crucial to remember those individual lives caught in the currents of those events.
It's a powerful reminder that history isn't solely about abstract forces and dates. It's about real people
Yep.
with their own hopes, fears, and relationships that are inevitably shaped by those larger events.
Exactly. And in Li Bai's case, his personal life,
Hmm.
his loves and losses likely played a significant role in shaping his worldview and influencing his poetry.
It's as though every experience, every connection, every triumph and setback contributes to this rich tapestry of our lives,
Yeah.
creating a unique and intricate portrait.
And Li Bai's portrait is one that continues to captivate and inspire centuries after his death.
Absolutely.
He was a man of stark contradictions,
Right.
driven by ambition, yet capable of great tenderness and sensitivity.
Hmm.
A master of language who could capture both nature's grandeur and those subtle nuances of human emotion.
His story reminds us that even the most legendary figures are ultimately human, flawed, and complex,
Yeah.
capable of both extraordinary brilliance and devastating mistakes.
And often it's in those imperfections, those moments of vulnerability and self-doubt, that we discover the most relatable and enduring aspects of their stories.
It's like those flaws, those cracks in the facade allow us to see the person behind the myths,
Yeah.
the beating heart beneath the armor of legend.
And that's what makes exploring history so rewarding.
Hmm.
It's not just about memorizing facts and dates. It's about connecting with the past on this human level,
Yeah,
recognizing ourselves in the triumphs and struggles of those who came before us.
absolutely. And in Li Bai's case, that connection feels particularly strong
It does.
because his work transcends time and cultural boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
His themes of love, loss, the beauty of nature, and this yearning for something more
Yeah.
resonate with people across generations and continents.
It speaks volumes about the enduring power of great art to bridge the gap between the past and the present, to find meaning and solace in words written centuries ago.
As we delve deeper into Li Bai's poetry,
Yeah.
let's remain mindful of the complexities of his life, the struggles and triumphs that shaped his art. Let's read between the lines. Listen for the echoes of his experiences and allow ourselves to be moved by the sheer beauty and power of his words.
And perhaps in doing so, we'll gain a deeper understanding not only of Li Bai, but also of ourselves and this enduring human condition that connects us all across time and space.
That's beautifully put. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive,
We have.
exploring Li Bai's political ambitions, his complex relationships,
Yeah.
his resilience in the face of adversity, and the enduring legacy of his poetry.
But there's one fascinating aspect of his life that we haven't touched on yet. His spirituality and connection to Taoism.
Ah, yes. Li Bai was known for his fascination with Taoist philosophy, wasn't he? I'm curious to know how that influenced his worldview and his poetry.
To understand that, we need to take a closer look at Taoism's core principles
Okay.
and how they resonated with Li Bai's personality and experiences. Are you ready for a little philosophical exploration?
Absolutely. I'm always eager to expand my understanding. Let's dive into the world of Taoism and see how it shaped the poetry
Okay.
of one of China's greatest literary giants. All right, let's dive into Taoism for those of us who might not be familiar.
Okay.
Can you give us a little primer on what it's all about?
So Taoism is this philosophy that emphasizes living in harmony with the natural order of the universe,
Okay.
a concept known as the Tao. It's about embracing spontaneity, accepting the ebb and flow of life, and recognizing the interconnectedness of all things.
That does sound a lot like Li Bai, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, his love of nature, his free-flowing voice, even his impulsive nature.
Right.
It all seems to align with those Taoist principles.
Exact. Taoism encourages this detachment from worldly desires and a focus on cultivating inner peace. And this really resonates with Li Bai's constant search for something more, something beyond the confines of, courtly life and political ambition.
So instead of striving for power and recognition in the emperor's court,
Right.
maybe he was also seeking a different kind of fulfillment, a connection to the Tao through his poetry and his immersion in nature.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Think about his frequent use of imagery like mountains, rivers, the moon.
Right.
In a Taoist context, these natural elements represent more than just aesthetic beauty.
Yeah.
They symbolize the vastness and power of the Tao,
Wow.
this eternal flow of energy that connects all things.
It's like his poetry becomes a bridge between the human world and the cosmic realm, a way to tap into that universal energy
Yeah.
and express it through art.
And that's what makes his work so timeless and universally appealing. Even if we don't fully grasp all the intricacies of Taoist philosophy,
Right.
we can still sense that emotional depth of his verses, that yearning for meaning, that celebration of beauty in its many forms.
It seems that Li Bai, despite his worldly ambitions, was also a deeply spiritual person, someone who found solace and inspiration in the natural world and sought to express that connection through his art.
That's a beautiful summary of his complex character. He was both a man of the world and a seeker of something beyond it.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the life and legacy of Li Bai,
Okay.
what are some key takeaways you'd like us to remember?
First, remember that behind the legend, the romanticized stories, there was a real human being
Right.
with flaws, ambitions, and experiences that shaped his art in these profound ways.
We shouldn't just see him as this mythical figure, but as a person who grappled with real-life challenges and contradictions.
Exactly. Second, appreciate the complexity and depth of his poetry.
Okay.
It's not just about, pretty words and imagery. It reflects his worldview, his spiritual leanings, his search for meaning in a world that could be both beautiful and cruel.
And finally, don't be afraid to draw your own conclusions. Explore Li Bai's work and see what resonates with you.
Yeah.
What do you see in his verses? What echoes of his ambition, his longing, his love of beauty and nature
Right.
do you find within yourself?
Well said. Li Bai's story is this testament to the enduring power of art to transcend time and cultural boundaries,
Yeah.
to connect us with the hopes and dreams, the struggles and triumphs of those who came before us.
It's been a fascinating journey exploring his life and work. Thank you for guiding us through this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listener, keep diving, keep exploring. Let the poetry of Li Bai be your guide as you navigate the complexities of your own life and search for meaning in this vast and ever-changing world. All right, so we've got a fascinating collection here all about Du Fu,
Oh, yeah.
this
yeah.
incredible poet from ancient China.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we're going to try to do today is sort of unpack his story a bit
Yeah,
and figure out what made his poetry so unique and so powerful.
right.
And maybe even see why his words still kind of resonate with us today,
Yeah.
over 1,000 years later.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Du Fu wasn't exactly like a rock star poet in his own time.
Right.
He was actually known more as a tragic poet.
Okay.
Lived in poverty, didn't really get much recognition when he was alive. But his poetry, it has the staying power,
Yeah.
It speaks to something universal about the human experience, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm really curious about is
Yeah,
how this guy who faced so much hardship,
right.
was able to create art that still speaks to us today.
Right.
So I'm ready to dig in.
Okay, let's do it.
What about his family background?
Okay.
Was he always destined to be a poet?
Well, he definitely came from a family with some serious pedigree.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, imagine being like the 13th generation descendant of Du Yu,
Okay.
this famous general who helped unify China.
Wow, talk about pressure.
I know, right? Talk about pressure.
Right.
And then there's his grandfather, Du Shangyin,
Okay.
who was a major figure in the literary world. He
Yeah.
was part of this elite group. They called them the Four Friends of Literature.
Wow.
Yeah, so, coming from a family like that,
Yeah.
it's no wonder he ended up a poet.
Right. Well, I also read that there was some pretty serious drama
Oh, yeah.
in his family history, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Not just scholarly pursuits and military victories.
Yeah, no, his uncle,
Okay.
Du Bing, pulled off this crazy assassination
Wow.
to save his father from execution.
Oh, wow.
Apparently, Du Fu's dad was falsely accused and imprisoned by these corrupt officials, and Du Bing, he just took matters into his own hands.
Oh, yeah.
It was a huge act of filial piety, which was a really important virtue back then.
Right.
And it just goes to show you the kind of environment Du Fu grew up in.
Yeah. That's pretty intense.
Yeah.
And then there's that story about his aunt during the plague,
Right.
putting Du Fu's life before her own son's.
Yes. Incredibly selfless.
Yeah, I can definitely see how these early experiences could have shaped his worldview,
Oh, absolutely. Those early years were foundational for him.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that even with that kind of backdrop,
Yeah.
his earliest poems are full of optimism and ambition.
Oh, really?
You can just feel this young man
Yeah.
eager to make his mark on the world.
It's like you can almost see him, right?
I know, right?
Like full of youthful energy.
Exactly.
But then things take a turn.
Yeah.
His father dies, and he's got to face poverty.
Right.
It's like this sudden shift,
Mm-hmm.
a dose of reality.
It is, isn't it?
I wonder if that's something that, a lot of us can relate to.
I think so. That moment when life throws you a curveball, and for Du Fu, this hardship, it starts to like really permeate his poetry.
Okay.
He even has to move to the outskirts of Chan,
Okay.
which was the capital city,
Wow.
because living costs were just too high.
That's a far cry from like
Oh.
the carefree poet, right? Having to
Okay.
move because of rent.
Exactly.
But maybe this is when his poetry starts to become even more powerful,
I think you're right.
because it's rooted in these real life struggles.
Exactly. His experiences with poverty and hardship
Right.
directly informed his observations
Yeah.
about society and the human condition.
Yeah.
And this is where another key figure enters the picture.
Okay.
Li Bai.
Li Bai Du Fu's poetic idol, I guess you could say.
That's a good way to put it.
But their relationship seems complicated.
Well, think of it this way.
Okay.
You have the more serious, socially conscious Du Fu
Yeah.
meeting this larger-than-life, almost mythical figure in Li Bai.
Right.
And there are even poems where Li Bai teases Du Fu
Really?
for working too hard on his writing. Wow.
Yeah. Their personalities and their approaches to poetry were just vastly different.
It's fascinating that during their lifetime,
Yeah.
Li Bai was far more famous.
It was.
But it's really interesting how Du Fu's work
Right.
has stood the test of time.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about, how we define success.
It really does.
Right.
Yeah. And it suggests that true greatness isn't always recognized in the moment.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes time for a work of art to be fully appreciated.
So we've got this backdrop of a difficult childhood,
Right.
financial struggles, this complex relationship with another major poet.
Right.
What happens next in Du Fu's life?
Well, things take a turn for the worse
Oh, no.
when he comes face to face with political corruption.
Okay.
He tries to take the imperial examinations,
Yeah.
which were like the ultimate test to become a government official.
Right.
But they were rigged by this cunning minister named Li Linfu.
Wait, so the exams were completely unfair?
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow.
Right.
How did that impact Du Fu? Imagine, preparing for years,
Yeah.
pouring your heart and soul into studying,
Right.
only to find out that the whole system is corrupt.
Mm.
It was a major turning point for Du Fu.
Yeah.
This wasn't just about, failing an exam.
Right.
It was about witnessing firsthand the abuse of power
Right.
and the crushing of true talent.
Wow.
It left him deeply disillusioned with the government.
And all of this was happening during the reign of Emperor Taizong.
Yes.
Is that right?
A time that's often described as prosperous.
Right.
But remember, history is often written from the perspective of the powerful.
That's true.
Du Fu's experiences offer a very different perspective. He lived through a devastating personal tragedy
Right.
that really exposed the stark reality of inequality in that society.
You're talking about the death of his youngest child.
I am. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And it happened during this supposed time of prosperity. This is where that famous line comes from. In the mansions, wine and meat go to waste, while out on the roads lie the frozen bones of the poor.
Wow.
It's raw,
Yeah.
emotional, and a direct indictment of the inequality that he saw all around him.
His poetry becomes this voice for those who are suffering,
Yes.
those who are forgotten by the powerful.
Absolutely.
It's not just art, it's social commentary.
Mm-hmm.
And then, to make matters even worse,
Right.
the Anxi Rebellion breaks out.
Oh, yeah. This rebellion was a cataclysmic event in Chinese history.
Wow.
Widespread chaos, violence, displacement.
Oh my gosh.
And while many people surrendered to the rebels, Du Fu remained fiercely loyal to the Tang Dynasty.
Wow.
He even tried to reach the new Emperor Taizong.
It's incredible that even in the face of all that turmoil,
Right.
he still clung to this sense of duty.
I know, it's amazing.
But I imagine this loyalty came at a cost.
It did. He was captured by the rebels,
Oh,
and he had to witness the destruction of his beloved Chang'an.
I can't even imagine.
It's during this time that he writes Spring View,
Okay.
this really poignant poem filled with longing for his family
Yeah.
and grief over the war's devastation.
It's hard to imagine what that must have been like.
It
To
is.
see your city, your home torn apart by war.
It really is. And, it's a testament to his resilience.
Yeah.
That even in these darkest of times, he continued to create.
Yeah.
Spring View is just one example of how he channeled his personal experiences in poetry that speaks to this universal human experience of loss and longing.
Amidst all this tragedy and political chaos.
Right.
It's almost a relief to hear about his love story with his wife.
Oh, yeah.
Such a contrast to Li Bai's more colorful romantic life.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah.
Du Fu's poem, The Moonlit Night, offers a glimpse into their relationship.
Oh, really?
It's this beautifully tender expression of love and longing, a reminder that even amidst hardship, human connection can offer solace.
I'm sensing a but coming.
Well, unfortunately for Du Fu, his life was rarely peaceful for long.
Oh, no.
He was briefly appointed as a remonstrance official,
Okay.
which basically meant he could advise the emperor.
Okay.
But he was a little too outspoken, criticizing those in power.
Let me guess.
Go ahead.
He was punished for speaking truth to power.
Exactly. He was banished for speaking out against injustice.
Wow. It seems like every time Du Fu caught a break,
I know, right?
something happened to pull him back into hardship.
It's like one step forward, two steps back.
It makes you wonder how he kept going.
It really does. But I have a feeling his story is far from over.
Yeah, we'll be right back to explore more of Du Fu's incredible life and work. So we left off with Du Fu getting banished again for speaking his mind.
Yeah, it seems like every time things started looking up for him, something would happen to knock him back down.
Yeah.
But he was eventually allowed to return from exile.
Okay.
And he spent some time in Huazhu,
Oh.
which was a place that was really close to the areas ravaged by war.
Oh.
And this experience really led him to write some of his most powerful poems.
Oh, wow.
They're known as The Three Officials and Three Farewells.
Just those titles alone sound heavy.
They do.
Like they're carrying a lot of weight.
They do, and for good reason. These poems are filled with these really vivid descriptions of the suffering that was caused by the war and forced conscription.
Wow.
The Officials at Shihao, for example, it paints this brutal picture of people being dragged away from their homes to fight in this war.
It makes me think about those images we see on the news today.
Right.
Of people fleeing conflict, families torn apart.
Yeah.
It's a timeless tragedy.
It really is. And what's so striking about Du Fu's poems is that he manages to capture not just the physical hardship, but also the emotional toll that it takes.
Yeah.
He gives voice to those people who are so often forgotten in the grand narratives of history.
He humanizes them.
Exactly. He makes their stories real.
And in The Three Farewells, we see kind of a different side of Du Fu's compassion. Right? In The Officials at Xinan, for example, he's trying to comfort those being sent off to war, acknowledging their fear, but also urging them to be brave.
It's really interesting.
So even though he was deeply critical of the government and the war itself, he could still empathize with those who are caught in the middle of it all.
I think that's what makes him so fascinating.
It's a really complex perspective.
It is. He wasn't just a critic or a propagandist.
Yeah.
He was a keen observer of human nature in all of its contradictions.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned hope because even though he was surrounded by so much darkness, his poetry never feels completely devoid of it.
That's true.
There's always this glimmer, this belief in the resilience of the human spirit.
I think you've hit on something really important there.
Yeah.
His ability to find beauty and hope, even in the midst of suffering, is one of the things that makes his poetry so enduring.
Yeah.
It speaks to our own capacity to persevere, to find light in the darkness.
So what happened to him after Huazhu?
Okay.
Did he finally find some peace, stability?
Well, his life continued to be kind of a mix of hardship and these fleeting moments of solace.
Yeah.
He eventually moved to Chengdu,
Chengdu,
which is a city known for its natural beauty.
Okay.
And it's there that he built his famous thatched cottage.
Okay, I've heard of this.
Which has become almost as legendary as the poet himself.
The thatched cottage sounds idyllic.
It does.
Did he finally find some respite there?
For a time, yes.
Okay.
The beauty of Chengdu's landscape really inspired many of his poems.
Okay.
But even there, he couldn't completely escape the realities of poverty and the ongoing turmoil that was happening in the country. In fact, one of his most famous poems from this period is called The Thatched Hut, Torn Apart by the Autumn Wind.
Wow.
And it speaks to the fragility of even the most peaceful existence.
It's like even when he was surrounded by all this beauty, his mind was never far from the suffering of others.
Exactly. Yeah. His compassion was a constant.
Yeah.
No matter where he went or what he experienced.
I'm starting to get a sense of the man behind the poetry.
Yeah.
This wasn't some ivory tower poet detached from the world.
No, he was deeply engaged with the realities of his time.
Absolutely. And I think that's why his work continues to resonate with people from all walks of life across cultures and centuries.
It's true.
He speaks to something universal about the human experience.
He does.
So tell me more about this time in Chengdu. Did he stay at the cottage?
So he actually didn't.
Okay.
You remember his friend Yan Wu, the military governor?
Yeah.
Well, Yan Wu died in 765 AD.
Okay.
And after that, Du Fu decided to leave Chengdu
Okay.
and travel down the Yangtze River.
I'm struck by how much he kept seeking new experiences.
Yeah.
Even in his later years.
Yeah.
It's like he was never content to just settle down and be comfortable.
There was definitely this restlessness to his spirit, this constant desire to learn and explore.
Yeah.
And his travels took him to various places,
Okay.
including Kuzu, where he wrote some of his most breathtaking poems
Really?
about the Yangtze River gorges.
Wow. So even as he was approaching the end of his life,
I know.
he was still creating these incredible works of art.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. Like he was squeezing every last drop of experience out of life.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
He was truly living and breathing poetry until his very last days.
So how did his journey end?
Okay.
Where did he finally find rest?
Well, Du Fu's travels eventually led him to Tanzhou,
Hanzu.
which is modern-day Changsha in Hunan province.
Okay.
And it's believed that he died there in 770 AD
Okay.
at the age of 58.
58.
The exact circumstances of his death are unclear, but some accounts suggest that he died of illness,
Okay.
while others claim that he drowned.
It's almost poetic, isn't it?
It is.
That his life ended on a journey.
Right.
Surrounded by the beauty of the Yangtze River.
There's a certain symmetry to it,
Yeah.
a sense of coming full circle.
And while his death marks the end of his physical journey, his poetry continues to travel through time,
It does.
inspiring and moving people centuries later.
That's the power of art.
We've talked a lot about his life.
Yeah.
The hardships he faced, the people he encountered, the places he traveled.
Mm.
But I'm ready to dig deeper into the poetry itself.
Okay.
What made Du Fu's work so unique?
Right.
What are the themes and techniques that set him apart?
That's a great question, and I think it's what truly lies at the heart of understanding Du Fu's enduring legacy.
Yeah.
And we'll explore that next.
Okay, so we've journeyed with Du Fu through this extraordinary life of his.
Yeah.
Witnessed the highs and lows, the beauty, the turmoil. But now I want to explore what's really at the heart of it all.
Right.
His poetry. What made his work so powerful, so enduring?
You know, when you read Du Fu, you don't just get a sense of history.
Yeah.
You get a sense of humanity.
Mm.
He doesn't shy away from pain or suffering.
Right.
In fact, he kind of leans into it, you know?
Mhm.
He transforms those experiences into something deeply moving and relatable,
Right.
even centuries later.
I keep thinking about that line. In the mansions, wine and meat go to waste, while out on the roads lie the frozen bones of the poor.
Yeah, it's so stark.
It's so powerful.
Powerful.
It feels like it could have been written yesterday.
Exactly, and that's one of the key themes that runs through his work, this
Yeah.
unwavering focus on social injustice,
Mm-hmm.
on the plight of the marginalized.
Yeah.
You know, he was a voice for the voiceless,
Yeah.
even when it put him at risk.
It takes courage to speak truth to power like that,
It does.
especially in those times.
Especially back then.
His poems are like a window into this period
They are.
of immense change and upheaval.
And he doesn't just document those events. He captures the human cost, the emotional impact
Yeah.
of war, famine, political corruption.
Wow.
He shows us how these larger forces
Right.
shape individual lives, families, entire communities.
And he does it in a way that feels so personal,
Yeah.
so intimate. I remember reading Spring View,
Yeah.
the poem he wrote while he was captive during the rebellion.
Yeah.
It's filled with this raw longing for his family, this grief over the destruction that he's witnessing.
That's what makes Du Fu so brilliant.
Yeah.
He seamlessly blends these personal reflections
Right.
with larger political and social themes.
Yeah.
And in doing so, he creates this incredible tapestry of human experience.
So we have social commentary.
Yeah,
We have personal reflection.
right.
We know he was also deeply inspired by nature.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the actual craftsmanship of his poetry?
Right.
How did he use language
Okay.
to create these lasting works of art?
This is where Du Fu's mastery really shines.
Yeah.
He was incredibly versatile,
Yeah.
experimenting with different forms and styles. Sometimes he would use, the traditional structures of court poetry,
Yeah.
and other times he would break free from those constraints,
Okay.
really pushing the boundaries of language and form.
So there's this complexity, this depth
Mm-hmm.
to his work.
For sure.
But is it accessible
Yeah,
to someone who isn't like a poetry scholar?
I think so.
Can I, as an average reader, still connect with Du Fu?
Absolutely. What's remarkable is that even though his poetry is sophisticated,
Yeah.
it's also incredibly grounded in human experience.
Right.
His emotions are universal.
Yeah.
Love, loss, fear, hope.
Yeah.
And he expresses them with such honesty and vulnerability that it's impossible not to be moved by them.
It's like that saying, the more personal, the more universal.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the reasons why Du Fu has had such a profound impact on Chinese literature and culture.
So what has been his lasting legacy?
Well, he's considered one of the greatest poets in Chinese history.
Wow.
And his work has been studied and imitated for centuries.
It's amazing.
He's credited with really expanding the scope of what poetry could be,
Okay.
bringing in a wider range of subjects and emotions.
So he didn't just create art.
Right.
He paved the way for generations of poets to come.
And his influence extends beyond just literature.
Oh, really?
His focus on social justice,
Mm-hmm.
his empathy for the suffering of others,
Yeah.
has made him a symbol of compassion.
Mm.
He's often seen as a voice for the voiceless,
Yeah.
a champion of the common people.
It's incredible to think that his words still hold such power.
I know, it's amazing.
After all this time. If Du Fu were alive today,
Yeah.
what issues do you think he would be writing about?
Given his deep concern for social justice,
Yeah.
I think he would be drawn to issues of poverty,
Right.
war, inequality, the things that we still struggle with today.
Yeah.
He'd probably be writing about the refugee crisis, climate change,
Right.
the struggles of those on the margins of society.
He'd be the poet of the people just as he was in his own time.
Eh.
What a powerful reminder of the enduring relevance of Du Fu's work and the importance of using our own voices to speak out against injustice.
Absolutely.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey,
It has.
not just through the life and work of one man,
Right.
but through the depths of human experience itself.
It really has.
You know, Du Fu challenges us to look at the world with compassion, to raise our voices for those who are suffering,
Yeah.
and to find beauty and resilience even in the face of adversity.
And perhaps most importantly,
Yeah.
he reminds us that we are all connected by these shared human experiences, no matter how much time passes, no
Right.
matter how much the world changes.
Yeah.
Those fundamental emotions, love, loss, hope, despair,
Yeah.
they remain constant.
Du Fu's poetry is a testament to the power of the human spirit,
Yes.
to endure, to find meaning and beauty, even amidst chaos and suffering. It's a legacy worth cherishing.
It is. Welcome to our deep dive into the life and work of Du Fu.
Yeah.
You know him as a
giant.
giant of Chinese literature, often called the sage of poetry.
Right.
But his story is far from,
Typical.
the typical tale of a celebrated artist.
Right.
Today we're going to explore his poetry,
Yeah.
but also delve into that historical context, a life marked by poverty and displacement,
Right.
set against the backdrop of a crumbling dynasty.
I think what's fascinating about Du Fu is that his personal struggles seem to have fueled his empathy for the common people.
Yeah.
And that becomes a key theme woven throughout his poetry.
Yeah. His life was definitely not a walk in the park.
No.
I was reading about the Lushan Rebellion.
Yeah.
It seems like that period was particularly rough.
Right.
Do you think the constant upheaval around him influenced his writing at all?
The Lushan Rebellion was a turning point in Du Fu's life.
Yeah.
And in Chinese history.
Right.
Imagine the Tang Dynasty, this incredibly powerful empire, suddenly thrown into chaos.
Oh, wow.
Du Fu, already experiencing poverty, found himself constantly on the move,
Right.
displaced by conflict.
Right.
This wasn't just a personal struggle for him.
Yeah.
It became a reflection of the turmoil engulfing his nation.
It's almost hard to imagine creating art
Right.
when your world is literally falling apart around you.
Right.
But there's this interesting story about Du Fu's time in Chengdu
Yeah.
with his patron, Yan Wu. Apparently, Du Fu, maybe after one too many drinks,
Yeah.
addressed Yan Wu using his father's name.
It was
A huge social taboo.
huge, a
Yeah.
huge faux pas at
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
You'd expect a serious backlash.
Right.
But what's remarkable is that Yan Wu didn't take offense.
Yeah.
Instead, it reveals
Yeah.
a deep respect and understanding between them.
Right.
Remember, this was a time when patronage was crucial for artists.
Right.
This anecdote shows us that their relationship went beyond the typical patron-artist dynamic.
Yeah.
They had a genuine bond.
It makes you wonder, did that security that feeling of genuine support allow Du Fu to really focus on his craft during a time when everything else was so uncertain?
It's very likely.
Yeah.
Chengdu offered Du Fu a period of relative stability, and Yan Wu's financial support was crucial.
Right.
But more than that, the emotional support, the freedom to be himself, without fear of judgment, must have been incredibly valuable.
It's interesting how those details about his personality come through.
Yeah.
I mean, we often think of historical figures as these distant, almost mythical beings, but moments like this remind us they were real people with flaws and complexities.
Yes.
Just like us.
Exactly. And it's those personal details that make history come alive.
Right.
They help us connect with these figures on a human level.
But sadly, even in Chengdu, the peace didn't last.
It didn't know.
Right, there was that rebellion, led by Zhu Zidao, Yan Wu's own deputy. It's almost a Shakespearean twist, isn't it?
It is.
The betrayal, the shattering of this newfound stability.
It was a devastating blow for both Yan Wu and for Du Fu.
Yeah.
But more than just a personal betrayal,
Right.
it reflected a much larger problem.
Yeah.
The decline of the Tang Dynasty's central authority.
Yeah.
Local governors were asserting their independence,
Right.
leading to widespread instability.
Yeah.
Imagine the impact on someone like Du Fu,
Yeah.
who was already vulnerable and displaced.
It's easy to get lost in the historical details.
Yeah.
But when you think about the human cost of this upheaval,
Right.
it's really striking.
It is. And that's precisely what Du Fu captures in his poetry.
Yeah.
He doesn't just tell us about the battles and the political intrigue.
Yeah.
He gives us a glimpse into the lives of ordinary people caught in the crossfire.
Right.
He becomes a voice for the voiceless.
Yeah.
And that's part of what makes his work so powerful and enduring.
I was looking at some of the poems that he wrote during this period, and what struck me was the contrast.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have these incredibly vivid descriptions of nature, almost serene and idyllic.
Right.
Then on the other hand, there's this deep sense of sorrow and displacement.
Yeah.
It's like he's trying to reconcile the beauty of the world with the harsh realities of his time.
That's a really insightful observation.
Yeah.
Du Fu's poetry is full of these juxtapositions.
Right.
He doesn't shy away from the darkness.
Yeah.
But he also finds moments of light.
Right.
Even in the midst of chaos.
Yeah.
It's a testament to his resilience, his ability to find hope and meaning, even in the darkest of times.
And maybe even find a bit of joy.
Yes.
I came across a line in his poem, hearing the news that the Imperial Army has recovered Henan and Hebei. With wine as my companion, I'm eager to return home. It sounds so optimistic, almost celebratory.
There's actually a fascinating linguistic detail in that line.
Oh, really?
The word Qingchen, often translated as springtime,
Yeah.
most likely refers to a type of wine.
Oh?
Popular during the Tang Dynasty.
Okay.
So this reveals a hidden layer of meaning.
Yeah.
Du Fu isn't just longing for spring.
Right.
He's anticipating a joyous homecoming, a celebration with friends and family fueled by good wine.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's like a secret message for those who know the cultural context.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
But it also shows his humanity, doesn't it? It does. That even amidst all the turmoil, he still finds moments of simple pleasure.
Absolutely. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, people find ways to celebrate, to connect with each other,
Yeah.
to find moments of joy.
Right.
And for Du Fu, poetry was a way to capture and express those emotions, to make sense of the world around him.
Speaking of finding moments of peace, this brings us to Kuzhou,
Yes,
a place where Du Fu experienced a remarkable surge of creativity.
it was.
Over 430 poems.
Yes.
Nearly a third of his known works were written during his time there. It makes you wonder, how did he manage such prolific output amidst everything he'd been through?
Well, Kuzhou was in many ways a turning point for Du Fu.
Yeah.
It provided him with a much-needed period of stability.
Okay.
He had a government job managing farmland. He planted orchards.
Yeah.
And his family actively participated in the work.
Right.
This sense of routine of purpose allowed his creative spirit to flourish.
It's almost like the act of putting his experiences into words was a way for him to process the trauma of displacement and loss.
It's very possible.
Yeah.
Remember, he was still battling the psychological and emotional scars of the rebellion.
Right.
The constant fear of instability.
Right.
But in Kuzhou, he found a community.
Yeah.
A sense of belonging.
Right.
This newfound stability, combined with the natural beauty of the region, seems to have ignited his creative drive.
So it wasn't just a place of refuge, it was a place of inspiration as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that Kuzu wasn't just a personal haven for Du Fu. He used his platform, his voice,
Yeah.
to advocate for the people around him,
Hmm.
particularly the women of Kuzu who faced immense hardship.
I'm really intrigued by this aspect of his work.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to write beautiful poems about nature or
Mhm.
personal experiences,
Right.
but to use your art to speak out against injustice,
Yeah.
to give a voice to the marginalized,
Right.
that takes real courage.
It does. And it's part of what makes Du Fu such a compelling figure.
Yeah.
He wasn't just a talented poet. He was a man of conscience,
Mhm.
a social commentator who wasn't afraid to use his art to challenge the status quo.
It almost feels like we're getting to know Du Fu on a deeper level now.
Yes.
Beyond just the poems themselves,
Right.
we're seeing the empathy, the humanity that drove his work.
And that empathy shines through in his poetry.
Yeah.
There's this touching anecdote about a widow who would often pick jujubes from a tree in front of Du Fu's cottage.
Oh, wow.
He never interfered, even when a tenant tried to build a fence to stop her. He even wrote a poem pleading for the woman,
Oh, wow.
acknowledging her poverty and urging compassion. These weren't just abstract concepts for him.
Yeah.
They were real people, real lives that he felt deeply connected to.
It's amazing to think that someone who had endured so much hardship himself could still find it in his heart to be so compassionate towards others.
It is.
He really does seem to have embodied that Sage of Poetry title,
He did.
not just through his art,
Yeah.
but through his actions as well.
And this compassion wasn't limited to individual acts of kindness.
Right.
He used his poetry to address broader social issues, to challenge injustice, and to advocate for those who were often overlooked or silenced.
It's like his poetry became a bridge between his personal experiences
Exactly.
and the larger social and political landscape of his time.
He was a poet of the people in the truest sense of the word.
Yeah.
His work wasn't confined to ivory towers or elite circles.
Right.
He brought poetry to the streets, to the everyday lives of ordinary people.
This is where it starts to get really interesting because even though he found a sense of stability in Kuzu,
Yeah.
his life was still far from easy.
Right.
We can't forget that he was battling multiple health issues at this time.
He was struggling with malaria, diabetes,
Oh, wow.
and even suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed.
Oh, my goodness.
It's hard to fathom the physical and emotional toll these illnesses must have taken on him,
Yeah.
yet he continued to write,
Right.
to create, to find beauty in the midst of pain.
That resilience is just incredible.
It is.
It makes you wonder, did the act of writing,
Yeah.
of pouring his experiences and emotions into poetry, become a form of therapy for him?
It's very likely.
Yeah.
Remember, this was a time long before modern medicine or mental health awareness.
Right.
Poetry may have been his way of coping,
Yeah.
of processing the trauma and hardship he'd endured.
Right.
It was his outlet, his way of making sense of a world that often felt chaotic and unjust.
So even though he'd found this creative haven in Kuzu, it seems his journey wasn't over yet.
It wasn't.
Eventually, he felt compelled to leave, continuing his travels through various cities.
Right.
What prompted him to leave a place that had offered him so much?
Well, there were several factors at play.
Okay.
His brother Duguan urged him to return to their ancestral home in Henan,
Okay.
a place Du Fu longed to see again.
Right.
But there was also the ever-present threat of conflict.
Yeah.
Rebels like Lucia were destabilizing the region,
Right.
and even the capital Chengdu was under threat from the Tubo people.
Oh, wow.
Du Fu's travels were as much about survival as they were about finding a permanent home.
It's a stark reminder that even during times of relative peace, the threat of violence and displacement was never far away.
Right.
It makes you appreciate the courage it took to keep moving,
Yeah,
to keep creating, even when the world around you felt so uncertain.
absolutely. And it speaks to his unwavering spirit,
Right.
his determination to not let circumstance dictate his path.
Yeah.
He wasn't content to simply exist.
Right.
He wanted to live, to experience, to create, even if it meant facing hardship and uncertainty.
And that brings us to a rather unfortunate rumor surrounding his death.
Yes.
The story goes that he died from overeating after being given food and wine by a kind magistrate named Ni. Is there any truth to this tale?
It's a story that's been passed down through the centuries, but the evidence suggests it's more myth than reality.
So why do you think this particular story has persisted for so long?
I think it's partly due to the way it plays into certain stereotypes about artists.
Right.
The idea of the starving artist who, when finally given a taste of luxury, indulges to excess.
Yeah.
It fits a narrative that people are familiar with,
Yeah.
but the reality, as we'll see, is more complex.
Well, let's unpack that then. What does the evidence tell us about Du Fu's final days?
Well, his last confirmed poem, Lying in the Boat in the Wind, was written months after this supposed incident with Magistrate Nai.
So clearly he didn't die from a single indulgent meal.
It seems unlikely.
Yeah, so the rumor's been debunked. But it sounds like the actual circumstances of his death are still a bit of a mystery.
They are. We know he likely died in the winter of 770 A.D.,
Okay.
somewhere between Tanzu and Yuyang.
Right.
The exact cause remains unknown.
Yeah.
But what's important is that we separate fact from fiction and appreciate the complexity of his life and legacy.
I think it's a good reminder that history is rarely black and white.
It's not.
It's full of gaps and interpretations.
It is. And those gaps allow us to engage with the past in a more active way.
Right.
We're not just passively absorbing information.
No.
We're questioning, analyzing, trying to piece together a fuller picture.
Yeah, and in the case of Du Fu, that picture is one of resilience, compassion, and artistic brilliance.
Absolutely.
It's a legacy that extends far beyond the circumstances of his death.
It does. And that's what we'll explore next.
Okay.
As we delve into the fascinating story of Du Fu's posthumous rise to fame and the enduring impact he's had on Chinese literature and culture.
I'm looking forward to that. So we've covered a lot of ground on part one. Du Fu's early life, the turmoil of the Anlushan Rebellion, his time in Chengdu and Guizhou,
Yeah.
and even debunked a long-held rumor about his death.
Right.
It's clear this wasn't a man who lived an easy life.
No.
But even through hardship, he created some of the most enduring poetry in Chinese literature.
What's remarkable is that despite facing poverty, displacement, and illness, he never stopped observing the world around him.
Yeah.
His poetry becomes a window into the soul of a nation in crisis, but also a testament to the enduring human spirit.
It's like he took all that pain, all that uncertainty,
Right.
and transformed it into something beautiful and lasting.
Yeah.
His poems weren't just about his personal struggles.
Right.
They captured the essence of his era, the joys and sorrows of everyday people, and the timeless themes of love loss and the search for meaning.
Exactly. He wasn't just a poet. He was a chronicler of his times.
Yeah.
A social commentator and a voice for the voiceless.
And that voice, as we'll learn, didn't fade away after his death.
No, it didn't.
In fact, it was only after he was gone that his work truly began to gain the recognition it deserved.
Yeah.
This is where things get really interesting. The story of Du Fu's posthumous rise to fame is almost as compelling as his life itself.
It is, and it's a story that speaks volumes about the power of art to transcend time and connect us to the human experience.
So we've established that Du Fu didn't achieve widespread fame during his lifetime.
Right.
It seems almost unbelievable considering how highly he's regarded today.
Yeah.
What led to this shift? Was there a specific event or person who championed his work?
Well, there was a pivotal encounter that played a significant role in Du Fu's posthumous recognition.
Okay.
Picture this.
Yeah.
Du Fu's grandson, Du Sai,
Okay.
is on a journey to return his grandfather's remains to their ancestral home.
Okay.
Along the way, he crosses paths with YuZhen,
Uh-huh.
a fellow poet who was already quite renowned at the time.
It sounds like fate intervened. What happened next?
This chance meeting turned out to be a turning point for Du Fu's legacy. YuZhen was deeply moved by Du Fu's poetry,
Yeah.
recognizing its brilliance and depth.
Wow.
He wrote a glowing epitaph for Du Fu, praising his genius and lamenting the fact that he hadn't received wider recognition during his life.
It's almost like a literary resurrection.
It is.
Here's this man who spent his life battling poverty and displacement,
Right.
and decades after his death, another poet comes along and says, wait a minute, this work is extraordinary.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes true greatness isn't recognized in its own time.
Right.
It takes a discerning eye, someone who can see beyond the surface and appreciate the depth and complexity of the work.
Yeah.
YuZhen was that person for Du Fu.
What's really striking is that YuZhen wasn't just any poet. He was already a celebrated figure in his own right.
He was.
The fact that he championed Du Fu's work must have carried a lot of weight.
Absolutely. YuZhen's endorsement was crucial in bringing Du Fu's poetry to a wider audience.
Yeah.
His epitaph sparked a renewed interest in Du Fu's work,
Right.
leading to a rediscovery and reassessment of his legacy.
It's like those stories you hear about artists like Vincent van Gogh, whose genius was only truly appreciated after their death.
The parallels are definitely there. It makes you wonder how many brilliant artists, thinkers, and writers have gone unnoticed in their own time, only to be celebrated generations later.
It's a humbling thought, but what specifically about Du Fu's poetry resonated so deeply with people like YuZhen? What set him apart from other poets of his era?
A lot of it comes down to his ability to connect personal experience with larger social and political issues.
Okay.
He was a master of capturing the complexities of his time,
Yeah.
the turmoil of a crumbling dynasty.
Yeah.
But he did it in a way that was both deeply personal and universally relatable.
So it wasn't just about beautiful language and imagery. There was a depth of feeling, a social conscience that shone through in his work.
Exactly. He didn't shy away from the difficult realities of his time.
Yeah.
The poverty, the suffering, the injustice. He brought those issues to the forefront, giving a voice to the voiceless through his poetry.
What?
That's a powerful thing, and it's what continues to resonate with readers even today.
So we've got this pivotal moment with YuZhen, this rediscovery of Du Fu's work.
Yes.
What happened next? How did this translate into the lasting legacy he has today?
Well, YuZhen's endorsement was just the beginning. From the Song Dynasty onward, Du Fu's popularity soared.
Wow.
Scholars and poets studied his work intensely, producing numerous annotated collections and analyses of his poems.
So his work wasn't just read and enjoyed, it was dissected, debated, and analyzed in a scholarly context.
Precisely, collections like the 9 scholar annotations of Du Gongbu's poems and the biography of Du Fu demonstrate the level of scholarly attention his work received.
Yeah.
These in-depth analyses helped to cement his place as a cornerstone of Chinese literary tradition.
Yeah.
His poetry wasn't just admired, it was studied and revered.
It's amazing to think about the ripple effect of that one encounter between Du Fu's grandson and YuZhen.
It is.
It led to centuries of scholarship and appreciation, solidifying Du Fu's status as one of the great.
It's a testament to the enduring power of art to connect us across time and cultures.
Yeah.
And it speaks to the dedication of those who recognized Du Fu's genius and worked to ensure that his legacy would live on.
So it wasn't just YuZhen's initial recognition.
Yeah.
It was the continued efforts of scholars, poets, and admirers
Exactly.
who kept Du Fu's work alive and relevant for generations to come.
It's a collective effort, a chain of transmission that stretches across centuries, ensuring that Du Fu's voice continues to be heard.
That raises an interesting question. What exactly is it about Du Fu's poetry that has resonated so deeply with people across time and cultures? What is it about his work that continues to speak to us today?
I think it's the combination of his technical brilliance and his deep humanity.
Okay.
He was a master of language, able to craft verses that are both beautiful and profound.
Yeah.
But more importantly, he was a keen observer of the human condition.
Yeah.
He understood the complexities of life, the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and tragedies that we all experience.
So it wasn't just about pretty words. There was real substance, real emotion behind the poetry.
Exactly.
He was able to tap into something universal, something that transcends the specifics of time and place.
His poems are windows into the human soul, exploring themes of love, loss, longing, displacement, and the search for meaning in a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain.
And perhaps that's why his work continues to resonate with us today, even though he lived over 1,000 years ago.
Right.
We still grapple with many of the same issues he wrote about.
Yes, we do.
Social injustice, political turmoil, the search for peace and stability in a world that's constantly changing.
Precisely, Du Fu's work speaks to the enduring human spirit, our capacity for resilience, compassion, and the search for meaning in the face of adversity.
It's like he's saying, hey, I went through some tough times, but I found beauty and meaning in the world, and so can you.
That's a beautiful way to put it. His work is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's still hope, still beauty, still a reason to keep creating, to keep connecting with each other, and to keep searching for meaning in our lives.
And that brings us back to that title, Sage of Poetry. It seems to encompass more than just his technical skill.
It does.
It's about his wisdom, his empathy, and his ability to find meaning and beauty even in the midst of suffering.
Exactly. He wasn't just a poet, he was a philosopher,
Right.
a social commentator, and a voice for the voiceless.
Yeah.
His work wasn't just about art, it was about life in all its complexity and beauty.
So we've traced Du Fu's journey from relative obscurity to lasting fame, exploring the factors that led to his posthumous recognition and the enduring qualities of his work that continue to resonate with readers today.
Right.
But there's one more piece of the puzzle that I'm curious about.
Oh.
What does the term sage actually mean in the context of Chinese culture and literature?
Right.
Why is Du Fu specifically deserving of this title?
That's a great question. The term sage in Chinese culture goes beyond just being a wise person.
Okay.
It signifies someone who embodies the highest moral and intellectual virtues.
Yeah.
Someone who not only understands the world, but actively seeks to make it a better place.
So it's not just about intelligence or artistic talent.
Right.
It's about character compassion and a commitment to something larger than oneself.
Exactly, and that's what sets Du Fu apart.
Yeah,
He wasn't just a brilliant poet, he was a man of deep empathy and compassion.
right.
He used his art to speak out against injustice, to give voice to the suffering, and to advocate for those who were marginalized or silenced.
So in a sense, his poetry was a form of activism,
Absolutely.
a way of using his platform to try and make a difference in the world.
Precisely, and that's what makes him a true sage of poetry.
Yeah.
His work wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about ethics, about using his art to promote justice and compassion.
His story is a powerful reminder that true greatness isn't just about talent or achievement.
No.
It's about using your gifts to serve something larger than yourself.
Yeah.
It's about making a positive impact on the world, even in the face of hardship and adversity.
Precisely, and that's a lesson that's just as relevant today as it was in Du Fu's time.
Well, we've explored Du Fu's life, his poetry, and his lasting legacy. It's been a fascinating journey, and I feel like I've gained a much deeper appreciation for this sage of poetry. But what about you, our listener? What stands out to you most in Du Fu's story? Is it his resilience in the face of adversity, his deep empathy for the common people, or the timeless power of his poetry to connect us across centuries and cultures?
Whatever resonates with you, I encourage you to explore Du Fu's work further and discover for yourself why he continues to be celebrated as one of the giants of Chinese literature. His poems offered a window into a fascinating historical period, but they also speak to the enduring human spirit, our capacity for love loss, and the search for meaning in a world that's often challenging and unpredictable.
We hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on Du Fu and his enduring legacy. Thanks for joining us. You know, it's incredible to think that we're still talking about Du Fu, a poet who lived over 1,000 years ago.
I know, it's amazing.
His work has truly stood the test of time.
It really has.
But I'm curious, what do you think it is about his poetry that continues to resonate with modern readers?
Whoa.
What makes him relevant today?
I think it's his ability to tap into the raw human experiences that we all share. You know, he wrote about poverty, displacement, war, illness,
Right.
things that are sadly still very much a part of our world today.
So it's not just historical curiosity.
No.
His themes are universal, timeless.
Exactly. Whether you're reading his poems in the 8th century or the 21st, you can connect with his struggles,
Yeah.
his joys, his search for meaning in a world that often feels chaotic.
Right.
His work reminds us that even though the world changes, the human heart remains the same.
Yeah.
We still long for connection, for beauty, for peace, for understanding.
And maybe that's why he's earned the title Sage of Poetry.
Right.
It's not just about beautiful language or technical skill. It's
Right.
about a depth of understanding, a wisdom that speaks to the human condition.
That's a great point. The term sage implies a certain level of moral authority, a commitment to using your knowledge and insight to benefit others.
Right.
And Du Fu certainly embodied that.
Yeah.
He wasn't afraid to use his poetry to speak truth to power, to advocate for the marginalized, to challenge injustice.
So his poetry was a form of activism.
Absolutely.
A way of trying to make the world a better place.
Precisely. He wasn't content to simply observe the world.
Right.
He wanted to engage with it, to challenge it,
Yeah.
to try and make a difference.
It's inspiring to think that even in the midst of personal hardship, he never lost sight of the bigger picture,
Yeah.
the suffering of others, the need for justice and compassion.
He really does embody the idea that art can be a powerful force for change,
Yeah.
a way to raise awareness, to inspire empathy, and to challenge the status quo.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
Du Fu's life, his struggles, his triumphs, his enduring legacy. But before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listener? Any final thoughts or insights that you think are important to understanding Du Fu and his work?
I'd say this Du Fu story is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's still beauty to be found, still meaning to be made,
Yeah.
still a reason to create and connect with others.
It's a beautiful message and one that feels particularly relevant in our own time.
It is, and I think that's part of the reason why Du Fu's work continues to resonate with readers today. His poems offer a window into a fascinating historical period, but they also speak to the enduring human spirit,
Right.
our capacity for resilience, compassion, and the search for meaning in a world that's often challenging and unpredictable.
We hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on Du Fu and his enduring legacy. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going deep, deep into the world of Li Shangyin,
Ooh, Li Shangyin.
one of the Tang Dynasty's most celebrated poets. Yeah, it goes everywhere from these like rumored romances to the challenges he faced, trying to make it in the Tang Dynasty government.
Right, so not just like beautiful poetry, like actually living it.
Exactly.
Like really going through it.
Yeah, and that's what we're hoping to unpack today is how did these experiences shape his poetry?
Right.
And one of the things that really jumped out at me was the story of Li Shangyin and Lady Lu Ji.
Oh, yeah.
This
It
romance.
seems doomed from the start.
I know.
Like star-crossed lovers.
Right.
So this is classic story of love and societal constraints.
Yeah.
You see, Tang Dynasty law basically said people from merchant families
Mm-hmm.
couldn't hold government positions,
Oh, wow.
even through marriage.
Oh, so he couldn't even marry into it.
Exactly.
Oh.
So Li Shangyin pursuing this relationship with Lady Lu Ji
Yeah.
meant like possibly giving up a prestigious career in government.
Oh, wow. So it's love versus ambition.
Exactly.
That's tough.
Yeah. It makes you wonder if he was truly ambitious or
Yeah.
just a product of the times. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Was it him or was it the society he was living in?
Right. Exactly.
That's a big question.
Yeah. And like, how much did that actually influence his decisions?
Yeah. You know what I mean?
Totally. So did he have any other options?
Well, he did try his hand at the imperial examination system.
Right.
Which was like the main way to get those official positions.
Yeah.
But even that system,
It was supposed to be based on merit, right?
yeah, it was designed to be meritocratic.
Yeah.
But it was often influenced by,
Like who you knew.
yeah, exactly, like corruption and favoritism.
Okay.
So Li Shangyin had years of setbacks
Wow.
before finally making it.
Okay, so he did eventually pass.
He did eventually pass, but even then it came with strings attached. Yeah, speaking of those setbacks, he finally did pass the exam, but it was thanks to some help, shall we
A
say.
little maneuvering.
Yeah, from Ling Tao and
Yeah.
examiner Xia Kai.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, it sounds like a backroom deal.
Yeah, pretty much.
How did that affect him?
Oh, it left him disillusioned.
Really?
Imagine achieving a goal you've worked so hard for
Yeah.
and then realizing it wasn't solely based on your own merit.
Oh, man. That's gotta sting.
It does, and it's a conflict that resonates even today.
Yeah.
Like this idea of working hard versus playing the system.
Right. And like, do you play by the rules when,
Exactly.
the rules aren't fair? Or
Right. Are the rules even real?
Right. Are they even there?
Yeah.
It's interesting how this whole thing with the exam system
Yeah.
mirrors this dilemma he faced with Lady Lu Ji.
Right.
Right? It's like both times he's caught in a system that isn't really rewarding.
Yeah, it doesn't reward like merit or feel.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's all about who you know
Right.
and what strings you can pull.
And this leads us to his poetry.
Yes.
And specifically the ongoing debate about his love poems.
Oh, yes.
Were they actually just about love, or were they some kind of veiled political message?
Right. Were they just romance or were they allegory?
Oh, okay. So let's dive into this.
Let's do it.
The scholars have different opinions.
Mm-hmm.
Can you break that down for us?
Okay, so some scholars interpret these poems as purely personal,
Okay.
expressions of affection, longing, loss, all that.
Yeah.
Others think they contain these coded messages
Ooh.
about his political alliances or frustrations.
Okay, so is there a poem that like really exemplifies this debate?
So there's this poem called Untitled,
Okay.
often referred to by its first line, Li Shangyin.
Okay.
And it's beautiful, filled with imagery of dusk and solitude.
Yeah.
But some scholars believe it's actually a message to Ling Tao,
Oh, wow.
a political ally who had helped Li Shangyin.
So wait, the same poem could be about heartbreak?
Yeah,
Or it could be about politics.
that's wild, right?
That's it adds like a whole other level to his work.
It really does.
Wow.
It makes you wonder if his personal life
Yeah.
and his political life were so intertwined
Yeah.
that they became inseparable even in his art.
Yeah, it's like one in the name.
And, it speaks to the ambiguity
Yeah.
that often just, permeates his poetry.
Right. A potential love affair with a female Taoist priest.
Right, right.
Which adds even more mystery to it all.
Oh, yeah.
But you did say earlier that these are just theories, right?
Of course. Of course, we have to be careful
Yeah.
about imposing our own, modern interpretations
Right.
on poetry that's centuries old.
Right.
Textual research is a valuable tool, but
Yeah.
we may never truly understand
Right.
the mysteries behind Li Shangyin's verses.
So as someone who's, not a scholar of ancient Chinese poetry,
Mhm.
where do I even begin? Like, if even the experts can't agree on what these poems mean,
Mm-hmm.
where does that leave, like, the average reader?
That's the beauty of it. There is no one right way
Okay.
to interpret Li Shangyin's poetry.
Okay.
It's the ambiguity, the layers of meaning.
Yeah.
These are invitations for us to engage with his work on different levels
Okay.
and, come to our own conclusions.
So the mystery is part of the appeal.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's like a puzzle. you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
We're all trying to solve it.
Okay, so let's step back for a moment
Yeah.
and talk about those political alliances.
Yes.
Action he had to the Lingu family.
Right.
Then it gets complicated
It does.
with his marriage to Wang Maiwan's daughter.
Yes. This marriage proved quite controversial.
Really? How so?
Well, the Linggu family was associated with a Yunio party,
Okay.
one of the major political factions at the time.
hmm
And Wang Maiwan was thought to be aligned with the Linggu party.
Oh, so they're rivals.
Exactly, their rivals.
Okay.
So by marrying into the Wang family,
Yeah.
Li Shangyin was basically switching sides.
Oh, wow. And wasn't loyalty like a huge deal?
It was paramount.
Yeah.
In Tang Dynasty politics,
Okay.
it wasn't just personal relationships. It
Yeah.
was about this intricate web of power and alliances.
Yeah.
So switching allegiances like that was a big no-no.
Yeah. That's a big deal.
Huge.
Okay, so was he a genuine member of the Li Party? Was he just trying to get ahead, or was he just stuck in the middle?
Right, like caught in a crossfire.
Yeah.
It's really hard to say for sure.
Okay.
Some scholars think he genuinely agreed with the Li Party,
Okay.
while others think he was just ambitious,
Okay.
or maybe even pressured into the marriage.
Oh, wow. So he might not have even wanted to do it.
We don't know for sure.
Okay.
And there's even debate about Wang Mawan's own political affiliations.
Oh, wow. So it gets even more complicated.
Oh yeah, it's a tangled web.
Wow. It sounds like he was constantly juggling like
Oh.
his personal life,
Yeah.
the politics of the time, and, just what society expected of him.
It's no wonder his poetry is so layered and complex.
Right.
Exactly. It's a reflection of his life.
Okay, so how did all of this affect his career?
So his career did not follow a smooth path.
Okay, so what happened?
Well, for one, he missed out on a big promotion
Oh.
during the Daewu's time in power
Okay, and why was that?
because he was mourning his mother's death.
Oh, wow. So even like personal stuff
Yeah,
had big political consequences.
absolutely. You couldn't separate the two back then.
Wow.
And even after the mourning period, things didn't really get better.
Oh, no.
His father-in-law, Wan Maiwan,
Yeah.
suffered a major defeat in a military campaign
Oh, wow.
and died shortly after.
That must have been devastating for him.
It was both personally and professionally.
Right.
It was a huge blow.
Oh, man. So it sounds like just one setback after another.
Yeah, pretty much. And unfortunately, it didn't stop there.
Oh, no.
The Li Party, the one he was now connected to,
Yeah.
also fell from grace,
Oh, wow.
leaving Li Shangyin basically ostracized.
Wow. So he's like in no man's land.
Yeah, stuck between these two powerful factions.
So what happened to him then? Did he ever recover?
That's a great question, and it leads us into a fascinating period of his life.
Okay.
He never really regained his political footing,
Okay.
but he did find another outlet for his talents,
Okay.
one that would eventually solidify his legacy.
Ooh, this sounds good.
He returned to his first love,
Okay.
poetry.
So in a way, these setbacks pushed him back toward his art.
Yeah, it's a fascinating twist.
It is.
Right.
Yeah, I'm really eager to hear more about this like artistic resurgence.
Oh, yeah.
But maybe we should save that for the next part of our deep dive.
I think that's a great place to pause.
Okay.
We've covered a lot already.
We have.
From forbidden romances to political turmoil.
Thanks a lot.
And it's clear that Li Shangyin's life was anything but ordinary.
That's for sure.
How these experiences shaped his poetry
Yeah.
and delved deeper into the man behind the verses.
I can't wait.
Me neither.
So we were talking about how Li Shangyin's later years were like marked by these political setbacks, but also this renewed focus on poetry.
Right.
Like almost like those challenges kind of fueled his creativity.
Yeah, it is fascinating how adversity can sometimes lead to those breakthroughs.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Totally. So how did his poetry evolve during this time?
Right.
Did he adopt new styles, experiment with different themes?
He continued to write in a variety of forms,
Okay.
including those love poems that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, those enigmatic love poems.
Right. But what really stands out is his mastery of regulated verse.
Okay, I gotta admit, regulated verse sounds a little intimidating.
It can be.
Yeah, what is it? What makes it so special?
Okay, so regulated verse,
Mhm.
or bloshi in Chinese,
Okay.
it's this highly structured form of poetry
Okay.
with really strict rules
Oh, wow.
about rhyme scheme, tonal patterns, even the use of parallelism.
Oh, wow. So it's like a puzzle.
Yes,
You gotta fit all these pieces together.
exactly. Think of it like composing music
Okay.
with very specific rules about melody and harmony,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, that sounds super challenging.
It was a true test of skill.
Yeah.
But Li Changyin didn't just follow the rules.
Right.
He bent them to his will.
Okay.
He infused regulated verse with his own style,
Mm-hmm.
using dense imagery layered metaphors
Yeah.
and those signature allusions to
Right.
history and mythology
Right.
that make his work so captivating.
Yeah. It's amazing that he could work within these constraints
Right.
and still create something so unique.
Exactly. He was a master
Yeah.
of balancing tradition and innovation,
Okay.
honoring the conventions of regulated verse while expanding its expressive possibilities.
It's impressive.
Yeah, and it's this master.
Mm.
That led to his reputation as one of the most innovative poets of the Tang Dynasty.
Wow. He uses a lot of nature imagery, especially flowers and the changing seasons.
Right.
Which seems kind of fitting given all the turmoil he was living through.
It does. You're right to pick up on that. He often
Yeah.
used natural elements as metaphors.
Oh, okay.
For human experiences, like
Yeah.
fading blossoms
Yeah.
could represent lost love,
Oh, okay.
or the fleeting nature of youth.
Mm-hmm.
The changing seasons could reflect like the ups and downs of the political career,
Yeah.
or even just like the broader sweep of history.
So it's like he's using the natural world to
Mhm.
mirror these like emotional
Right.
landscapes of his characters and even the politics of the time.
Exactly. It's incredibly subtle,
Yeah.
but effective.
Yeah, and it speaks to his ability to connect with these universal themes
Yeah.
of love, loss, the passage of time,
Mm-hmm.
but grounding those themes in like a specific historical and cultural context.
Yeah, so
We've been focusing a lot on like the technical aspects of his poetry,
right.
but what about the emotional impact? Like what kind of feelings does his poetry evoke in you?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Reading Li Shangyin into poetry is uh,
Yeah.
like stepping into a world of shadows and whispers.
Ooh, okay.
You know,
Yeah.
his language is so evocative,
Mm-hmm.
so full of longing and uncertainty.
Okay.
His poems often leave me with a sense of melancholy.
Okay.
Like I've only glimpsed a hidden truth,
Mm-hmm.
but haven't quite grasped it.
Yeah, it sounds like he was a master of evoking those like
Mm-hmm.
subtle, complex emotions that are hard to like express.
Exactly. And that's one reason
Yeah.
his work still resonates with us today.
Mm-hmm.
We might live in a totally different world
Right.
than Li Shangyin did,
Yeah.
but those core human experiences
Mm.
of love loss and longing, they transcend time
Right.
and cultural boundaries.
It's fascinating to think that someone writing over 1,000 years ago
Mm-hmm.
could still have such a profound impact on us
Yes.
today.
It is.
It really speaks to like the enduring power of art
It does.
and how it connects us to the past.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that even in the face of adversity,
Yeah.
art can flourish.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Li Shangyin's career might have been full of setbacks,
Right.
but his poetry ultimately transcended those limitations
Yeah.
and achieved a kind of immortality.
Right. And speaking of transcending limitations,
Yes.
Li Shangyin was eventually appointed as a Sultan Iron Judge.
Right?
That's quite a different role
Yes.
than what he might have imagined earlier in his career.
Right. It was a relatively minor position,
Okay.
and certainly not one
Yeah.
that would have satisfied his ambitions.
Yeah, I imagine not.
But it did offer some financial stability
Okay.
and maybe even a sense of purpose in his later years.
It makes you wonder how he felt about this.
Right.
Was he frustrated or was
Yeah.
he just kind of resigned to it?
We can only speculate.
Yeah.
But his poetry from this period doesn't express like bitterness or resentment.
Okay.
Instead, we see a continued exploration
Yeah.
of themes like the passage of time,
Okay.
the beauty of nature, the complexities of human relationships.
So maybe he found a way to find meaning
Mm,
and fulfillment outside of that traditional path.
I think that's a beautiful insight.
Yeah.
And it speaks to that resilience of the human spirit,
Right.
our ability to adapt and find meaning,
Yeah.
even when things don't go as planned.
So even though his political career didn't like reach those heights he
Right.
might have hoped for,
Yeah,
his poetry ensured that his name would be remembered.
absolutely. Li Shangyin's legacy rests firmly on his artistic achievements.
Yeah.
You know, he might not have achieved the same fame as like Li Bai or Du Fu
Right.
during his lifetime,
Mm-hmm.
but his influence on later poets
Yeah.
is undeniable.
Okay.
But over time, his reputation grew,
Okay.
and he came to be regarded as one of the most innovative
Yeah.
and influential poets of the Tang Dynasty.
So almost like a poet's poet. Like
Yeah.
other writers really admired him.
Right,
Even if he wasn't like a household name.
exactly. And his influence on later poets is undeniable.
Yeah.
You know, he inspired countless imitators and admirers,
Wow.
and his work is still studied and analyzed by scholars today.
And amazing that his words still resonate
It is.
centuries later.
It's pretty powerful.
What do you think is the key to his lasting appeal?
I think it's his ability to capture that complexity of human experience,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in such a beautiful and evocative way.
Yeah.
His poems explore themes that are timeless and universal,
Right.
but he does so with a depth and subtlety that is remarkable.
It's like he invites us to step into his world.
He does.
Right?
Yeah.
To feel like the weight of history,
Yeah.
the ache of lost love,
Uh-huh.
the frustration of unfulfilled ambition.
Oh, there.
And even though we might never fully understand him,
Right.
we can't help but be moved by his words.
That's beautifully said.
Thank you.
And I think that's the ultimate testament to Li Shangyin's power as a poet.
Yeah.
You know, he creates this space
Mm-hmm.
for us to contemplate the mysteries of life,
Yeah.
love the human heart.
Mm-hmm.
And even though we might not find easy answers,
Right.
the journey itself is enriching.
So if we want to truly appreciate his poetry,
Right.
what should we keep in mind as we read his work?
Great question.
Yeah.
I would say the most important thing
Mm-hmm.
is to approach his poetry with an open mind
Okay.
and a willingness to embrace the ambiguity
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
don't get hung up
Right.
on finding a single definitive meaning.
Right.
Instead, allow yourself to be drawn in
Okay.
to the imagery, the sounds, the emotion.
So it's less about solving a puzzle and more about like immersing ourselves.
Exactly. Let the words wash over you.
Okay.
See what feelings and thoughts they evoke.
Okay.
Trust your own intuitions. And allow your interpretations to evolve as you read and reread his work.
And you mentioned earlier it's helpful to read his poems out loud.
Yes.
Why is that?
Li Shangyin was a master of sound and rhythm.
Okay.
His poetry is incredibly musical.
Okay.
And hearing those words spoken aloud
Yeah.
can really bring them to life.
Yeah, it's like another dimension.
Absolutely. So find a quiet spot,
Okay.
maybe light a candle or two,
I like that.
and allow yourself to be transported by the beauty of Li Shangyin's language.
That sounds lovely.
You might be surprised at what you discover.
Okay, so for our listeners who are new to Li Shangyin,
Right.
where would you recommend they start?
There are so many wonderful poems to choose from, but if I had to pick a few, well, we've already mentioned his famous Untitled,
Yeah.
one that sparked so much debate about its meaning.
Yeah, it was really something.
It's a great place to start
Okay.
because it really shows how he weaves together personal and political themes
Yeah.
in a way that's beautiful and enigmatic.
Definitely left an impression. What else would you suggest?
I would also recommend Jinsei,
Jinsei.
often translated as brocade zither.
Brocade zither.
Okay, another poem
Yeah.
full of rich imagery and symbolism.
Okay.
Some scholars believe it's about a past love, while others see it as a reflection on time and memory.
More of those layers of meaning.
Exactly.
What makes this poem so special?
It's hard to explain, but
Yeah.
it's like the poem itself is a brocade zither.
Okay.
You know, it's strings vibrating with the echoes of a life lived,
Okay.
love's lost dreams unfulfilled.
Yeah.
It evokes this melancholy,
Yeah.
but also this awe at the beauty and fragility
Right.
of human experience.
You're making me want to go read it right now.
You should.
Okay, so are there any poems that you would recommend specifically for those who are like drawn to his love poetry?
Absolutely. So his Wu Ti poem
Wu Ti.
also translates to Untitled.
Okay, another Untitled.
It's a classic, a poignant exploration of love longing and the pain of separation. The imagery is so vivid.
Yeah.
You can almost feel the speaker's heartbreak as
Wow.
he remembers this past love.
It's incredible how he does that.
I know.
It's so few words.
Right. Like every word is carefully chosen.
Yeah.
Each image is meticulously crafted
Yeah.
to create that impact.
And that's like a hallmark of his style.
It is.
Right.
He's not afraid to use imagery and symbolism, but he does it in a way that feels elegant
Right.
and evocative.
Okay, so we've got the Untitled poems,
Mhm.
Brocade Zither,
Yes.
and another Untitled poem.
Right.
Are there any others we should check out?
If you want to experience his regulated verse,
Okay.
I'd recommend Yeji Bei,
Yeji Bei.
which translates to sending a poem northward on a rainy night.
Okay.
It's beautiful and evocative.
Yeah.
Captures this feeling of longing and isolation
Okay.
on a rainy night.
I love it. Sounds perfect for like a cozy night in
Exactly.
with some tea and a book of poetry.
And as you read these poems, remember what we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid to read them aloud,
Yeah.
to savor the sounds of the words,
Okay.
and let your own interpretations emerge.
It's like we're giving our listeners a treasure map.
We are to these hidden gems of poetry.
I think we've done a pretty good job introducing Li Shangyin.
I think so too.
We've covered his love life, the political struggle,
Of poetry.
the poetry. It's been a fascinating journey.
It has.
I feel like I learned so much about Tang Dynasty China,
Yeah.
about poetry in general, about the human heart.
It's all connected.
It really is.
Right.
And of course, we couldn't have done it without our source material.
Right.
So big thanks to the scholars and researchers
Absolutely.
who are helping us understand this remarkable poet.
Yes, their work is invaluable.
It is.
And thanks to them,
Yeah.
we can appreciate and be inspired by Li Shangyin today.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yes.
I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay.
We've talked about the beauty and complexity of Li Shangyin's poetry,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's also important to remember that he was a real person.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
he lived a life full of joy and sorrow,
Absolutely.
ambition and disappointment, just like all of us.
Well, I'll go through it.
His poetry is a testament to that human spirit.
It is.
Right?
Yeah.
Our ability to find meaning
Yeah.
and beauty even when things are tough.
Beautiful put.
Thank you.
And maybe by reading his poems,
Yeah.
by letting ourselves go to that world,
Mhm.
we can learn something about ourselves,
Right.
about what connects us across time,
Yeah.
about how art can move and inspire us.
So to our listeners,
Yes.
go explore the world of Li Shangyin.
Read his poem.
Ponder those mysteries.
Let his words spark your own creativity.
And maybe you'll even be inspired to write a poem yourself.
Okay, so we're diving into Emperor Taizong today. And, when you first hear that name, you might think, oh, another emperor, big deal. But trust me, this guy's different.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
We're not just talking about some powerful ruler. We're talking about a leader who shaped the very rules of his time, Kind of like,
Like an Augustus Caesar.
yeah, Augustus Caesar shaping Rome.
Or Genghis Khan
Exactly.
forging an empire from scratch.
This is a guy whose impact echoes through history, you know?
Absolutely.
So today, we're going to go beyond the typical famous emperor story. We're going to see why Taizong wasn't just powerful, but truly pivotal.
Pivotal, yeah, for sure. And what's so fascinating is that he brought together military genius
Military genius, okay.
with, well, historians call it enlightened despotism.
Enlightened despotism.
Yeah.
Now, those two things, they don't usually go hand in hand, do they?
Not really, no.
So we're going to unpack that balancing act today.
Yeah.
And it all begins with his military background. Imagine this, leading troops at 16 years old.
16. Hard to believe.
16. Most of us at 16 were worried about, pop quizzes, not life or death battles, right?
Right, yeah.
Talk about a crash course in leadership under pressure.
Really was. It truly shaped him, you know? That early experience forged a strategic mind, a decisiveness that many leaders spend their entire lives trying to cultivate.
That's fascinating. And speaking of decisiveness, there's this incredible story about the siege of Yamen Pass.
Oh, yes, Yamen Pass.
A 16-year-old Taizong facing a massive Turkic army. He pulls off this incredible psychological move.
A real bluff.
A total bluff, yeah. And it ends up saving the Sui emperor.
Right, the ruler before the Tang Dynasty.
Exactly, just to give everyone some context.
Yeah, important to remember. So at Yanmen Pass, the Sui forces, they were totally outnumbered, trapped.
Oh, wow.
But young Taizong, he sees an opportunity. He figures the Turkic leader must be anxious, so deep in enemy territory.
Right, makes sense.
So Taizong suggests creating an illusion.
An illusion, okay.
The illusion of a huge relief force coming to the Sui's aid.
So basically they're going to fake it till they make it.
Exactly, fake a bigger army. And it worked perfectly. The Turkic forces, they panicked. Fearing a larger army than they anticipated,
Wow.
they retreated.
Amazing.
And this wasn't just luck. It showed Taizong's deep understanding not only of military tactics,
Right.
of the psychology of his opponent.
So he knew how to read people.
Exactly. Reading your opponent is key. And that's a valuable skill, even outside of battlefields.
Totally.
Think boardrooms, negotiations, high-stakes deals.
Makes you wonder how much those early successes, shape a leader's whole approach, their confidence,
Well, for sure.
even decades later.
Absolutely. Early wins can be formative. And those successes were just the beginning for Taizong. Fast forward a bit, we see him playing a crucial role in the founding of the Tang Dynasty, alongside his father, Li Yuan.
Right. A father-son rebellion.
Exactly. They led a rebellion, toppled the Sui dynasty.
Ushering in a new era.
A new era, indeed.
But, some historians suggest that the official Tang records might have, how should I put this?
Embellished.
Yeah, embellished a bit. To make Taizong look, well,
More like the mastermind.
the mastermind, exactly.
It's true. History is often written by the victors. And it wouldn't be surprising if there was some, spin, let's say, to solidify Taizong's image.
Right. So it's important to, read between the lines a bit, consider the motivations behind those accounts.
Like a historical puzzle, yeah.
Exactly.
And that puzzle includes some early setbacks that became valuable lessons for Taizong.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Well, there's the battle outside Gao's city.
Gazo City.
Taizong was sick with malaria, so he ordered his generals to hold back.
Hold back, all right.
But they were eager for glory, attacked too soon, and
wow.
suffered a crushing defeat.
So a classic case of miscommunication.
Miscommunication, yeah.
Impulsive action.
Happens all the time,
It really does.
even in the most well-structured organizations.
So even in ancient China, they had project management issues.
In a way, yeah.
It makes you feel a little better about,
Yeah.
that email you forgot to send.
We've all been there.
Right.
But what's interesting is how Taizong reacted. He didn't point fingers, blame anyone.
Oh, really?
He used the defeat as a learning moment.
A learning moment.
Yeah, it showed him the importance of clear delegation and communication, especially in chaos.
So even history's greats, they had their, their share of mess-ups.
They did. And then, right after this defeat, comes a turning point.
Okay, a turning point.
The death of his rival, Shuju, and the battle with Shuju's son, Xu Renqiao.
Renkao.
This is where Taizong's composure, his strategic brilliance, really shine through.
So this is where we start to see the Taizong, the history remembers, the brilliant strategist,
Exactly.
the leader who could inspire and outmaneuver his opponent.
The battle with Xu Renqiao. It's a fascinating study in contrasts.
Oh, how's that?
Well, Xu Renqiao, he had a larger army, but he was overconfident.
Overconfident.
Underestimated Taizong.
Big mistake.
Taizong, on the other hand, He was patient, analytical. He used the terrain to his advantage,
Smart.
lured Zhuge Ranqiu's forces into a trap, and secured a decisive victory.
Wow, so it wasn't just about brute force, it was about strategy, right?
Exactly. He was playing chess, not checkers.
Chess, not checkers. I like that.
He understood that true leadership requires more than just military might.
Right, it's about more than just winning battles.
And what's remarkable is that all of this happened before he even became emperor.
Really?
These early experiences, these trials by fire, forged in him the qualities that would define his reign.
So like strategic thinking.
Strategic thinking, yeah.
Adaptability.
Adaptability, for sure.
And a deep understanding of human nature.
All crucial for a leader.
It's almost like he was in training for the ultimate leadership role.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And this leads us to the question, how does this battle-hardened strategic mastermind transition into the enlightened despot we talked about earlier?
Right, because we are talking about 7th century China, a time of absolute monarchy.
Exactly. No democracy here.
So how does enlightened despotism even work in that kind of system?
Well, that's what's so fascinating about Taizong. He's operating within a system of absolute power.
No constitution, no parliament.
Right, nothing like that. Yet he seems to grasp that true strength comes from the well-being of his people.
Interesting. So he's not just focused on consolidating his own power.
Not just that, no.
He's actually trying to use that power to make things better for everyone.
Yeah, that seems to be his goal.
It's like he understands that a thriving empire, it's built on more than just military victories, right?
Absolutely, there's more to it.
You need a stable society, a productive economy,
Exactly.
people who feel like they have a stake in the system.
People who feel heard.
And he actually takes steps to achieve this.
He does. He takes concrete steps.
Like what?
Well, for example, he overhauls the legal system, tries to make it more fair, transparent.
Interesting.
He invests heavily in education.
Education.
And
Okay.
recognizes that a well-educated populace is key to progress.
It's almost like he's applying that same strategic thinking from the battlefield to the challenges of governing a vast empire.
That's a great observation. He's constantly analyzing, adapting, trying to find the best way to ensure stability and prosperity.
Fascinating.
He even establishes a system of meritocratic appointments.
Meritocratic appointments.
So meaning promoting officials based on their skills.
So not their family connections.
Exactly. A pretty radical idea for the time.
It really is, considering most empires back then. It was all about who you were related to, not what you could actually do.
A real departure from tradition. And it's one of the reasons why his reign, the Zhenguan era, is considered a golden age for the Tang Dynasty.
A golden age, wow. So this period of peace and prosperity, did it happen because of all this? Or in spite of it?
That's a question historians debate. Some argue that the shadow of the Xuanwu Gate incident...
Right, that's where he killed his brothers.
Exactly, a very dark chapter. Some argue that maybe the guilt he carried fueled his desire to create a truly just society.
So like a way of atoning for the past.
Perhaps. But even if that wasn't his main motivation, it's clear that Taizong knew how to earn respect and loyalty from his people.
So he's not just relying on fear and military might.
Not solely, no. There's more to it than that.
It's fascinating how he balances these different approaches.
Yeah.
Strength and compassion,
A delicate balance.
pragmatism and idealism.
It's what makes him such an intriguing figure. He's not just a conqueror or a tyrant. He's a complex leader, grappling with the challenges of power in a very unique way.
He's not just trying to rule, he's trying to build something lasting.
Exactly, a legacy. And to do that, he had to think beyond military strategy and politics.
Right, it's bigger than that.
He had to think about culture,
Culture, okay.
education,
Right.
the values that would shape the Tang Dynasty for generations.
So he's not just a warrior king.
Not just that.
He's a culture shaper, a reformer.
Exactly. And one of the most significant ways he influenced Tang culture was through his embrace of Confucianism.
Confucianism, interesting.
He saw it as a framework for a harmonious society.
Right, Confucianism is all about respect for elders,
Yes, filial piety.
social harmony.
Harmony is key in Confucianism, but also an emphasis on education.
Education, right?
That's it.
Meritocracy.
Which he was already implemented.
Exactly, it fit perfectly with his vision. And righteous leadership.
So he's incorporating these philosophical ideas
Yeah.
into his way of governing.
He's trying to build a moral foundation for the empire. And it's this combination of strategic brilliance, political savvy, and a genuine desire for a just and flourishing society. That makes Taizong such a remarkable figure.
He's not just a conqueror, he's a builder.
A builder, yeah.
A reformer.
A reformer, for sure.
A patron of the arts and learning.
It's a side of Taizong we don't often hear about.
The emperor is a scholar.
The philosopher king.
Yeah.
And it's this aspect of his rule that cements his legacy as one of China's most influential emperors.
Wow.
He set the stage for unprecedented growth and cultural flourishing. The Tang Dynasty became one of the most powerful and prosperous empires in world history. So this is where we see the Enlightened, an enlightened despot. But even with all these accomplishments, there's still that lingering question about the Xuanwu Gate incident. How do we reconcile these two sides of Taizong?
It's a question that keeps historians up at night. Was he a genuinely benevolent ruler, driven by a desire for justice? Or was he a master manipulator, using Confucian principles and enlightened policies as tools for power and legitimacy?
Yeah, it's tough to say for sure. The line between good intentions and political strategy, it can get pretty blurry.
It can indeed. But one thing's undeniable. His reign was a period of remarkable achievement. A time of innovation, expansion, and cultural flourishing that left a lasting impact.
So we've got this complex figure, a leader who achieved great things, but also made some very difficult choices.
That's Taizong in a nutshell.
What can we learn from his story?
I think it reminds us that leadership is rarely simple. It's about navigating complexity, balancing competing priorities, making tough choices in the face of uncertainty.
And remembering that even the most successful leaders are still human with flaws and contradictions.
Exactly, they're not perfect. And understanding those complexities can give us a deeper appreciation for the challenges and the triumphs of leadership.
Both in the past and the present.
Absolutely. Taizong's story, with its blend of military prowess, political maneuvering, and genuine efforts to improve lives, offers valuable insights into the multifaceted nature of leadership.
Right. We see how early experiences, both good and bad, can really shape a leader's worldview.
For sure. And we see how a leader can grapple with the tension between power and morality.
Power and morality.
Between pragmatism and idealism.
A tough balancing act.
It is. Taizong's legacy continues to fascinate and challenge us.
It does.
It prompts us to ask questions about leadership, about the complexities of history, about the impact of one individual on the course of human events.
Big questions.
Big questions indeed. And as we dive deeper into Taizong's reign and explore the specific policies and reforms that defined his era, keep this question in mind.
Okay, what's the question?
How did this emperor, shaped by both battlefield experience and philosophical ideals, navigate that delicate balance between power and enlightenment?
That's a fascinating question. A question we'll definitely be exploring further as we continue our deep dive into the life and legacy of Emperor Taizong. So we left off with that Xuanwu Gate incident. Really makes you think about the complexities of leadership.
Yeah, it's a pivotal moment, that's for sure. Taizong secures his power, but at a huge cost, personal and moral cost.
Right, a lot of bloodshed.
And the question becomes, how does this act shape him? How does it shape his approach to ruling an empire?
Right, he's carrying the weight of this event now. Does it push him towards, tyranny? Or does it somehow lead him down that path of the enlightened ruler?
That's what's so fascinating about Taizong. On one hand, you see him consolidating power, suppressing rebellions, typical actions of an emperor securing his position.
Right, got to hold on to that power.
But then, on the other hand, he starts these reforms, these policies, that genuinely seem aimed at improving people's lives.
So it's not just about holding on to power.
No, not just that.
It's about using that power for something more.
Exactly, something beyond just staying on the throne.
And this is where that whole enlightened despotism thing gets tricky.
It really does.
Because remember, we're talking about absolute monarchy here.
Right. No limits on his power.
No constitution, no parliament to check him.
He's the ultimate authority.
But he seems to get it, that true strength lies in the well-being of his people.
He seems to understand that, yeah.
It's like he realizes a thriving empire needs more than just military victories.
Oh, absolutely. You need a stable society.
Right, stability.
A productive economy.
A strong economy.
People who feel like they're being heard.
People who feel invested in the system.
Exactly.
And he actually takes steps to make that happen.
He does. He takes concrete actions.
Like what kind of actions?
Well, he overhauls the legal system, for one.
Yeah.
Tries to make it more fair, more transparent.
That's huge.
He invests heavily in education.
Education, okay.
Because he recognizes that a well-educated populace is key to progress.
It's like he's taking that strategic mind.
Yeah.
that he honed on the battlefield
Right.
and applying it to governing this vast empire.
That's a really insightful observation. He's constantly analyzing, adapting, trying to find the most effective ways to ensure stability and prosperity for everyone.
It's fascinating.
And then there's this system he implements, meritocratic appointments.
Meritocratic appointments, remind me what that is again?
It means promoting officials based on their skills and abilities.
Okay, right. Not just because of their family.
Exactly, not because of who they're related to.
Which was pretty radical for that time period, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. A huge departure from tradition. And it's one of the big reasons why his reign, the Zhangguan era,
The Xinguan era.
is considered a golden age for the Tang Dynasty.
A golden age. Wow, that's impressive. So all this peace and prosperity. Was it a direct result of the Xuanwu Gate incident? Or did it happen in spite of it?
It's hard to say for sure. Historians still debate this. Some argue that the shadow of that event, the guilt he might have felt, it might have pushed him to create a truly just society.
So like a way of making amends for the past.
It's possible, a form of atonement. But even if that wasn't his main motivation, he clearly understood the importance of earning respect and loyalty from his people.
So it's not just about ruling through fear and military might.
Not entirely, no. There's more to it than that.
It's amazing how he manages to balance these different approaches. Strength and compassion.
Enough balance to strike.
Pragmatism and idealism.
So what makes him such a complex and fascinating figure?
Right, he's not just a one-dimensional conqueror.
Not at all. He's not just a tyrant. He's a leader grappling with these very human challenges of power. And he's trying to do it in a way that benefits everyone.
He's trying to build something that'll last.
Exactly, a lasting legacy. And to do that, he knows he has to think beyond just military strategy, beyond political games.
It's about the bigger picture.
Exactly. He has to consider culture,
Culture, okay.
education.
Right, the building blocks of society.
He has to think about the values that will shape the Tang Dynasty for generations to come.
He's not just a warrior king, then.
No, he's more than that.
He's a culture shaper, a reformer.
I think that's a very accurate description.
Right.
And one of the most significant ways he influenced Tang culture was through his embrace of Confucianism.
Confucianism, interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, he saw in Confucian teachings a framework for a harmonious society.
Right, Confucianism, it's all about respect. Right?
Yes, respect for elders, filial piety.
Social harmony.
Harmony is a core principle, but it's also about education.
Which he was already emphasizing.
Exactly, it aligned perfectly with his vision, and it's about meritocracy.
Which he was also implementing.
Precisely, so it all fit together, and it's about righteous leadership.
So he's taking these philosophical ideas, and he's actually integrating them into his government.
He's trying to build a moral foundation for the entire empire, and it's this combination of strategic thinking, political skill, and a genuine desire for a just and thriving society. That makes Taizong such a remarkable and unique leader.
He's not just about conquest, he's about building something better.
Exactly. He's a builder, a reformer.
And a patron of the arts and learning, we can't forget that.
Right, that's a side of him we don't always hear about.
The emperor is scholar, the philosopher king.
It's a fascinating aspect of his rule, and it's a big part of why he's considered one of China's most influential emperors.
He really left his mark.
He did. He set the stage for incredible growth and cultural flourishing. The Tang Dynasty became one of the most powerful and prosperous empires in world history.
So this is where the enlightened part really comes through. But even with all this, there's still that question about the Xuanwu Gate incident. How do we reconcile those two sides of Taizong?
It's the question that continues to fascinate historians. Was he truly a good ruler, driven by a desire for justice? Or was he a shrewd manipulator, someone who used those Confucian principles and enlightened policies to solidify his power?
It's tough to know for sure, isn't it?
It is. The line between good intentions and political strategy. It can be incredibly blurry.
And it seems like that line is especially blurry with Taizong.
Absolutely. But what we can say for certain is that his reign was a time of remarkable achievement.
Achievement in so many areas.
Innovation, expansion, cultural flourishing. He left a permanent mark on Chinese history.
We're talking about a complex figure here, a leader who achieved amazing things, but also made some very difficult decisions.
That's the complexity of leadership, I suppose.
What do you think we can learn from Taizong's story?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is that leadership is rarely straightforward. It's about navigating those complexities, balancing competing priorities, making those tough calls when you're not sure what the outcome will be.
It's about recognizing that even the most successful leaders They're still human. They're not perfect.
Exactly. They have flaws, they make mistakes.
And sometimes they make really hard choices.
And understanding that human side of leadership, I think it can give us a deeper appreciation for the challenges and the triumphs of leadership.
Throughout history and even today.
Absolutely. Taizong's story, with its mix of military achievements, political maneuvering, and genuine attempts to make life better for his people, it offers us a really valuable glimpse into the multifaceted nature of leadership.
We see how his early experiences, both the victories and the defeats, they shaped how he viewed the world.
For sure, those early experiences are crucial, and we see how he struggles with that tension between power and morality,
That push and pull between what's right and what's necessary.
between pragmatism and idealism.
It's a tough balance to find.
It is, and Taizong's story, it continues to fascinate us. It challenges us to think about the nature of leadership, the complexities of history, the impact that a single person can have on the world.
Big questions, big ideas to wrestle with.
And as we move into the specifics of Taizong's reign, the policies and reforms that really defined his era, I want you to keep this one question in mind.
Okay, I'm listening.
How did this emperor, shaped by both the battlefield and philosophy, how did he navigate that delicate balance between power and enlightenment?
That's a great question to consider, and it's one we'll be exploring in depth as we continue our deep dive into the life and legacy of Emperor Taizong. We've been talking about enlightened despotism, and I gotta say, it still feels kind of like a contradiction. Like, how can absolute power really be used to serve the people?
It's a question that's baffled historians for ages, And Taizong's reign, it gives us a really interesting case study because remember, we're talking about a totally different world back then.
Yeah, no democracy, no limits on the emperor's power.
Right, the emperor's word was law.
So how did he handle that power? And how did he try to, use it for good?
Well, one of the key things he did was he understood the importance of good advisors. He surrounded himself with smart people.
Smart people.
People from all sorts of backgrounds, scholars, generals, even some of his old rivals.
Oh, wow, even rivals.
And he really listened to them, He valued their input.
So he wasn't just trying to silence anyone who disagreed with him.
No, not at all. He knew a wise ruler needs to hear different perspectives, even the opposing ones.
I remember reading that he once said, "A mirror shows you your face, but wise counsel reflects your heart."
Yeah, that's a great quote. It shows that he knew his own viewpoint wasn't enough. He needed guidance from others.
Makes sense. And it wasn't just about getting advice. It was about creating a system where talented people could rise up.
Exactly. A system based on merit, not on family ties.
Right, like that system of meritocratic appointments he put in place.
A pretty radical idea for that time.
It really was. So he's shaking up the power structure, giving opportunities to people who might have been ignored before.
That's a great way to put it. And this focus on merit, it wasn't just about appointments. It was reflected in his policies, too.
Oh, like how?
Well, he brought in land reforms, Tried to distribute land more fairly among the peasants.
Okay, land reform.
He invested in infrastructure.
Infrastructure, like what?
Canals, roads, things to improve trade and communication.
So he's building up the empire, literally.
He's laying the groundwork for economic growth, for social mobility.
Giving people a chance to improve their lives.
Exactly, no matter their background.
And I imagine education played a big part in this, too.
Absolutely. He expanded the Imperial University, made it more accessible to everyone.
Not just the elite.
Not just the elite, no. He encouraged studying the Confucian classics.
Right, Confucianism was important to him.
But he also promoted translating texts from other cultures.
Other cultures.
Buddhist texts, scientific treatises from India, Central Asia.
So he wasn't afraid of new ideas.
Not at all. He wanted to learn from everyone.
It's this openness that really made the Tang Dynasty so vibrant.
It really did a truly cosmopolitan era.
And this is where we see the real impact of Taizong's rule. It's not just the battles he won or the political moves he made. It's this lasting legacy he created.
A legacy of reforms, of supporting the arts and education. A legacy of trying to build a better society for everyone.
A society that's more just, more prosperous.
And that's a legacy that still inspires us today.
It really does.
It reminds us that leadership isn't just about power.
There's more to it than that.
It's about vision, about compassion, about using your position to create a world where everyone can flourish.
Even in a system like absolute monarchy.
Even in a system like that, there's room for enlightened leadership.
Leadership that puts people first.
Exactly. Leadership that encourages growth, learning, Leadership that leaves a positive mark on history.
Taizong's story might be centuries old, but those lessons, they're still relevant today.
Oh, absolutely. The importance of good advice.
Good advice.
Choosing people based on merit.
Merit over connection.
The power of education, the commitment to the common good.
Timeless principles.
Timeless indeed.
As we wrap up our deep dive into Emperor Taizong, I want to leave you with a final thought. How can we apply these principles in our own lives, in our communities, in the world around us?
That's the question we should all be asking ourselves.
How can we all strive to be more enlightened leaders, no matter where we are or what we do?
Because Taizong's story shows us that even when power seems absolute, the pursuit of enlightenment in ourselves and in our leaders, it's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely. So as you go about your day, as you interact with others, remember the legacy of Emperor Taizong. Remember that true leadership is about using your power to create a better world for everyone, a world that's more just, more prosperous, more enlightened. And that's it for our deep dive this week. Thanks for listening. Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. This time, we're going to explore the later years of Emperor Taizong, one of the most famous rulers of China's Tang Dynasty.
Yes.
And we have this amazing historical analysis to guide us.
Okay.
It was originally written in Chinese.
Wow.
I'm really excited to see what we can learn.
Yeah, me too.
So, a lot of times we hear about all the successes of Taizong's early reign,
Right.
but today we're kind of focusing on those later years
Interest.
when things got a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, his later reign was full of difficult situations.
Exactly. And I think it'll be interesting to look at how he dealt with those challenges,
Absolutely.
how they impacted his decisions.
And how it shaped the Tang Dynasty.
Yeah, so we're not just going to list off a bunch of facts.
No.
We want to kind of get inside his head a little bit.
Get into his mindset.
Yeah, understand what he was dealing with.
The pressures, the context of the time.
Exactly. And I hear there's some juicy stuff too. Like military campaigns that didn't exactly go to plan.
Definitely some ups and downs there.
Family feuds that would make Shakespeare jealous.
Oh, some real drama.
And even a prince who was, obsessed with everything Turkic.
Oh, yeah, that's a fascinating story.
So it just goes to show that even the most powerful rulers
Even emperors.
have to deal with some pretty unexpected problems.
It's all part of the human experience.
All right, well, let's jump in then.
Sounds good.
So we'll start with Taizong's military ambitions.
Okay.
Now, the Tang Dynasty was a major power at this point,
Absolutely. A dominant force.
but they had this ongoing issue with the kingdom of Goguryeo on the Korean Peninsula.
Right. That was a constant source of tension.
And this is where the geopolitical situation gets really interesting.
Yes, it's quite complex.
So you have three kingdoms on the peninsula.
Okay.
You have Goguryeo in the
The
north,
strongest of the three.
and then Bokje and Silla in the south.
Each with their own alliances and rivalries.
Right, so it's kind of this delicate balancing act for everyone involved.
Exactly. And any shift in power could have huge consequences.
And Goguryeo in particular was like a constant thorn in the Tang Dynasty's side.
Definitely a persistent challenge.
I mean, they were raiding Silla, which was a Tang ally,
A direct provocation.
and refusing to pay tribute.
A major sign of disrespect in those times.
Right, it was basically a direct challenge to the Tang Dynasty's authority.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to compare Taizong's approach to Goguryeo
Yeah.
with how Emperor Yang of the Sui dynasty handled things.
Oh, interesting comparison.
Yeah, because his constant attacks on Goguryeo,
Huge, massive attacks.
right, they actually contributed to the Sui dynasty's collapse.
Wow, so Taizong really needed to learn from those mistakes.
He had to avoid repeating history.
For sure, so what was his strategy?
Well, he was much more cautious.
I see.
He kept his army smaller,
Okay.
around 100,000 troops.
So a more manageable force.
Yeah, and less strain on his resources and people.
Makes sense. And what was his overall goal?
A swift victory.
A decisive win.
He wanted to end this conflict quickly and decisively.
But Goguryeo wasn't just going to give up that easily.
Now, they were known for their resilience.
Right, they had a really strong defense system.
What's been called a 3-in-1 defense system?
3-in-1, what's that?
So you have natural barriers, strategically placed castles, and brutal Korean winters.
Oh, wow. So even with careful planning, Goguryeo was a tough nut to crack.
It was a formidable challenge.
And it really slowed down the Tang army's progress.
It was a major obstacle.
And this is where we see the rise of this legendary Tang general,
Oh, yes.
Xu Rangui.
A remarkable figure.
He started as an ordinary soldier, right?
Just a common soldier.
But he rose through the ranks because of his bravery.
Incredible bravery.
There's that famous story.
Oh, the Battle of Anchi City?
Yes, Tell me about that.
So the Tang army was outnumbered,
Okay.
and Shi Rongui charges into battle
Dressed all in white.
on a white horse.
Like something out of a movie.
It's an epic image.
And he helps secure a Tang victory.
He was instrumental in their success.
It's amazing.
A true hero.
But it's not just about Shui Rengui's individual bravery.
No, it's also about Taizong's leadership.
He was able to spot talent in the middle of this difficult campaign.
He recognized Shi Rengui's potential.
He gave him the opportunity to shine.
A testament to Taizong's ability to identify and utilize talent.
But even with Shui Rengui's heroics,
Yes.
Taizong couldn't get that quick win he was hoping for.
The campaign faced setbacks.
So what happened?
There was some tension between strategy and keeping the emperor safe.
Okay, that makes sense.
Some advisors thought they should bypass Goguryeu's mountain
To
fortresses.
speed things up.
Yeah, but others?
Like Zheng Wuji.
Right, he prioritized Taizong's safety.
He was always a cautious voice.
He argued for a more measured approach.
So they were kind of stuck between these two options.
They wanted a quick victory, but also had to protect their emperor.
That's a tough call.
A difficult balancing act.
And ultimately, time became a factor.
Winter was approaching.
Those harsh Korean winters.
Right, and Taizong had to make a decision.
So he withdrew.
A strategic retreat.
It wasn't the decisive victory he wanted,
No.
but probably the right choice under the circumstances.
A necessary decision, given the situation.
And it's interesting because Goguryeo was eventually defeated later.
Right, during the reign of Taizong's successor.
So in a way, his efforts did contribute to the eventual victory.
He laid the groundwork.
It's a reminder that sometimes victories happen in stages,
Over time.
with different people contributing along the way.
It's a collective effort.
But things weren't exactly peaceful back home either.
No, there were troubles brewing.
This is where the family drama comes in.
The battle for succession.
So Taizong himself came to power through a coup, right?
The Xuanwu Gate incident.
Where he basically eliminated his rival.
It's a brutal power struggle.
So you can imagine how sensitive he was to the issue of succession.
It was a delicate matter.
And now he had to deal with a similar power struggle among his own sons.
History seemed to be repeating itself.
Talk about intense family dynamics.
A truly Shakespearean drama.
So who are the main players in all of this?
Well, the main contenders were Crown Prince Li Shangyin
Okay.
and his rival Prince Li Tai.
And they were quite different, weren't they?
Oh, very distinct personality.
So Li Shangyin, he was the heir apparent.
The designated successor.
But it sounds like he was going through a bit of a rebellious phase.
That's one way to put it.
He became fascinated with Turkic culture.
A rather unusual interest for a crown prince.
Yeah, wearing their clothes.
Adopting their hairstyles.
Even living in a Turkic tent.
Instead of the palace.
That's a statement.
And there are stories of him performing some strange rituals.
Oh, like what?
Having his attendants cut their faces.
What?
To show their loyalty.
Wow.
It was an imitation of a Turkic funeral custom.
Definitely not your typical princely behavior.
A bit eccentric, to say the least.
What about Li Tai? What was he like?
Li Tai, the Prince of Wei.
Okay.
He was playing a different game.
A different approach.
He was charming, intelligent, a master strategist.
Okay, so he knew how to work the system.
He's a skilled politician.
He built relationships with powerful officials.
Cultivating alliances.
Commissioned scholarly works.
Patron of the arts.
And really presented himself as the ideal successor.
A carefully crafted image.
While Li Shangyin was rebelling,
Open defiance.
Li Tai was trying to win favor through political maneuvering.
A more subtle approach.
And it seemed to be working.
He gained a lot of support at court.
He had advisors like Sen Wenbin and Lu Ji promoting his cause.
A powerful faction.
But I'm guessing not everyone was on board with his plan.
There were other voices.
People who were maybe a little bit concerned about this rivalry.
Concerned about the potential consequences.
Especially given the history of violence in their family.
The shadow of the Xuanwu Gate incident loomed large.
So who were these voices of caution?
Two of Taizong's most trusted advisors.
Okay.
Zhang Wuji.
And Chu Suiliang,
Wise men.
known for their integrity and their loyalty to Taizong.
And they were probably worried about what this competition between the princes might lead to.
They feared it could escalate,
Lead to more conflict.
possibly even violence.
They'd seen it happen before.
And they didn't want to see history repeat itself.
Right, and I'm guessing Li Tai's carefully crafted image started to crack a little bit.
It did. His tactics backfired.
In what way?
He went too far in trying to please his father.
Okay, how so?
He told Taizong that if he became emperor, he would kill his own son
What?
to ensure a smooth succession for his younger brothers.
Wow, that's a bold strategy.
A rather ruthless one.
And I bet Taizong wasn't buying it.
No, he saw through it.
It was Chu Suiliang who pointed out the flaw in Li Tai's logic, right?
Yes, he said that no one would willingly give up absolute power.
Especially not by sacrificing their own child.
It was a cynical ploy.
Taizong realized Li Tai was being manipulative.
His true colors were revealed, so his big plan kind of blew up in his face.
His ambitions were exposed.
What about Li Shangyin?
Well, he was becoming increasingly desperate,
Feeling the pressure.
and he decided to take a huge risk.
Oh boy, what did he do?
He started plotting to seize power by force,
A coup.
a rebellion against his own father.
Coups seem to run in this family.
A dangerous pattern.
And a key figure enters the picture at this point.
Who's that?
YuZhen,
A famous general.
one of the founding heroes of the Tang Dynasty.
A respected figure.
Wait, so a respected general was involved in this plot.
It seems so.
What was he thinking?
It appears he had his own reasons for joining the conspiracy.
Like what?
He had been reprimanded by Taizong
For what?
for his conduct during a military campaign.
Oh, so he was feeling disgruntled.
He felt unfairly treated,
Resentment can be a powerful motivator.
and it made him vulnerable to Li Shangyin ideas,
So ambition and resentment, a dangerous combination.
a recipe for trouble.
And their connection was strengthened through YuZhen's son-in-law,
Helan Chushi,
who was already part of Li Shangyi's inner circle.
a link between the two.
So this alliance was formed,
A plot was hatched.
and there were even hints that YuZhen had bigger plans.
Some historians believe he saw Li Shangyin as a puppet ruler,
Someone he could control.
a means to gain more power for himself.
It wasn't just about supporting Li Shangyin.
It was about personal ambition.
But even though he joined the conspiracy,
He made his choice.
YuZhen wasn't exactly at peace with his decision.
No, he was tormented by guilt.
Really?
He couldn't sleep. He was constantly sighing.
Sounds like he was having second thoughts.
His conscience was weighing on him.
His wife even begged him to confess.
She feared for their family's safety.
It's a powerful reminder that even those who plot against the throne
Even those who seek power,
aren't immune to the consequences.
there's always a price to pay.
So how did this plot unravel?
Well, like many conspiracies,
Yeah.
it was undone by betrayal.
Someone talked.
Helan Chushi
YuZhen's own son-in-law.
betrayed the plot to save himself.
Well, that's called.
Desperate act of self-preservation.
And the consequences were swift and severe.
Right? Hao Junji was executed for treason,
And Li Shangyin.
stripped of his title as crown prince.
So now Taizong is facing this nightmare scenario.
A crisis of succession.
Two of his sons caught up in rebellion and betrayal.
A devastating blow.
What did he do?
This is where we see Taizong's wisdom and the impact of his own past.
How so?
During Li Shangyi's interrogation,
Okay.
the prince confessed that he'd only resorted to such drastic measures.
Because.
Li Tai had been relentlessly bullying him,
Oh, wow. So he felt trapped
pushed to the edge.
with no other way out.
Desperate times,
And this realization had a profound effect on Taizong.
he saw the parallels
Between his son's rivalry
and his own past struggles.
with his brothers,
The violence of the Xuanwu Gate incident,
history was repeating itself.
a cycle of ambition and betrayal.
I can't imagine how devastating that must have been for him.
To see his family torn apart by the same forces that had brought him to power.
He was determined to break that cycle.
To find a different path.
He knew he couldn't choose Li Shangyin
No.
or Li Tai.
They were both consumed by ambition.
A thirst for revenge.
They were unfit to rule.
He needed another solution.
A different approach.
Meanwhile, back in the capital.
Was Li Zi the Prince of Jin?
Oh, yeah, the quiet one.
The one who kind of stayed out of the whole mess.
The one we haven't even really talked about yet.
Exactly.
Interesting choice.
A surprising move, but a really smart one.
So what made him choose Li Zi?
Well, I think Taizong, looking back on his own rise to power,
Yeah, that violent incident at Xuanwu Gate.
he saw how destructive ambition could be,
Uh-huh.
and he was seeing that same pattern play out.
In his older sons.
Exactly.
So Li Zi was kind of the safe option.
The one who wasn't actively scheming or fighting.
Yeah, he was kind of just there.
And this really speaks to Taizong's understanding of human nature.
What do you mean?
Well, he knew that choosing one of the warring brothers,
It would probably just lead to more conflict.
more bloodshed, more instability.
He was thinking about the long-term stability of the dynasty.
Absolutely.
And it's still a gamble, right?
Of course, every decision has risks.
I mean, we don't really know much about Li Zi.
He was a bit of an unknown quantity.
Did he actually have what it took to be a good emperor?
That's a question historians still debate.
I see.
I mean, Li Zi's reign did have some notable achievements,
Okay.
but it was also a time of political intrigue.
More drama.
It's hard to say for sure how much of that was due to Li Zi himself.
Versus the circumstances he inherited.
Exactly.
It's that what if of history.
The path's not taken.
We can never know for sure what might have happened if Taizong had chosen differently.
It's one of the mysteries of history.
But it's fascinating to think about.
It sparks our imagination.
We've been focusing on these challenges and controversies.
The difficult parts of Taizong's later reign.
But it's important to remember that overall, his reign is still considered a golden age for China.
The Zhenguan era, as it's known.
A time of prosperity, cultural growth, military success.
Taizong laid the foundation for a dynasty that would last for centuries.
He's often held up as the model emperor.
The embodiment of Confucian ideals.
And it's interesting because we see him evolve over time.
How so?
Well, he goes from seizing power through force
At Swanway Gate.
to choosing this peaceful, almost passive approach to succession.
A significant shift.
It makes you wonder how much his own personal experiences shaped his thinking.
How his personality influenced his decisions.
Yeah, were his choices driven by his own beliefs?
Or by the demands of being emperor.
It's a complex question.
There's no easy answer.
So as we wrap up this look into Taizong's later years,
Okay.
what are some of the big takeaways?
What should our listeners keep in mind?
I think one of the biggest takeaways for me
Yeah.
is that even the most successful leaders
Even emperors
face setbacks.
then have to make tough choices.
Taizong's later reign, with its military challenges,
The succession drama.
the personal dilemmas,
It reminds us that power comes with a heavy burden,
and the constant threat of conflict.
both inside and outside the court.
It's not all about glorious victories and easy decisions.
It's much more complicated than that.
It's messy, with ambition, betrayal, wise choices, compromises.
The full spectrum of human experience
It really brings history to life.
makes it more relatable.
And I think it highlights the importance of looking deeper,
Beyond the surface level facts
understanding the motivations and the
and
challenges.
consequences of choices
Now, we focused on a lot of specific events,
and personalities.
but if you had to step back for a moment,
Yeah.
is there a question that we haven't really answered?
A question that might spark our listeners' curiosity.
Something to ponder.
I think what really stands out to me is how much emphasis is placed on Taizong's personal role in everything.
Yeah,
He's not just a figurehead.
right.
He's deeply involved in military strategy,
Family disputes.
decisions about succession.
He's in the thick of it.
It makes you wonder how much his own personality shaped the events of his reign.
That's a great question.
It reminds us that history is made by people,
Real people with their own motivations.
their flaws, their experiences.
And those personal factors can have a huge impact on the course of events.
Absolutely.
We often think of historical figures as these larger-than-life icons,
But they were human beings,
navigating complex situations.
just like us.
I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
A lot to unpack.
This deep dive into Emperor Taizong's later years.
It's been fascinating.
We've uncovered military struggles,
Political maneuvering,
family drama.
psychological intrigue,
It's history come to life.
and it shows how much there is to learn.
Even about figures we think we know well.
There's always more to discover.
So for our listener who's now totally hooked on Tang Dynasty history,
Who wants to keep learning?
what would you suggest for further exploration?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Zizi Tongjin.
Yeah.
It's a great place to start.
For those detailed historical accounts.
It can be a bit dense,
Okay.
but it's packed with information.
About Taizong's reign.
And all the events we've been talking about,
It's like the ultimate source.
a treasure trove of historical knowledge.
A great starting point for anyone who wants to dig deeper.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for joining me on this journey into the past.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a fascinating exploration
Taizong's later years are full of surprises
and valuable lessons.
about leadership, about history, about human nature.
And for our listeners, keep exploring, keep asking questions.
And keep those brains buzzing.
Until next time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how history is shaped,
Yeah.
Not just by like big events and wars and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but also by individual people.
By their personalities.
Yeah, and the choices they made.
Their motivations.
We could probably talk about this for hours.
Definitely.
But I think we've given our listeners a pretty good overview
A good glimpse into this period.
of Taizong's reign.
It's a fascinating period.
And I think that's part of what makes history so interesting.
What do you mean?
Well, it's like this never-ending journey of discovery.
Right.
Every new detail we uncover,
Leads to more questions.
our insights.
And a deeper appreciation for how complex the past really was.
Exactly. It's not just about memorizing names and dates.
No,
It's about understanding
the forces that shape societies
the choices people make
and how those choices have ripple
that
effects.
can last for generations.
It's all connected.
So for our listener who's now totally hooked on Tang Dynasty history,
Eager to learn more.
what are some resources you'd recommend?
Well, we've mentioned Zizi Tongjin a few times.
Yeah, the Comprehensive Chronicle of Chinese History.
Exactly. It's a great place to start.
For detailed accounts of this era.
It's a bit dense,
Okay, fair warning.
but it's packed with information.
But there are also some really good historical novels out there.
Oh, yeah.
And fictionalized accounts of the Tang Dynasty
That can bring this era to life.
in a more engaging way
Yeah, sometimes those stories can help us connect,
with the human side of history.
put faces and emotions to the events,
They can spark our imaginations,
make us feel like we're right there in the middle of it all.
experiencing the intrigue, the drama.
Exactly, and that's what makes history so captivating.
It's not just a collection of facts,
It's a tapestry of human experience.
full of triumphs and tragedies.
Wisdom and folly.
I think we did a good job with this deep dive.
I agree.
We've gone beyond the surface level.
We've explored Taizong's motivations,
The challenges he faced,
the consequences of his choices.
especially in those later years.
A period that's often overlooked.
But as we've seen, just as important as his early reign.
It all contributes to his legacy.
And the future of the Tang Dynasty.
Absolutely.
We've uncovered military struggles, political maneuvering.
Family drama, psychological intrigue.
It's all part of the story.
It's all connected.
And it reminds us that history is never simple.
It's full of twists and turns.
Unexpected outcomes.
And that's what makes it so fascinating to study.
So until our next deep dive,
Keep exploring.
keep questioning.
And keep those brains buzzing.
See you next time.
Ready for a historical mind-bender. The famous YuZhen of China. She might not have been the first woman to hold that kind of power.
Really?
Today we're going beyond the usual suspects
Okay.
to explore early female leadership.
Like it.
We've got Hatshepsut,
Okay.
Cleopatra,
Mm-hmm.
Empress Matilda,
Right.
even a mysterious Tibetan queen named YuZhen. And get this, we'll be comparing them all to YuZhen to see what her story tells us about women and power across the globe.
It's fascinating to think about how these women,
Yeah.
separated by so much distance in culture,
Right.
they all had similar challenges getting authority.
Yeah.
Their stories give us a unique perspective on how ideas about gender and leadership have changed, or maybe haven't changed.
Yeah, throughout history.
Yeah.
So let's start with Hatshepsut.
Right.
She ruled Egypt as pharaoh in the 15th century BC.
Wow.
Now, most pharaohs we think of...
Yeah. I'll have those majestic beards, right?
Right.
But Hatshepsut,
Yeah.
she wore a false beard.
Wow, talk about making a statement.
Right.
Yeah.
It wasn't just fashion, though.
No.
It was a strategic power play.
Interesting.
Ancient Egypt was really patriarchal.
Uh-huh.
And those visual symbols,
Yeah.
they were so important for authority.
Right.
So by taking on those traditional markers of male power,
Mm-hmm.
Hatshepsut was directly challenging those norms and making her subjects accept her as pharaoh.
That's brilliant.
It wasn't just ruling.
Right.
It was about changing how
Yeah.
people saw her authority.
Exactly.
It makes me wonder,
Yeah.
did other female rulers do similar things to get past those gender barriers?
Absolutely. Cleopatra VII, for example.
Oh, yeah.
She used her charm, intellect, and those strategic alliances with Roman leaders to have influence in a world where women were often seen as pawns in these political games.
Yeah.
She never had the title of emperor.
Right. But she had so much power
Yeah.
just through her relationships with guys like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony.
It's like she found a different way to get power within the system.
Yeah.
Not by directly challenging male authority,
Right.
but by using those relationships
Oh,
to
yeah.
get what she wanted. That's so fascinating.
It is.
But let's switch gears for a second.
Okay.
We've been talking about Egypt, a place with a well-documented history.
Right.
Now let's go to 7th century Tibet,
Okay.
where things get a little more mysterious.
Oh, like it.
Have you ever heard of Queen YuZhen?
YuZhen? No.
Her reign is like a puzzle with missing pieces. We know she had a lot of political power, but the records are so scarce, it's hard to really understand her story.
Interesting.
And this brings up a big point.
What's that?
The history of powerful women. It's often incomplete,
Definitely.
overshadowed by the stories of men.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how many other women, like YuZhen, have been erased from history just because their stories weren't considered important enough to write down.
It's a sobering thought.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes me appreciate the stories we do have, like Empress Matilda of England.
Oh, yeah.
She was a force to be reckoned with in 12th century Europe. She even fought in a civil war for the English throne.
Wow.
And while she didn't win, her story proves that medieval Europe wasn't just a man's world.
Empress Matilda's story is really important
Yeah.
because it shows that women wanted power,
Uh-huh.
not just in ancient civilizations,
Yeah.
but right in the heart of medieval Europe,
Right.
challenging those feudal norms
Yeah.
and shaking up the power structure.
So we've seen these examples of female leadership in
Well-
ancient Egypt, Tibet,
Yeah.
and even medieval England.
Right.
But now let's go back to our main focus,
Okay.
YuZhen of China.
Got it.
What sets her apart
Yeah.
is that she didn't just have power.
She officially took the title of emperor,
Wow.
the only woman in Chinese history to do so.
And her reign wasn't short-lived. It
Yeah.
lasted almost half a century.
It's incredible, right?
Yeah.
But we also need to understand how she did it.
Yeah.
in the very patriarchal world of 7th century China.
For sure.
So how did she manage to rise to such a position
Right.
in a society so deeply rooted in those Confucian values
Yeah.
that emphasized male dominance?
That's where her story gets really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears.
YuZhen was a master of understanding, not just politics,
Yeah.
but human psychology.
Why?
She knew that if she went head-on against that patriarchal order,
Yeah.
she'd be met with so much resistance.
Of course.
So she used a multifaceted approach that
Okay.
was both cunning and calculated.
I've read about her tactics, but break it down for me.
Okay.
What were her main strategies for dealing with this male-dominated world?
Well, her first move was brilliant.
She played into existing expectations by promoting those traditional Confucian virtues,
Okay.
like obedience and subservience.
Really?
Seems contradictory.
Yeah.
But it worked to pacify the men in her court.
Interesting.
It made them feel secure
How so?
by suggesting that she wasn't trying to disrupt the system.
It's like she was saying,
Yeah,
don't worry, guys, I'm still following the rules,
exactly.
even though I'm in charge now.
Yeah,
Talk about playing the long game.
right.
But it seems like she did more than just appease the men.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard about her using religion,
Uh-huh.
especially Buddhism, to solidify her power.
This was her most masterful move,
Tell me more.
by skillfully using Buddhist scriptures and imagery.
Okay.
She created a story that went beyond gender.
Interesting.
She presented herself as divinely chosen to lead,
Wow.
almost like a Buddha herself.
So instead of fighting the patriarchy,
Yeah,
she reframed it, placing herself above it
exactly.
as a divine figure.
Right. Now, that's what I call a power move.
It was more than just manipulation.
Really?
YuZhen actually excelled in things
Yeah.
traditionally associated with male scholars,
Right?
poetry and calligraphy.
Oh, wow.
This further strengthened her image
Right.
as a capable and well-rounded leader.
It's amazing how she turned what could have been a weakness, her gender,
Yeah,
into a strength.
it really is.
It makes me wonder if this could have happened in any other time in Chinese history.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we need to talk about the Tang Dynasty itself.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
It seems like women had a lot more freedom back then
They did.
compared to other dynasties.
It was a unique period in
Oh.
Chinese history,
Right.
marked by a real openness to different cultures
Okay.
and a more fluid social structure.
Interesting.
This context was really important for YuZhen's rise.
I see.
Imagine in the later dynasties, women had things like foot binding, really restricting their movement.
In participation in society.
Right.
But in the Tang Dynasty,
Yeah.
women rode horses,
Wow.
were involved in public life,
Uh-huh.
even held positions of power.
It's crazy to think about that level of freedom
I know.
in a society we think of as being so patriarchal.
Right?
It reminds me of the Ballad of Mulan,
Oh, yeah.
that story about a woman warrior
Right.
that came from this era.
The Ballad of Mulan.
Yeah.
It's a great example of how they viewed strong women back then. But it's important to remember,
What's that?
this freedom was usually only for upper-class women.
Ah, I see.
Lower-class women still had lots of restrictions.
Right.
And were expected to follow those Confucian ideals
Yeah.
of staying home and being subservient.
So it wasn't perfect equality.
No, not at all.
But it was definitely a unique time.
It was.
And it makes YuZhen's accomplishments even more remarkable.
Absolutely.
She was breaking barriers in a society
Yeah.
that, while more open than what came after, was still deeply patriarchal at its core.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
To understand this unique environment, we need to look deeper
Okay.
at the cultural influences at play.
Okay.
The Tang Dynasty was a real melting pot,
Uh-huh.
blending stuff from the nomadic cultures of the north,
Yeah.
which tended to have more equal views on gender roles
Interesting.
with those Confucian-influenced cultures of the south.
It sounds like a fascinating mix.
What was?
So how did these different cultures shape the status of women?
Well, the nomadic cultures of the north,
Yeah.
with their history of horseback riding and warrior traditions,
Uh-huh.
they saw women as more equal partners in society.
Okay.
And this seeped into the Tang Dynasty,
Mm-hmm.
contrasting with the stricter Confucian ideals from the south
Right.
that emphasized female subservience.
Got it.
It's this tension between different cultural values
Yeah.
that helps explain the unique position of women during that time.
So it's not just like
Right.
Tang Dynasty equals women's liberation.
Exactly.
It's more complex than that.
It is.
But I'm curious,
Yeah.
was there anything in the Tang Dynasty's political structure itself
Mm,
that contributed to this openness toward women?
that's a great question.
Yeah.
The Tang Dynasty had a fairly decentralized power structure,
Okay.
with powerful families always fighting for influence.
Oh, wow.
This made the political scene more fluid and competitive,
Mm-hmm.
and in some ways it opened up opportunities
Yeah.
for ambitious people,
Uh-huh.
regardless of their gender.
So you're saying the political chaos actually helped YuZhen?
In a way, yes.
That's a wild thought.
It's like a real-life Game of Thrones.
Yeah. But all this talk about political maneuvering,
Mhm.
it makes me think about how YuZhen actually governed.
Right?
Was she a good ruler? Or just a master manipulator who happened to be on the throne?
Well, the historical records show
Yeah.
a nuanced picture of YuZhen as a ruler.
Okay.
On one hand, she put in place
Yeah.
some important reforms
Mm-hmm.
that had a lasting good impact on the Tang Dynasty.
Like what?
For example, she expanded the civil service examination system,
Okay.
making it more meritocratic.
So people could rise based on their skills,
Exactly.
not just their family connections.
Right.
That sounds pretty progressive.
It was for the 7th century.
Any other notable reforms she made?
She focused a lot on boosting agriculture,
Okay.
which led to economic growth.
Makes sense.
She knew that a strong empire needed a solid base,
Mm-hmm.
and she took steps to ensure people were fed,
Right?
and the economy was doing well.
Smart.
She also made strategic decisions to strengthen the military,
Okay.
recognizing the need for a strong army to protect the borders.
Makes sense. Sound like she had a good grasp
She did.
of what it took to keep an empire running.
Yes, but I can't help but wonder
What's that?
how she dealt with all the pushback
Oh, yeah.
from those who didn't like her rule.
It must have been hard
It was.
to stay in control.
Yes, especially in such a patriarchal society.
Right, even with all her clever strategies.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
She faced constant challenges
I bet.
throughout her time as ruler.
Yeah.
People called her ruthless,
Uh-huh.
power hungry,
Hmm.
even a usurper.
Wow.
They criticized her ambition,
Yeah.
her tactics,
Yeah.
even her personal life.
She sounds like a strong woman.
She was.
Did she have any allies in the court? Or was she mostly on her own in this power struggle?
Wu Zetian was great at making allies
Okay.
and building a support network.
Uh-huh.
She could spot talent,
Mm-hmm.
and she surrounded herself with capable people,
Okay.
regardless of their gender or background.
So she was inclusive in that way.
She was.
Interesting.
She understood that good governance
Yeah.
required having the right people in the right positions,
Mm-hmm.
and she wasn't afraid to elevate those who were loyal and competent.
So it wasn't all force and manipulation.
Yeah.
She was also a skilled leader
Definitely.
who knew how to build a team
Yeah.
and delegate effectively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I'm sure even with a good team,
Yeah.
there must have been some major crises during her reign.
What were some of the biggest hurdles she had to overcome?
Like any ruler, she had her share of troubles.
Of course.
Rebellions,
Mm,
natural disasters,
right.
whispers of discontent from those trying to undermine her,
I can imagine.
court intrigues,
Yeah.
power struggles within her own family,
Oh, wow.
threats from other
It
kingdoms.
sounds exhausting.
It was a constant battle to stay in control.
But what about the good stuff?
Mm.
What were her greatest achievements?
Well, aside from the specific reforms,
Mm-hmm.
one of her biggest achievements was maintaining stability and prosperity
Okay.
during a time of so much upheaval.
That's impressive.
Her reign is considered a golden age for the Tang Dynasty,
Wow.
with economic growth, territorial expansion, and a flourishing of arts and culture.
It's incredible that she not only held on to power for so long,
I know, right?
but also made the empire thrive.
Yeah.
But even the most powerful rulers.
They don't rule forever.
That's true. What happened to Wu Zetian?
Wow.
Did she die peacefully after a long and successful reign?
Unfortunately, no.
Oh.
In her later years,
Yeah.
she relied more and more on a
Mhm.
small group of advisors.
Okay.
And there were rumors of corruption in the court.
So even with all her political skills,
That's true.
she couldn't escape the pitfalls of power.
Yeah, it seems that way.
It's like that saying, power tends to corrupt.
Right.
And absolute power corrupts absolutely.
It's a lesson we see over and over in history.
Yeah.
And in Wazishan's case, it seems her declining health
Mm.
and the growing influence of those around her created a weakness that her opponents used against her.
So how did it all end?
Yeah.
Was there a big dramatic showdown?
It wasn't a dramatic coup,
Okay.
But it was a turning point.
Tell me more.
In 705 AD,
Okay.
when she was in her 80s and her health was failing, some officials staged a revolt
Oh, wow.
and forced her to step down
Really?
in favor of her son.
So even though she was this trailblazing leader,
It's true.
she couldn't avoid the power struggles and betrayals
Sadly, no.
that come with the territory?
Yeah, it's a reminder
Of what?
that even the most powerful people
Yeah.
are often at the mercy of forces beyond their control.
Right.
In YuZhen's case, it was her health and the changing political scene that led to her downfall.
So sad.
But even though she lost power,
Yeah.
her legacy continued.
That's good.
She left a permanent mark on Chinese history,
I bet.
and her story still inspires us today.
Thinking about her story, it makes me think about the unique social landscape of the Tang Dynasty.
Right.
We talked about how women had more freedom then.
Yes.
Do you think that's why she was able to rise to power?
Mm.
Or would she have succeeded in any era?
It's hard to say for sure,
Yeah.
but those progressive views on women in the Tang Dynasty definitely created a good environment for her. It's no coincidence that the only woman to rule China as emperor came from a dynasty known for its openness and fluid social structure.
Makes you think.
Yeah.
What would have happened if she'd been born later?
Oh, like in the Song Dynasty.
Yeah.
Where Confucianism was revived.
Right.
And women's roles got more restricted. It's an interesting thought.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine her having the same power.
I know.
In a society where things like foot binding were common.
It's crazy to think how different things were.
I know. It's mind-boggling.
And it makes her accomplishments even more impressive.
Right. She was breaking barriers.
Absolutely.
In a society that, while more open than what came later, was still pretty patriarchal.
Exactly. And we have to remember...
What's that?
The Tang Dynasty wasn't perfect when it came to gender equality.
Right.
Upper-class women had more freedom, but lower-class women still had many restrictions.
It was a society with its own complexities.
For sure.
Just like any other. But beyond the general atmosphere, were there any specific cultural influences that led to this open attitude towards women?
Definitely. Like we said before, the Tang Dynasty was a mix of cultures. Blending influences from the nomadic traditions up north with more Confucian cultures down south.
And the nomadic cultures, they tended to have more equal views on gender roles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Women often participated in economic and even military activities.
Like Milan.
Exactly. Milan is a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
And this northern influence really impacted Tang society.
How so?
It contrasted with the stricter male-dominated structure that Confucianism emphasized in the South.
I see.
It's this tension between those values that makes the Tang Dynasty so interesting.
Speaking of influence, we can't ignore the backlash that happened after Wu Zetian's reign.
Right.
It's sad how her success seems to have led to more restrictions on women.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
And one of the most debated parts of her legacy...
I can see that.
On the one hand, you could say her reign showed what women were capable of. She proved they could rule effectively, decisively, and for a long time.
But on the other hand, it seems like her success scared some men in power, right?
They saw her as a threat
to
how things were and felt like they had to put men back in charge.
So it's that classic thing. Progress leads to backlash.
Exactly.
From those who feel threatened.
Right.
And in her case,
her achievements challenged those deep-rooted patriarchal norms, leading to a reaction from those who wanted to maintain the old power structure.
It makes you wonder if her legacy would have been different if she hadn't been so successful.
Right.
Would there have been less resistance?
Maybe.
If she hadn't shaken things up so much?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Maybe if she had been less capable, she wouldn't have been seen as such a threat. But then, would we even be talking about her today?
Good point.
It's like she was in a no-win situation.
Yeah.
If she wasn't effective. Maybe less backlash.
Right.
But also less success and recognition.
It's a tough spot to be in.
It is.
And it highlights the struggles of challenging deep-seated social norms.
Exactly.
Especially around gender and power.
But even though there was a backlash, we can't ignore her impact.
Yeah.
She paved the way for other powerful women And her story still inspires people
Absolutely.
all over the world.
Wu Zetian's story reminds us
Yeah,
that progress isn't always straightforward.
that's true.
There are always setbacks
Yeah.
and challenges along the way.
But each step forward, no matter
Yeah.
how small,
Mm-hmm.
contributes to a bigger change.
And sometimes it takes someone extraordinary,
Right.
like Wu Zetian, to
Absolutely.
break the mold
Yeah.
and create a path for others.
She might not have single-handedly changed everything for women in China,
Right.
but she left a mark
She did.
that makes us rethink our ideas
Yeah.
about gender power and leadership.
It's amazing to think about
Yeah.
how one person can have such a big impact,
Mm-hmm.
both good and bad,
Right.
like ripples spreading through time.
Wu Zetian's story is the perfect example.
Yeah.
Her reign really affected the Tang Dynasty and all of China.
So let's talk about those effects.
Okay.
What were some of the long-term consequences?
Mm-hmm.
Did her reforms stick around, or did things go back to the old ways after she was gone?
Like with a lot of historical legacies,
Huh?
it's kind of a mixed bag.
How so?
Some of her reforms, like expanding the civil service exams,
Mm-hmm.
they had a lasting effect
Okay.
and helped make the Tang Dynasty stable and prosperous.
That's good to know.
It is.
Sounds like she made some real positive changes.
She did.
But we should also look at the not-so-good side
Right.
of her rule, especially how she got rid of her rivals.
Mm-hmm.
It created a climate of fear in the court.
It did.
We talked about how she used some pretty ruthless tactics
Yeah.
to hold on to power.
Uh-huh.
It seems like those tactics had a price.
They did. While they might have worked in the short term,
Mm-hmm.
they also had a long-term effect
Yeah.
on the political culture of the dynasty.
Interesting.
They created a sense of instability and distrust
Okay.
that ultimately weakened the Tang.
It's a warning for any leader with a lot of power.
Absolutely.
Even with the best intentions,
Yeah.
the way you get power can have unintended consequences.
It's a question that societies have always struggled with.
For sure. How do you balance the need for strong leadership
Mm-hmm.
with the risks of unchecked power?
It's a tough one.
No easy answers.
Why not?
But looking back at people like Wu Zetian, it
Yeah.
helps us understand how complex leadership really is.
Speaking of looking back,
Yeah.
how would you sum up her legacy? Was she a hero, a villain, or somewhere in between?
It's tough to say.
Right.
She was a brilliant strategist, a capable administrator,
Yeah.
a visionary leader
Mm-hmm.
who defied traditional gender roles.
For sure.
But she was also ruthless,
right.
ambitious,
Mm.
and sometimes morally questionable.
She really embodies those contradictions that
Yeah.
you see in people who have great power.
Right.
Her story makes us think about
Yeah.
the complexities of leadership
Mm-hmm.
and how hard it is to judge historical figures
Right.
by today's standards.
It reminds us that history isn't simple.
No.
It's full of gray areas,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to deal with those nuances to
Yeah.
really understand the past.
And as we do that,
Mm-hmm.
I think Wu Zetian's story offers some good lessons.
I agree. So as we wrap up our deep dive,
Yeah.
what are the key things we can learn from her life?
I think one of the most important takeaways is
Okay.
leadership isn't about gender.
Mm-hmm.
It's about vision strategy.
Right.
And being able to inspire and motivate people.
Yeah.
Wu Zetian showed that a woman could be a ruler just as well as any man.
She proved it.
Yeah.
Challenging centuries of thinking about leadership.
She broke that glass ceiling
She did.
and showed that women could handle
Yeah.
running a big, complex empire.
Another key takeaway is this.
What's that?
You have to understand and
Mhm.
adapt to the cultural and political context you're
Mhm.
operating in.
Exactly.
Wu Zetian was a master at that.
She was.
She knew how to read the situation
Uh-huh.
and tailor her approach to
Mm.
fit the norms and expectations of her time. She knew when to appease,
Yeah.
when to challenge,
Right.
how to use the existing power structure to her advantage. She was a brilliant strategist
She was.
who used everything she had to reach her goals.
And even though some people might not like her methods,
Yeah.
she got results.
But maybe the biggest takeaway
Yeah.
is the importance of resilience and determination. She faced so many obstacles,
She did.
but she never gave up.
Never.
She's a reminder that even when things seem impossible,
Right.
you can achieve great things
Yeah.
if you have the courage, the vision, and the willpower.
So as we think about Wu Zetian's life,
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for our listeners.
Oh, I love a good question.
Hit me with it. If Wu Zetian were alive today
Okay.
in our world,
Yeah.
with all its problems and complexities,
Right.
could she become as powerful?
Hmm.
Would she face different obstacles?
maybe more subtle ones.
Exactly.
It really makes you think
It does.
about how far we've come with gender equality and how far we still have to go.
Right.
And it makes you wonder
What about?
what kind of leader she'd be today.
Yeah.
What would her strategies be? What challenges would she face?
Right.
And how would she change history?
So many questions.
It's a question with no easy answers.
No, but it's worth thinking about.
I think Wu Zetian's story has a lot to teach us about leadership power and the fight for equality.
Even today.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From ancient Egypt to the Tang Dynasty court.
And met some incredible women who defied expectations and made their mark.
I hope this deep dive has inspired you.
Me too.
To learn more about these amazing women.
Yes, and the history that shaped their lives.
I hope it's also made you think about leadership, power,
and the struggles to achieve equality.
in a world that's often resistant to change.
So, as we end,
Yeah.
I encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep pushing those boundaries.
Right.
Who knows, maybe another Wu Zetian is out there,
Ooh, I like that.
ready to change the world.
It's an exciting thought.
It is.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.
All right, wow, we're going way beyond the whole, Beauty and the Emperor story.
Yeah.
To see how she's connected to, power struggles and politics, and even some, international intrigue. You ready to uncover some, really surprising facts?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, it's crazy how Yang Guifei's story
It's incredible.
still, captures the imagination, even after all these centuries.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we always hear about how captivating she was, her beauty.
Right.
But you found sources that suggest she was way more complex
Yeah.
than just that.
Uh-huh.
And it's not just historians. You even sent some sources about how the Japanese have woven her into their own legends.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
There are theories about her escaping to Japan, and there are even people who claim to be her descendants. I mean, talk about a mystery that spans cultures and centuries, right?
Really is.
But, okay, before we get too far ahead of ourselves,
Okay.
let's start with what we know.
Yeah.
Or at least what we think we know.
Right.
Right? About her origins.
Okay, yeah.
So, I mean, we tend to think of history as this, fixed thing.
Right.
But even basic facts, like where someone was born,
Yeah, exactly.
could be surprisingly hard to pin down.
Very true.
The sources you sent mention Yongle
Right.
in Shaanxi province as, her ancestral home.
Yeah.
But where she was actually born is still debated.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about that.
And that's before we even get into that steal.
Oh, yeah.
That claims she was born in Puning County, in Ronzhou,
Uh-huh.
which is a total forgery, right?
It's a classic case of historical forgery.
It's like something out of a modern day,
Yeah.
bidding war,
Yeah.
for celebrity hometowns. Turns out, even back in the Qing Dynasty, people were trying to claim famous figures as their own.
That's right.
And this steal,
Yeah.
it shows up in this collection called The Complete Prose of the Tang Dynasty.
Right.
But despite the name, it was actually put together centuries later.
Centuries later, yeah.
And it's full of errors. It gives Emperor Swanzong a title he wouldn't have had at that time.
Exactly.
Come on, right? It makes you wonder how many other, historical facts are just, elaborate fabrications,
Right. It's amazing, isn't it?
It's like a historical game of telephone.
Yeah.
Where the stories get
Totally.
embellished and the facts get twisted over time. It really makes you realize how important it is to, be skeptical of sources and their potential biases,
Absolutely.
And, speaking of things that might not be what they seem, you also pointed out some questions about the name Yang Yuan itself.
Yes. That name comes from a collection called Miscellaneous Records of Emperor Minghuang, which is, it's kind of like a historical gossip column.
Oh, wow.
With some entries more reliable than others.
Right.
So even the name we use for her has, a degree of uncertainty to it. Adds another layer of intrigue to her story, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's before we even get to her life in the palace.
Right.
Which, according to what you said, goes way beyond just a simple love story.
Defo.
To really understand Yang Guifei, we have to understand the political landscape she entered.
Yes.
Especially Emperor Wanzong.
Right.
And his really complex relationship with powerful women.
Yeah, that's crucial.
His attraction to Yang Guifei wasn't just about beauty.
Oh, no.
It was like deeply intertwined with his anxieties about powerful women, which stemmed from a traumatic childhood experience.
Yeah, a really traumatic experience.
Right. The sources you sent mentioned his mother's execution.
Yeah.
Under Empress Wu Zetian. Now, for those who don't know,
Right.
Empress Wu was an incredible figure.
Yeah.
The only woman to ever rule China in her own right.
Amazing.
But her rise to power was ruthless.
It was.
And it clearly left a mark on the young Xuanzong,
Oh,
who
definitely.
witnessed his own mother, Lady Du, fall victim to all that court intrigue.
Wow, yeah.
Imagine the impact of that experience
Oh, I know.
on him as a kid.
Yeah.
It's no wonder he grew up kind of wary of ambitious women.
Yeah, it makes sense.
This fear shaped his relationships throughout his whole reign, from his first wife, Empress Wei,
Right.
to the ambitious Princess Taiping, and even later on, Consort Wu Husei.
Yeah.
It seems like he was constantly trying to like balance
Yeah.
this desire for companionship with this deep-seated fear of being controlled or overshadowed.
Right. That's really interesting.
But wouldn't a powerful woman,
Yeah.
also be an asset in that kind of like turbulent court?
Yeah, you'd think so.
Someone to share the burdens of leadership with.
Yeah.
Right.
Good question.
Maybe he saw any kind of female ambition
Maybe.
as a direct threat,
Mm-hmm.
like a reminder of his mother's tragic fate.
Yeah, that's possible.
And this fear ultimately led him to never appoint another empress
Right.
after his wife, Empress Wang, was deposed,
Yeah.
which you can imagine
Oh.
created a huge power vacuum
It did, yeah.
in the imperial harem.
Absolutely.
And that is where Yang Guifei enters the picture.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so we've got this powerful emperor
Right.
with a serious fear of powerful women,
Yeah.
an empty empress position,
Mm-hmm.
and a whole bunch of ambitious consorts,
I know.
all vying for influence.
Mm-hmm.
And into this like volatile mix
Yeah.
walks Yang Guifei.
Wow, talk about a recipe for drama.
I know, right? I'm already sensing some serious drama here.
Yeah.
But before we get into her rise,
Okay.
you mentioned Consort Wu Huifei specifically.
Mhm.
It sounds like her ambitions played a key role
He did, yeah.
in paving the way for Yang Guifei.
Absolutely.
Consort Wu Huifei was like everything Xuanzong feared in a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful, talented,
Mm-hmm.
but most importantly, ambitious.
Yes, very ambitious.
She saw that empty empress position and thought,
I bet she did.
why not me?
Yeah.
Hold on, wait.
Yeah.
So before we even meet Yang Guifei, we have another powerful woman
We do.
aiming for the top spot.
That's right.
Oh, this is getting good.
Yeah.
I need to hear more about this Consort Wu
Okay.
and how she factored into Yang Guifei's entry into the palace.
Right.
But I guess we'll have to save that
I think so.
for the next part of our deep dive.
All right.
Okay, so last time we left off with Consort Wu Huifei.
Right.
Beautiful, talented, ambitious.
Mm.
She saw the empress position was just sitting there,
Yeah.
and she really wanted it.
Oh, she did.
But Emperor Xuanzong,
Yeah.
with all those past experiences, those anxieties...
Right. He wasn't about to give that much power to any woman.
Of course.
So what happened?
Right.
Did they have some kind of like big confrontation?
It was more like a strategic move on Xuanzong's part.
Sure.
Don't forget, this guy was a master at the political game.
Right.
He knew the court officials.
Yeah.
They were already like kind of nervous about
Yeah.
another woman named Wu getting too much power.
Oh, yeah. After Empress Wu-Zetian.
Exactly.
They'd seen that before.
Yeah, so he kind of used their anxieties to his advantage.
Oh, it's smart. So he didn't like directly refuse Consort Wu. He
No.
sort of nudged the court officials to do it for him.
Exactly. He presented the idea of making Consort Wu empress to his ministers,
Yeah.
knowing they'd object.
And they did.
Oh, they definitely did.
What'd they say?
They argued that, elevating Consort Wu, it would mess up the whole balance of power
Okay.
and potentially jeopardize the succession of the current crown prince. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the court was still recovering from Empress Wu Zetian's rule.
Right.
I bet they were terrified of another woman taking charge,
Yeah.
even if it was just through marriage to the emperor.
Exactly.
So what did Consort Wu do
Well,
when she found out she wasn't going to be empress?
she was not happy.
Yeah, I bet she wasn't.
No, but this actually created the perfect opening for Yang Guifei to enter the scene.
Oh, good.
While Consort Wu was busy trying to get that empress title,
Yeah.
Yang Guifei, who was initially a consort for Xuanzong's son,
Right.
caught the emperor's eye.
Wow. So while Consort Wu was playing the political game,
Hmm.
Yang Guifei was making her move.
In a way, yeah,
It's amazing how all these power dynamics were playing out.
it is.
But what was it about Yang Guifei that got Xuanzong's attention?
Right.
Was it just her legendary beauty?
Well, beauty was definitely a factor.
Okay.
But, Xuanzong wanted more than just a pretty face.
Right.
He wanted someone who wouldn't threaten his power.
Yeah.
Someone who could, give him artistic and emotional satisfaction,
Uh-huh.
but wouldn't stir up any political trouble.
I'm curious, do the sources say anything about how she presented herself?
That's a good question.
Was she playing into this harmless beauty role?
Right.
Or was there something more going on?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, the sources aren't that detailed on those specifics.
Okay.
You have to remember, a lot of what was written about Yang Guifei, it was after her death.
Right.
Influenced by, politics and whether people wanted to make her look good or bad.
Yeah.
What we do know is that she was known for her grace and her skill in music and dance and just her ability to charm everyone around her.
So she had this unique blend of artistry and charisma.
Definitely.
But was she really just a passive figure?
Right.
Content with being the emperor's favorite?
Uh-huh.
Or was she more cunning?
Yeah.
More ambitious than the stories make her out to be?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's one that historians are still arguing about today.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Some people think she was a master manipulator, skillfully using her position to gain influence behind the scenes.
Wow.
While others think she was more of a pawn.
Okay.
Caught in the middle of Xuanzong's paranoia and all the court machinations.
So even though she wasn't officially empress, she still might have had a lot of power.
She might have, yeah.
That raises an interesting point.
Mm-hmm.
If Xuanzong was so scared of powerful women,
right,
what made him fall for Yang Guifei in the first place?
Yeah.
What was it about her that made her different?
That's a great question.
From all the other women in his life.
Maybe he saw in her what he couldn't find in those more overtly ambitious women at court.
Well.
Maybe her artistic talents, her captivating presence, they offered him a kind of escape.
Escape from what?
From the pressures of ruling.
Oh, I see.
Or maybe, despite his fears, he was drawn to her intelligence, her wit, qualities that, in a different context, he might have really admired.
So it's like he was walking this tightrope.
Yeah.
Between wanting a connection and being terrified of being controlled.
That's a good way to put it.
And Yang Guifei, at least for a while, seemed like a safe haven for him.
It seems that way.
But the Tang Dynasty,
right,
wasn't exactly known for its stability.
That's true.
And this peace wasn't going to last forever.
No.
Now, you sent some stuff about the Anlushan Rebellion.
Yes.
Which was a huge deal in Tang history.
It was.
And it would completely change Yang Guifei's fate.
Yes, the Anlushan Rebellion.
So how did this rebellion affect her story?
Wow.
And how did the events at Maowei Slope, which you mentioned, come into play?
Right.
Tell me everything. So the Anlushan Rebellion, right?
Yes.
For those who might not know this part of Tang history, it was basically a massive uprising.
It was.
Led by this powerful general named An Lushan, who had totally gained Emperor Xuanzong's trust. But secretly, he had ambitions to take over.
Oh, yeah. He wanted all the power for himself.
It lasted for 8 years.
A long time.
And really, shook the Tang Dynasty to its core.
It did.
It's like the beginning of its decline.
It's often said that the Tang Dynasty, during Xuanzong's reign, was at its peak.
Really?
Yeah, like a golden age,
Uh-huh.
Art and culture, prosperity.
Wow.
But as we saw with Xuanzong's whole thing with powerful women, there were cracks beneath the surface. Things weren't as perfect as they seemed.
Right. And An Lushan, this ambitious general, he totally took advantage of those cracks.
He did.
It led to this huge rebellion.
Exactly.
But let's get back to Yang Guifei.
Okay.
So how did this major upheaval impact her story?
Well, a lot of historical accounts kind of make Yang Guifei the scapegoat.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they blame her for distracting the emperor with her beauty and say that made the empire weaker. Think about that famous poem, The Song of Everlasting Sorrow.
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
It romanticizes their love story.
Right.
But it also kind of subtly suggests that Yang Guifei's charms were the reason the emperor neglected his duties.
Yeah. It's like those lines about powder and paint fading in the six palaces
Right.
while the emperor's lost in love, not paying attention to what's going on.
Exactly.
It's a powerful image, but it's interesting
It is.
how we just accept this idea of the beautiful woman
Yeah.
as a distraction,
Uh-huh.
the downfall of a powerful man.
It makes you wonder if that whole narrative served a political purpose, you know?
Like to shift the blame away from the emperor.
Maybe. It's a pattern we see a lot in history, don't we?
Yeah, totally.
The woman is the temptress, the source of weakness.
Right.
And the man's failures, they're all her fault.
Exactly. But from the sources you sent,
Yeah.
it seems like blaming Yang Guifei for a whole rebellion is a bit much, right?
It is, yeah.
There must have been other things going on.
Oh, definitely.
Other weaknesses that YuZhen used to his advantage.
Absolutely. And Lucian's rebellion, it was fueled by a bunch of things, like political corruption, economic problems, and, of course, his own ambition boiling over. To reduce it all down to a love story doesn't really do justice to how complicated it all was.
No, it doesn't.
Yang Guifei was just caught in the middle of it all.
Right. Like everyone else at court.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the incident at Maui Slope.
Yes.
This is a big one in Yang Guifei's story, right?
It really is.
It's like the climax of some tragic play.
Yeah, it's a pivotal moment for sure, and a really heartbreaking one.
Okay, so tell me about it.
Well, An Lushan's forces, they're getting close to the capital.
Oh, no.
So Emperor Xuanzong, he fled.
He ran away.
He took his whole entourage, including Yang Guifei. But during this chaotic escape, the imperial guards, they started to panic.
I bet.
They were scared for their lives, and they wanted someone to blame.
Oh, wow.
They demanded that Yang Guifei be executed.
They blamed her for the whole rebellion.
They did.
That seems a little extreme, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, even if she had some influence over the emperor,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem fair to say she caused a whole military uprising.
It's definitely a case of misplaced blame.
Yeah.
But remember, when things are falling apart, people often look for someone to blame.
Right.
Especially those in power.
And Yang Guifei, as the emperor's favorite, was an easy target.
Unfortunately, she was.
So what happened?
Yeah.
Did Xuanzong try to protect her?
He was really torn. The sources say he was deeply conflicted.
In a match?
Caught between his love for Yang Guifei and needing to keep his guards happy to make sure he survived.
That's a horrible situation to be in.
It is.
So he had to choose, basically.
Yeah.
Did he sacrifice her to save himself?
Tragically, he did.
Wow.
It's a really sad moment in history. Faced with the threat of mutiny, Xuanzong agreed to Yang Guifei's death.
Oh, no.
She was strangled at Maui Slope when she was only 38 years old.
What a tragic end to her story.
It is.
But, you know, we talked about those legends earlier,
right.
especially in Japan, that say she might have escaped.
Yeah.
It's like people couldn't accept that she died.
Yeah.
So they came up with stories where she lived on.
It shows how fascinating she was. Even centuries later, people are still drawn to her.
Yeah.
And they want to believe she might have survived.
So we've talked about a lot today.
We have.
The mystery around her birth and her name. Her complicated relationship with Xuanzong. Her tragic death during the rebellion.
It's a lot to take in.
What are some key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the biggest one is that history. Like, life is rarely simple.
Right.
Yang Guifei's story, it's full of nuances, complexities.
Yeah.
She was more than just a beautiful woman. She was trying to survive in a world of power and ambition and danger.
That's true.
I think her story also reminds us to question those romanticized narratives that we often hear about the past.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in
It is.
And to forget that real people were living these stories.
Exactly.
It's also a reminder that even people who seem incredibly powerful can be at the mercy of these bigger historical forces.
Absolutely. Yang Guifei's life, her death, they were shaped by the political events of her time.
Right.
She was both a participant and a victim of those forces.
It makes her story even more interesting
Good touch.
and relevant to us today.
Definitely gives us a lot to think about.
You know, maybe someday we'll do a whole deep dive
Oh, yeah.
on those Japanese legends,
That would be fun.
searching for clues about Yang Guifei's escape.
Like a historical treasure hunt.
That would be awesome.
That would.
But for now, we'll leave you all to ponder
Yeah.
the mysteries and complexities of Yang Guifei's life and legacy.
A life well lived.
Thanks for joining us on this fascinating deep dive
It was my pleasure.
into the world of Yang Guifei. Well, next time.
See you then.
Okay, get ready because this deep dive takes us into the Tang Dynasty,
Yeah.
a time known for its culture,
Yeah.
vibrant culture, and some pretty intense power struggles.
So real drama.
Yeah, and you've given us some fascinating accounts and analysis on Yang Guifei, one of the legendary four great beauties of China.
Mm-hmm.
And, her story is far from a fairy tale.
Right. It really begs the question, was she like a cunning manipulator who climbed the ranks of power? Or was she more of a pawn, a tragic figure caught in the crossfire of imperial ambition? So, to understand her story, we have to set the stage right. We're in the Tang Dynasty. Emperor Xuanzong's on the throne, and his beloved consort, Lady Wu, she's really determined to secure her son's future as the next emperor.
Okay, so that sounds like we are already in for some serious palace intrigue.
Oh, yeah.
What did Lady Wu do to try and make her son the crown prince?
She went to extraordinary lengths. I mean, some might even say ruthless lengths.
Wow.
To get rid of any rivals, she basically framed the current crown prince, Li Ying, and his two brothers for treason, leading to their execution.
Oh, wow. Talk about a power move.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder what it must have been like in that court, knowing someone was capable of something like that.
It must have been intense.
Yeah.
So anyway, she succeeded in getting rid of her son's rivals, but, the weight of her actions, it caught up with her. She was consumed by guilt, and she had these terrible nightmares, and she ended up falling ill and dying, leaving the emperor completely heartbroken.
So the emperor's left grieving and vulnerable and without a clear successor. I can see how this kind of creates the perfect opportunity for someone like Yang Guifei to kind of enter the picture.
Exactly. So Yang Guifei was already kind of connected to the imperial family because she was married to one of the emperor's sons, Prince Shao.
Oh, wait, hold on a second. She was married to the emperor's son.
Yeah.
That seems like a pretty big obstacle, even in a dynasty known for its flexibility, shall we say.
Right, exactly. It definitely raised some eyebrows. We're
Yeah.
talking about a society where, social hierarchy, Confucian values, these things were really important. Marrying your father-in-law, even if he is the emperor, would be a huge scandal.
So how do they manage to get around this?
Yeah.
I mean, they couldn't just ignore the fact that she was already married into the family.
Right, so they went to great lengths to smooth things over, and it's believed that Yang Guifei was sent to a convent for some time to create this separation from her husband.
Ah, okay.
So essentially, this maneuver was a way to appease any critics and maintain some kind of propriety within the court.
Yeah, like a classic case of out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting how they were able to reintroduce her as someone suitable for the emperor.
Right.
Makes you think about all the power dynamics at play.
Yeah.
Who were some of the people that were orchestrating this plan?
Well, one figure who likely played a crucial role was the eunuch Gao Lishi.
Okay.
He was very powerful in the court, and he was a trusted advisor to the emperor.
Mm.
It's possible that he saw an opportunity to strengthen his family's position. So he aligned himself with Yang Guifei and recommended her to the grieving emperor.
So it's not just about beauty here. It's also about connections and alliances.
Exactly.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what a eunuch is and why this Gao Lishi would have had so much influence?
Sure. So a eunuch is a man who has been castrated, and they often served in roles that required them to be close to the emperor and his family.
Oh, wow.
And in the Tang Dynasty, eunuchs, they actually had a lot of power. They often acted as advisors, administrators, and even military commanders.
Mm-hmm.
And they were seen as trustworthy because they couldn't have children, so they were seen as less of a threat to the imperial line.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so in this context, Gao Lishi's support would have been essential for Yang Guifei's rise to power.
It sounds like she was really smart and knew how to play the game.
Definitely. And I mean, we are talking about Yang Guifei, one of the four great beauties of China, so her beauty definitely played a part. But beauty alone wouldn't have been enough. So it raises the question of how much of her success can be attributed to her own ambition versus the influence of the people around her, like Gao Lishi and maybe even her family members.
It's kind of like a nature versus nurture debate, but set in the Tang Dynasty court.
Exactly.
This is where things start to get really interesting.
Yeah, and as we go deeper into her story, we'll learn about her life as the emperor's favorite, the amazing lifestyle she had, and those famous lychees that are synonymous with her story.
Okay, I'm definitely all ears about those lychees.
Okay, we'll get to that.
But first, I want to know more about the four great beauties.
Sure.
Were they all powerful like Yang Guifei?
Mm-hmm.
And how did they get this legendary status?
That's a great question. The four great beauties, they're fascinating figures in Chinese history and folklore. And, the beauty was legendary, But their lives and legacies are really diverse. What they all share is this connection to really important moments in Chinese history, and they've had a lasting impact on art and literature. Each of their stories gives us a glimpse into the idea of beauty, power, and fate in ancient China.
It sounds like beauty could be both a blessing and a curse.
It often was.
Can't wait to hear more.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
We've been talking about Yang Guifei's, rise to power and how she kind of managed to navigate those really complex dynamics of the Tang Dynasty court. But I'm curious about how her relationship with the emperor affected the dynasty itself.
Oh, yeah.
Did their love story have any political consequences?
Well, you can't really separate their relationship from the politics of the time.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about an empire where the emperor's choices had really big consequences.
Yeah.
And a lot of historians point to a change in the emperor's focus after he fell for Yang Guifei.
Okay.
He started to delegate more and more responsibilities to certain officials. And some people argue that this actually led to a decline in, the effectiveness of the dynasty's administration.
So are we saying that the emperor was basically distracted by love and neglected his duties as a ruler?
Well, I think some historians would argue that's a bit of an oversimplification. While the emperor's love for Yang Guifei was, undeniable, he was also facing internal power struggles and external threats to the empire.
Right.
Historical events are rarely caused by just one thing.
That's true.
It's always complex.
Yeah, I guess we need to think about the bigger picture of the Tang Dynasty during this time.
Yeah.
What were some of the other challenges that the emperor was dealing with besides, his relationship with Yang Guifei?
Well, I mean, the Tang Dynasty was huge with this complicated web of political alliances and, rivalries.
Yeah.
The emperor had to deal with officials who were, ambitious and wanted power. There were military threats along the borders and economic ups and downs. It was a constant balancing act to try and keep everything stable and prosperous.
I can see how someone as influential as Yang Guifei could become kind of a focal point for all of those tensions.
Exactly.
Especially if her family members started to gain influence.
Right. So, for example, Yang Guifei's cousin, Yang Guizong,
Okay.
he became a really powerful minister. And some historians argue that he used his connection to Yang Guifei to, enrich himself and his family, while others say he was a good administrator and that he was kind of unfairly blamed for the dynasty's problems.
It sounds like there are conflicting accounts here. And as we said before, it's important to look at things from different perspectives.
Exactly.
But I want to know more about how Yang Guifei is portrayed in these different accounts. Is she seen as like a schemer? Or is she more of a tragic figure?
Well, that's actually one of the most interesting things about Yang Guifei's story.
Okay.
Over the centuries, she's been shown in lots of different ways.
Okay.
It kind of reflects the changing social values and interpretations of history. Some people say she was a really ambitious woman who used her beauty and influence to help her family. Others say that she was a victim of circumstance, caught up in all this political intrigue, and that she ultimately paid the price for the emperor's love.
It's like her story becomes this way to explore all these different themes. Love, power, betrayal, fate.
Yeah, it's really remarkable how someone from so long ago can still resonate with us in these really complex ways.
Yeah, it is.
And I think that's what makes studying history so great. We're not just learning about events, we're learning about human stories, human struggles, and these questions about power and how it affects people and whole societies.
Speaking of the power of, power, we can't forget about those lychees.
Right.
They've become kind of a symbol of Yang Guifei and this lavish lifestyle that she had.
Exactly.
It said that the emperor had these exotic fruits brought from far away just to make her happy.
Yeah, it's a famous story.
Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. The story of the lychees really shows how extravagant the Tang Dynasty court was.
Yeah.
And it also tells us something about the emperor's devotion to Yang Guifei.
Okay.
The most common version of the story suggests that the lychees were transported all the way from Lingnan, which is modern-day Guangdong and Guangxi provinces, and that was a really long and difficult journey, especially with the limited transportation they had back then.
Yeah, that's going the extra mile. Wow.
Right.
It's like a logistical feat.
Totally.
But you mentioned before that there are some different ideas about where those lychees came from.
Right, right. So some historical accounts and even poems by Du Fu, the famous poet,
Yeah.
suggest that the lychees could have come from the Shu region, which is modern-day Sichuan.
Oh, okay.
And that area was known for its fertile land and, lots of different agricultural products.
Mm.
So it's possible that they were growing a type of lychee there that the imperial court really liked.
So is it Lingnan or Sichuan?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if these different accounts are just different versions of the story,
Right.
or if there's a deeper reason why the origin of the lychees changes.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting question that makes us think critically about historical sources,
Yeah.
and how stories are passed down through time.
Right.
Maybe both accounts are true,
Okay.
and the lychees that the emperor and Yang Guifei ate came from both places.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be that the Lingnan story was emphasized because it was more dramatic.
Yeah.
It emphasizes how far the emperor would go to make his beloved happy.
Yeah, it's like a metaphor for history itself.
Right.
We often get different versions of the same story.
Exactly.
And it's up to us to kind of figure out what really happened, or at least find the most compelling narrative.
And sometimes those different narratives can all exist together,
Right.
each one giving us a unique perspective on the past and helping us understand the people and events that shaped our world.
It's a really great point.
So yeah, the lychee thing is interesting.
It is. Yang Guifei's story is much more than just a romantic tale.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a window into the politics, the society, even the food of the Tang Dynasty.
Yeah, definitely.
But we know that her story doesn't end with Leishankas's and palace life.
Right.
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 There's a darker chapter ahead, story of rebellion and
And
tragedy.
unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
The An Lushan Rebellion was a huge uprising that almost brought down the Tang Dynasty.
Okay.
And it cast a shadow over Yang Guifei's life and eventually led to a very sad ending. But before we get into that, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier about the role of women in the Tang Dynasty.
Yeah.
Yang Guifei's story is exceptional, but how common was it for a woman to have that kind of influence back then?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've been so focused on Yang Guifei's story
Right.
that it would be helpful to understand how her experience fits into the broader context of women's lives in the Tang Dynasty.
So the Tang Dynasty is often seen a pretty open and progressive time for women compared to other dynasties in China. Women from elite families had more freedom and opportunities for education.
Oh, wow.
There were even female poets and scholars,
Huh.
and even a female emperor, YuZhen.
Wow, a female emperor. That's amazing.
Yeah, it really challenges our assumptions about gender roles in ancient China.
So Yang Guifei's influence, while unusual, wasn't totally unprecedented.
Exactly. Her story is unique, but it's important to remember that she lived in a society where women could achieve positions of power and influence, even if those chances were only available to a few.
Right.
Her story reminds us that history is full of surprises, and that what we think we know about the past is always changing as we discover new evidence and perspectives.
This deep dive has definitely changed some of my ideas about the Tang Dynasty and the roles of women in that time.
I think that's a great takeaway.
It makes you realize how much we can learn from looking at history with an open mind
Absolutely.
and a willingness to question what we think we know.
Right. And speaking of challenging what we think we know, the An Lushan Rebellion kind of throws everything we've talked about so far into chaos.
Okay, yeah.
It's a major turning point in Yang Guifei's story, and sadly, not a happy one.
Okay, now I'm really curious. Tell me everything.
Okay, so the An Lushan Rebellion was a devastating conflict.
Right.
It shook the Tang Dynasty to its core.
Wow.
It was led by a powerful general named An Lushan,
Okay.
who rebelled against the imperial court and caused, total chaos.
Oh, wow.
As the rebels got closer to the capital, the emperor and his entourage, including Yang Guifei, they had to flee.
Right.
They went to Mawaipo, a remote spot in Sichuan province, hoping to regroup and regain control.
So they're on the run, desperate to escape these rebels.
Exactly. It must have been a terrifying journey.
Yeah, filled with uncertainty.
Absolutely. But unfortunately, things got even worse at Mawaipo.
Oh, no.
The imperial guards, they blamed Yang Guifei and her family for all the problems the dynasty was facing. They saw her as this symbol of the emperor's distraction, and they thought that getting rid of her would appease the rebels and save the empire.
So she became a scapegoat
Yeah,
for
basically.
the rebellion's chaos.
Right. So the guards demanded that the emperor execute Yang Guifei and her cousin Yang Guisang
Oh, no.
as proof that he was serious about ending the rebellion.
Wow.
And the emperor, heartbroken and desperate to save himself and maybe even the dynasty, agreed to their demands.
This is so sad.
It really is.
She was sacrificed to appease a rebellious army
It's a tragic end.
for something that wasn't even her fault.
It's a moment in history that continues to fascinate and, kind of haunt us.
Yeah.
The emperor's decision, while understandable given the situation, shows just how brutal power can be.
Right.
And how even the most powerful people can become victims of things they can't control.
Yang Guifei's story is like a roller coaster of emotions.
It really is.
We've seen her rise to power,
Mm-hmm.
experience this incredible life at court, and then ultimately witness her tragic downfall.
It's a reminder that history is full of complexity.
Yeah.
And that even those who seem to have it all can be swept away by fate.
Her story also makes you think about how we understand history
Right.
and how individual lives can become intertwined with these major political events.
Exactly.
Was Yang Guifei a manipulative mastermind or a victim of circumstance? Or, something in between?
That's the question.
Yeah.
Maybe the answer is somewhere in that gray area where ambition, love, and just plain bad luck all come together.
It's like a tapestry.
Yeah, as intricate and fascinating as the Tang Dynasty itself.
That's a perfect way to put it.
I think you're right.
I'm starting to see that Yang Guifei's story is much more than just a love story.
Oh, definitely.
It's a window into the Tang Dynasty.
Absolutely.
But before we get too philosophical, I have one more question about Yang Guifei's death.
Okay.
How is it portrayed in art and literature? Is it always seen as this tragic ending, or are there other interpretations?
That's a great question. The story of her death has inspired so many artists, poets, and playwrights.
Yeah.
Some of them focus on the sadness, emphasizing the emperor's grief and the loss of such a great beauty.
Yeah.
Others look at the political consequences,
Okay.
using her death as a symbol of the dynasty's decline.
Interesting.
And then some even romanticize it.
Really?
Yeah, they portray it as this ultimate testament to a love so strong that it even conquered death.
It's amazing how one event can be interpreted in so many different ways.
Right.
It really shows the power of storytelling
Yeah,
and how we use the past to understand the present.
exactly. And it reminds us that history isn't fixed.
Right.
It's constantly changing and being reinterpreted as new generations come along. Yang Guifei's story is a perfect example of that.
I agree.
And I think that's a great place to end our deep dive.
Yeah, this has been an incredible journey through the Tang Dynasty,
It has.
full of intrigue, romance, and tragedy.
All the good stuff.
I think our listener will come away with a new appreciation for Yang Guifei's story and how relevant it still is today.
I hope so.
Thanks for guiding us through this fascinating exploration.
You're welcome. It's been fun.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Until next time, keep those curious minds engaged. And remember, history is more than just facts and dates.
It's a story waiting to be told.
Exactly. It's a story waiting to be uncovered, debated, and cherished. So we've really gone deep into Yang Guifei's life,
We have.
from her, rise to power
Yeah.
to that tragic end during the Anlushan Rebellion.
Definitely a lot to unpack there.
It is.
It's a complex story.
It is, but I'm kind of left wondering what her story tells us about the Tang Dynasty and its place in history.
That's a great question, and it's one that historians are still debating.
Yeah.
On the one hand, her story reminds us of how opulent and artistic and just culturally vibrant the Tang Dynasty was.
Right.
It's often seen as a golden age in Chinese history.
Yeah, golden age.
The emperor's devotion to her, the lavish gifts like the lychees brought from so far away,
Yeah, the life.
it all points to a time of prosperity and power.
It does. You kind of get caught up in the romance and grandeur of it all.
Fairly easy to do.
Yeah, but then you have this undercurrent of political maneuvering, right?
Right.
The rise and fall of all these powerful people.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, the rebellion that kind of brings the dynasty down.
Exactly. Yang Guifei's story is also kind of a warning about how fragile power can be.
Right.
And how personal relationships and political intrigue can get all tangled up.
Yeah, they can.
Her connection to the emperor obviously gave her a lot of privilege,
Definitely.
but it also made her a target when things started to fall apart.
Right.
The Anlushan Rebellion, while not directly her fault,
Right.
it did expose the weaknesses of the Tang Dynasty
Oh,
and ultimately contributed to its decline.
so it's like her story reflects both the good and the bad of the Tang Dynasty.
Exactly. It's a complex legacy that goes beyond just a love story.
Yeah, it's more than just a love story.
And that's what makes history so interesting.
Mm.
It's not just about facts and data.
Right.
We're exploring the real, messy lives of people.
Yeah, and how those lives intersect with bigger events.
Exactly. It reminds me of how we were talking about Yang Guifei's story being interpreted in different ways over time.
Yes, I was just thinking about that.
She's almost like a mythical figure.
Right, like a legend.
Each generation kind of projects their own values onto her story.
It's fascinating.
It is, and it shows how powerful her story is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a story that goes beyond time, you know?
Right.
And it keeps captivating us with these themes of beauty, love, power, and tragedy.
Those are universal themes.
They are.
Whether she's seen as a manipulative figure, a victim, or something in between.
Right. It doesn't really matter.
It makes us think about history and what it means to be human.
That's a great way to put it.
I think that's a perfect way to end our deep dive.
Yeah, I agree.
It's been quite a journey through the Tang Dynasty. One that's made us question our assumptions, used our imaginations,
Absolutely.
and left us with a better understanding of this really enigmatic figure.
I hope it's inspired you to keep exploring and questioning the past.
I know I will. Thanks for taking us on this journey.
Of course, it's been my pleasure.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
Until next time, keep those curious minds engaged, and remember, history is more than just facts and dates. It's a story waiting to be uncovered, debated, and cherished.
Well said. All right, so get this. We're tackling a historical mystery today. And, it involves something delicious. It's the story of Yang Guifei. She was this legendary beauty from China's Tang Dynasty, known for her love of lychees. But seriously, have you ever thought about how she got those exotic fruits all the way out there in the capital city, Chengdu?
Yeah, it's a pretty good question, especially since lychees were originally from southern China, hundreds of miles away from the capital.
Exactly. And we know the emperor just adored Yang Guifei, spared no expense, wanted to give her whatever she craved. So how'd they make that happen? How'd they move those lychees all that way back in the day? Well, we've got some historical records, maps, poetry to sort through today to try to figure it all out. And luckily, I'm joined by our expert in Chinese history, so we can separate the facts from the fiction and hopefully uncover some fun details along the way. So where do we even begin with this lychee mystery?
Well, it comes down to two main possibilities for where Yang Guifei's lychees came from. Lingnan, which is like modern-day Guangdong and Guangxi provinces.
Right.
And then there's Bashu, the region with Sichuan.
So south versus southwest, huh? Okay, so what makes Lingnan a good contender? I mean, it's still really far from Chengyan, isn't it?
Oh yeah, for sure. But we've got some interesting evidence pointing us that way. For one thing, Tang Dynasty writers themselves, like Bao Fang and even the poet Du Fu, they mention Lenkees coming from a place called Nanhai. And that refers to the area by the South China Sea, including the Lingnan region.
Ah, so we've got some first-hand accounts, or at least Tang Dynasty version of that, pointing to Lingnan. But wouldn't the transportation have been a total nightmare back then? I mean, even today, keeping fruit fresh over long distances is a challenge. How did they manage that in the 8th century?
That's the big question, especially since we know that Lenkees go bad so quickly. Another Tang Dynasty poet, Bai Ji, even wrote about it. But here's where it gets really interesting. We've got to think about the Tang Dynasty's tribute system.
Oh, right, those elaborate gifts and offerings they'd send to the imperial court. That was a pretty big deal back then, right?
Huge, super important for keeping power and showing loyalty. And Lingnan, they were famous for sending rare fruits and spices to the capital. Lychees were a super prized delicacy, so they would have been a natural part of those tributes.
So it's like an ancient version of those fancy fruit baskets you get delivered, except with way higher stakes. But even still, wouldn't the lychees spoil by the time they got to Chengdu?
Right, and that's where the tribute system gets even more interesting. There's a chance, and we've got evidence from later dynasties backing this up, that they actually shipped the lychees while they were still on the branches to keep them fresh.
Whoa, so they shipped whole branches, maybe even entire potted trees. That's incredible. I mean, if they went that far for lychees, what else were they moving like that?
You got to wonder, right? It really gives you a sense of what they could do back then logistically and how important it was to keep the emperor happy and everyone he liked. But hold on. Before we get too carried away with our lychee caravans, we should probably talk about the other side of this debate.
Right, Bashu. What's the argument for the lychees coming from there?
Well, some people think that they might have been growing lychees in Sichuan, part of Bashu. But the real issue is geography. Think crazy mountain paths, narrow walkways on cliffs. Legendary stuff.
You're talking about that Shenonan saying, right? Roads and Shu are harder to climb than to heaven. I always figured those paths were more for mountain goats than people hauling fruit.
Yeah, no kidding. And we're not talking about exaggeration here. There were these narrow walkways called Zandao, barely enough space for two people to pass. Imagine trying to move Lexi's on those. And they got to get to the capital fast.
Okay, yeah, that doesn't sound like a good way to ship delicate fruit. Makes those Lingnan routes look pretty good. So far, Lingnan is winning for me. But I bet this story has a few more twists before we're done.
Yeah, you might be right about that. This next part might change how you see this whole Yang Guifei thing. So there's this other person, always part of this story, a supposed rival for the emperor's attention, Mei Fei.
Oh, right, Mei Fei. And she ties into the lychee thing too, doesn't she? Like some stories say that the emperor favored Yang Guifei with those lychees, over Mei Fei. But is any of that true? Or is that just some ancient gossip?
Okay, get ready for this. Mei Fei might not have even been real.
Wait, seriously, you mean that whole rivalry, maybe even a lychee drama, could be totally made up? Whoa. So what makes historians question whether she really existed?
Basically, it's a lack of evidence. When you look at sources from the Tang Dynasty, like Bai Juyi's poems or official documents, there's nothing about Mei Fei.
So if she wasn't a real person, where did she come from? Was it like the story changed over time, getting more and more dramatic with each retelling?
You got it. The first time Mei Fei shows up is in something called the Mei Fei Zwan, and that wasn't written until the Song Dynasty, way later.
So basically she was added to the story later on. So it makes things more interesting, I guess. It's like, even history can have some fictional characters thrown in, huh? But okay, let's say we forget about Mei Fei. There's still this other big part of Yang Guifei's story we haven't touched on, the An Lushan Rebellion.
Right, definitely. One of the biggest things to happen during the Tang Dynasty, a huge civil war, middle of the 8th century, and it really tied Yang Guifei's name to tragedy.
Can you give a quick overview for those who might not know about this rebellion?
Sure thing. It was led by this Tang Dynasty general, An Lushan. He rebelled against the emperor, and it threw the whole empire into chaos.
And Yang Guifei gets caught up in it, right? She was blamed for it?
Yeah, sadly. There was this big event at Mewaipo during the rebellion. The emperor and his people were running from the rebels, and the imperial guards, they were terrified. So they ended up blaming the whole rebellion on Yang Guifei, like she was the cause of all their problems.
Wow, talk about wrong place, wrong time. But can you really blame a whole rebellion on one person, even if she was an imperial concubine? I mean, these things are usually caused by a lot of different issues, right?
Exactly. Well, Yang Guifei's relationship with An Lushan, who was kind of like a foster son to her, did play a part in how things led up to the rebellion. Blaming it all on her is way too simple. The An Lushan rebellion was the result of a lot of stuff. Political tensions, economic inequality, people wanting military power. It all kind of came together at a bad time.
So even though it's easy to focus on one person, like Yang Guifei, history is almost never that straightforward. There's always more going on. And thinking about the bigger picture, what about this whole idea of extravagance that we've been talking about with the lychees? Could that have affected how people saw Yang Guifei and maybe even led to her being blamed? Like if lychees became a symbol of excess, could that have made people resentful? Maybe even contributing to her fate?
That's a really interesting point. Remember, all the work they put into getting those lychees. It was a very public display of how much the emperor favored her and how wealthy the court was. That kind of extravagance, especially when there were already economic problems, could definitely make people angry, especially those who weren't benefiting from all that luxury.
So those lychees, a sign of love and power at first, maybe they also showed some cracks in the empire's stability.
Exactly. They remind us that even the strongest rulers are part of the flow of history, and that even little things can point to bigger tensions and problems.
So Yang Guifei, this amazing woman who just loved her lychees, became both a legend and someone to blame.
Yeah, her story is a mix of fact and fiction. She shows us that history is rarely black and white. It's all these different stories woven together, each one adding to a bigger, more complex picture.
Man, what a journey. We started with lychee groves, ended up talking about mountain paths, myths, and power struggles in the Tang Dynasty, all thanks to some delicious fruit.
Yeah, it's amazing how one little fruit can have such a big story, right?
Yeah, totally. So before we wrap up our lychee investigation, let's recap. It seems like those lychees Yang Guifei loved probably came from Lingnan. We had those accounts from back then, the whole tribute system. And just thinking about how hard it would have been to move those fruits.
Yeah, all signs point to Lingnan, though I guess we can't completely rule out Bashu.
True, true. And we can't forget about Mei Fei. Turns out she was probably made up later on.
It just goes to show that history is always changing, you know? As we find more evidence, we learn more, and our understanding changes.
Exactly. But one last thing's been bugging me. We talked about all the effort that went into getting those lychees to the emperor, maybe even moving whole trees to keep them fresh. What does that tell us about the Tang Dynasty? About the emperor himself?
That's a good question. I think it says a lot about power and how the emperor wanted to show everyone he was in charge. Remember, the tribute system wasn't just about practicality, it was a show. Showing loyalty, showing off how much control the emperor had. By going that extra mile for Yang Guifei and her lychee craving, he was basically saying, look, I can get anything from anywhere in the empire. It made him look powerful and like he really cared for his people.
It's like a lychee-flavored power move.
Wow.
But could it also be seen as, I don't know, a weakness, giving that much attention to one person, even someone he loved? Couldn't that cause problems with other people in the court? Or even the regular folks?
Yeah, you're right. There's always a risk when you should show that much favoritism.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes across as extravagant.
And with Yang Guifei, we saw how that can backfire. All that resentment, the economic problems, and then the rebellion, it all kind of exploded. So those lychees, they started as a symbol of love and power, but they maybe also hinted at trouble to come.
Yeah, I think so. They remind us that no one, not even emperors, are above history, and that sometimes the smallest details can reveal big problems.
Wow, this has been amazing. Learned so much, not just about Luxies, but about the whole Tang Dynasty, the power struggles in Yang Guifei's story.
It's incredible how one question about a fruit can lead to all this, isn't it? Makes you think about how we understand the past.
Totally. And for anyone who wants to learn more, I'd recommend reading Bai Jui's poems. They really give you a feel for life in the Tang Dynasty court.
And if you're interested in the politics of it all,
Definitely look into the Anlushan Rebellion. It's a fascinating and sometimes sad look at a really important time in Chinese history. As we wrap up our deep dive into Yang Guifei's lychees, I keep thinking, what about our lives? What little things will historians use to tell our story in the future? What will we leave behind?